And at the beginning of it all, the situation of our protagonist, it's not looking good at all, with him surrounded by several giants, all broken, bleeding, but still with a cigarette in his mouth. And that's Park Kang-tae, and they start to notice that it hurts a lot, and so one of them says he'll give him time to smoke his last cigarette, thanks him while lighting it, and that same guy who let him smoke asks to send his brother to rest with a single shot, and the guy is teased to do it, apologizing to Park, and then he says he doesn't know, because he's just doing what he's told to do. And the protagonist thinks that his life has been full of lightning and despair, and of course, he's still attached to that boxing, and he says that was everything to him. He had the height, the power in his punches, and the charisma, and in high school, even they called him the promising prospect in the boxing world. But he says he couldn't ignore the provocations that came his way because he couldn't control his young blood, and so he was marked with blood. And they said he could never box again, and he ended up being banned. And he thinks there must have been other ways, and he could have tried to come back. And at the very least, there was a way to make a living as a boxer, but he thinks it's useless to. Regret now while he's getting stabbed in the stomach. And so he says that if he had one more chance, even if it was just one more time, then he wanted to box again. And this is reminding me of boxing. He's already feeling nostalgic again, and so the protagonist wakes up in another corner, hearing someone talking to him, but he doesn't quite understand. And that person says he's ashamed to be a boxing apprentice like him, and so people keep talking, while the protagonist doesn't understand anything that's happening until he comes back to reality. And some kids are running while the protagonist is lying on the ground and bleeding, and so when he comes to, he's startled by where he is and gets up with everything. Then he questions what that is, because he definitely died stabbed, but in this, that is already Kali. However, the protagonist doesn't know that yet and asked who that is. Then, a few days later, a guy is in front of a line of boys, saying that the losers go to the mine, and says that of course if they win, they stay there, and that's school of boxing apprentices, and says that if they don't want to go to the mine, they should train as if they were going to die, and that is the instructor Nixer. And he tells everyone to listen carefully to the questions he is assigning to them now, and he says that they will be Torres and Maros, Undin and Bizin, Kaizo and Damon, Johnny and Caesar, as well as Lit and Kali. And the pairs called now will have a fight in a week, and the guys that are between the strongest and the oldest start laughing happily, while the youngest and weakest get desperate, and then that they ask the captain if he is telling them to die. And Kali thinks that they are not the inferiors with the superiors, and he can see that guy's intention. And the mine is a dangerous place where many people still die from accidents or lung diseases, and the environment there is even worse than that, with Kali remembering a boy dying of tuberculosis, and he says that he must avoid going to the mine at all cost. But while he travels, someone calls Kali, and Nixer tells the boy to follow him, as he has something to ask him to do separately, and everyone is upset that boy is receiving treatment special again, and they say he's an idiot who can't even keep up with the training. And Nixer goes to him saying that he submitted his name to the owner for release, and the boy asks if he really is, and Nixer notices that he is surprisingly calm, and he says that he doesn't have the physique of a fighter, and his bone structure is small, and the same thing goes for the mine, and he will die soon. And the protagonist thinks that with a body like that, he will die in less than a year. And Nixer says that he recommends to the owner that he be sold to someone else. But then Kali says no, saying that he wants to fight next week. And Nixer asks if he really wants to fight, being surprised by the boy's attitude, and says that if it were like usual, he would have already cried and lamented. But then Kali speaks to the boy completely determined, saying that he will definitely become a boxer, and looking into Kali's eyes, Nixer can see a spark of difference, and saying that if that's the case, he won't say anything else, and when he says in his mind, he should come to him at any moment. And as the boy walks away determined, the teacher wonders if Kali is really sure of what he's doing, but the boy thinks to himself that of course he isn't, and until recently he was a bandit who lived on Earth called Park Kang-tae. So in this new life he is a boy called Kali, and he has been given a second chance, an opportunity to box again, but that body is a fragile body with weak bones, besides that it has little resistance and its growth is delayed, and its punches are very weak. Besides, it seems that Kali has been the victim of a lot of bull, and it must have been because of that fragile body that was not noted. And Kang-tae begins to wonder why he was given a second chance with that body. But then, that guy who is going to adopt with him goes to Kali, and everyone there looks like a bunch of delinquents with at least 30 years on their backs. And the fleet notices that here they come again, and the boy already starts receiving a big punch in the face. Then that fat guy said he never liked that bastard, and the fact that the instructor accepted him as an exception is also a problem, saying that he was bragging that his father was a champion, and says that he should simply die because he is a weak and insignificant bastard, and the only one who seems to think inside those bullies watches from afar, but thinks that Kali is pathetic. but then realizes that he would have been beaten to a pulp if it were the usual Willy. But he finds it strange that the boy is resisting, and Kali starts to get upset about how pathetic the owner of that body was. And that fat guy says that now he only has to see his face once a week, and so Kali says, "That's right, because he will be taken to the mine." And then the fat guy gets even more angry, trying to hit the boy, however, bringing that gigantic hand towards Kali, who is afraid of that, and he notices that that huge fist together with that body is impossible. And so, as the hand approaches, the boy observes closely, wondering how it does it. But in doing so, he observes all the parts of the fist, and notices that it is much slower than normal as it approaches his face. And Kali finally discovers that he is a disciple of the greatest father of humanity. Oh no, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you better watch Shomatsu no Valkyria, because it is very worthwhile, and the boy sees everything slowly enough to be able to dodge that giant's punch, and he narrowly gets out of the way. And even he is surprised that he dodged, and so that other boy is incredulous of what he has seen, because that child did something absurd. And then, the fat guy tries to hit him once more, and the protagonist begins to notice that it is not an illusion, and his blows are very clean and slow. And he begins to realize that he can see the trajectory of the fist going to his face, and so, Kali manages to dodge calmly and in fighter pose, going inside him, dodging all the punches and shortening the distance between the two. And with that, he prepares to strike the counterattack, preparing to attack the place where the guard is down. And with that, he hits the solar plexus of that giant, leaving all three there surprised. But even hitting him, the boy manages to grab Kali by the collar and asked what happened, because he was surprised for nothing, calling Kali weak. And so he manages to give the boy a good beating, leaving him behind, and says that he is a nobody how he's feeling. And so he calls everyone else to leave, and that other one keeps watching the boy, because he saw some potential, but still leaves him falling behind. And Kali on the ground starts to smile, bursting into laughter at what just happened, and he wonders why he hasn't fought until now. Because the thing that is as important as body weight in the box is the coordination of reflexes. The hand-eye coordination that can see every grain of sand and follows its movement, and the reflexes dodge all the punches. And he has a very useful gift, and he thinks that he certainly won't go to the mine, grabbing that possibility, saying he will fight and he will win, thus surviving. How can it happen that you and Adam were brought together in the same character? If I don't like this world here, I'm completely crazy. And so it is said that 20 years ago, there was the Christian revolt of the armored gladiators, and it was a difficult situation, which even regular troops would have difficulty dealing with, and the kingdom, which barely managed to suppress the rebellion later, abolished the slave gladiator system, and that was exactly how the fighters were born, and the fight they used is to destroy an opponent with just their paws, and this provides pleasure to the audience. And this is what he discovered about the fighters of that world. But still, with this type of body, it will be difficult. And Kali is practicing morning exercises with the other children, and he thinks that this makes his destruction easier. And then one of them speaks to Kali, saying that if he is already exhausted, he can run slowly. But the boy continues running the same, coughing and almost vomiting, saying that he is fine, and he thinks that no matter what, he must do everything to survive. And in that place, if he has no strength, he does not will survive. And some time later, they ask everyone to stop. But the boy begins to lose faith, as he could run better, even when he was drunk on alcohol, and Nix are looking at Kali from afar, thinks that that child who always stays behind is now in the middle of the group. And if he had been like that before, they wouldn't have let him go. So he wonders what happened to Kali, and everyone questions why Kali ran with all his strength after being beaten, and they wonder if he isn't acting a little strange after having hurt his head. And in that, Nixer hears the boy talking, asking if Kali hurt his head, asking what they mean. And everyone tells him about how he got beaten up and almost died. And Nixer is surprised that he got beaten up by another group, and the kid says yes. He was beaten harder than usual, and they say they thought he was dead because he was bleeding everywhere from his head, nose, and everything in between. Nixer is surprised that he changed after feeling death, and thinks he needs to wait and see a little more. He starts thinking that first, they should run another 50 laps. So, the afternoon individual training begins, with some of them lifting weights, and others doing bodyweight training. Kali notices that everyone is working hard to avoid going to the mine. He also starts boxing with the straw man, thinking he should work as hard as him. But he starts thinking that that training is not effective. He says it's impossible to cause great damage to an opponent with that body. But then he starts thinking about the jaw, and he needs to aim for the crucial spot like the chin. And the chin is the only point capable of causing great damage, because it will make the whole head shake, and what he needs is to hit it and make them fall. And so he needs to aim perfectly at the chin. And then another guy goes to Kali asking what he's doing now, and the kid says he's in the middle of training, and so one of them says he knows that, asking why he doesn't train with the guys in his training. And Kali says he likes to train in a different way, and the style they're training there is outdated. And so that kid gets mad at the kid, saying that they were fighters before he was even born, saying that there's nothing good and they ignore the veterans. Rejoining Kali knows that, And then Kali says that place boxing is the type that crushes everything. And he says that it's the same thing as a heavyweight fight in his world, and he used to train with that style, but regular training won't help him with that body. And then that veteran goes back to trying to order the kid around, asking him to just grab the trunk and repeat that over and over. But Nixer goes to him asking if he's learning all this from his father, so the kid shakes his head and says that if that's the case, he can use his style in his training camp, and if it is the champion's training style, there is something to learn from him, saying that the boy can maintain this training. The Nixer, looking at the boy, remembers Caveron, he was a champion, but he was not a boxer, wondering if he taught Kali other training methods, and says that in any case, he must have changed after that day, and says that now the boy is very different. This while Kali continues training, hitting his jaw squarely, and in the afternoon he falls to the ground so tired, thinking he's dead, he can't deal with it, because he is weak, and the boy also starts to feel very hungry, saying he wants to eat something sweet, and while he finishes speaking, coincidentally, he looks up and realizes that he is under a fruit tree. He notices that they are apples, so he goes there, grabs the man and starts to eat, thinking that he is much better, but then he gets a fright and hears the voice of a girl asking what he is doing there, and when the girl looks back, he notices that it is a noble lady, and the girl is full of grace looking at him, and he has nothing to say, while she is already starting to feel that he has no explanation, and now he is going to get an apple for her and go down to, because she also wants to eat it, and so he takes the apple to her, and she there writes a lady's mojo, being all happy, saying that he did a good job, but questions if he is not a slave in the training camp, being surprised that the boy does not know that it is the garden of a noble family, saying that if he is caught there will be punished. Then Kali says that she really didn't know, scared to death of the situation she's in, saying that if she gets hurt, he won't be able to compete. Then the girl just smiles, saying that it seems he doesn't know who she is either, and says that her name is Azalea August, saying that her father is Baron Gadolf August, and he is her master. Then asks the boy to tell her his name, and he introduces himself to her as Kali, and so she says that she will pretend she didn't see what he was doing there, because she gave him that apple, and if he gets caught again, she herself will use the whip, and tells him to leave that place quickly before the others see him, and he just thanks the girl with everything he has and gets up and runs away, thinking that it was a close call, and she keeps looking back, noticing that that boy is really small and seems weak to her for a boxing slave, but she just keeps eating and thinking about the boy, remembering his name well. Yes, I'm rooting for the romance with class differences. I look like I'm in a hot pad fanfic, my god, what's happening? And so, Kali, in the middle of the camp, continues training quite a lot, putting a lot of effort into his shadow training, while the other guy notices that he has really changed. He is attracting everyone's attention with his unprecedented training, and that day, he even hit him, and he thinks that if this continues, it will go badly, and he gets angry, throwing the log he was carrying on the ground all balled up. So he asks another guy there if the instructors shouldn't come, and he says that the master called and they left. So he thinks there is no problem in testing the opponents in advance, saying that he has to show them who is boss. He goes after Kali, saying he'll start with that annoying face, trying to grab the kid from behind by grabbing his head, and says he's going to smash him into the ground. But when his hand passes near Kali, he simply ducks out of the way of the attack, turning quickly and aiming directly at Gordola's cheese, but before hitting, he gets all shitty. But Kali stops very close and apologizes, saying he was so focused that he didn't notice him being next to her, asking if she hit his face. And he's scared to death and says Kali didn't hit, and he's fine, and after almost knocking him out, Kali says it was a relief, saying he shouldn't get hurt before the fight very seriously, looking deep into his eyes, scaring Gordola a lot. So he says he'll go back to what he was doing, and he stands there trembling, but at that protagonist thinks he's trash, and when they were in the organization, he saw a lot of guys like him, the ones who try to look tough, making others weak, but there he crushed them all. Meanwhile, another of those slaves continues training hard, doing squats with that wooden log, and he says it wasn't a coincidence. Looking at Gordao and seeing how he almost got beaten, he tells Salik that he looks pale, asking if he's worried, but he says he's not questioning what he's talking about, and says he's lucky to have a weakling like Kali as his opponent, but not even he believes that, and says that nothing could be better than this. Then the other says it's true that Kali has changed, and normally he would be complaining, them getting irritated, and they would just beat him up, but lately, he remembers what the boy said about how he won't live like before, and that's the determination he saw in Kali's eyes. That Salik better not be negligent and let his guard down, and he feels this tremor in the middle of his spine, being surprised that even Torres is paying attention to Kali, and at that Torres just smiles, saying that Kali is still Kali, telling him not to worry and just send that garbage to Minna, and he tries to calm down, convincing himself to act superior, saying that this is what he has to do. It's all boring. Meanwhile, at the Godolf mansion, Godolf himself says that it seems that the preparations for the fight are going well, And Nixer agrees, saying that they even started living in the facilitious training. And Godolph says that on the list there is a guy named Torres, asking if he is not the promising one he mentioned, questioning what he is like. And Nixer says that he has a good balance between strength and agility. In addition, he is aggressive and skillful. He also has a good eye and can overcome his weaknesses. He could even aim for the championship title. And Godolph is happy to see this, but remembers talking to Nixer, saying that there is something he wanted him to do for him. And Nixer asks what it is. And he says that as he knows, the reputation of his training center has fallen a lot. They have been facing financial difficulties and had to send half of the slaves to the mines due to lack of resources, so he wants to invite the commoners as spectators and raise some money. And the commoners must have missed watching the boxers fight too. They will certainly enjoy that. Asking if Nixer can provide them with a fight worth watching, and he says of course, but he thinks Godolph is his master. But he is incompetent. The reason why the training center's reputation fell in the first place is his own fault, because it is Godolph August Baron's greed. And he says that Godolph has been running the training center for 15 years, and in the first 5 years, he managed to maintain it with the boxers he inherited from his ancestors. And August's territory is barren and has little arable land, so he supported his family with the income from the training center. But now that is not enough either. And if only he had not sent the young boxers to the kingdom's boxing tournament 2 years ago, things would be better, because those boxers told Nixer that they would win, but they ended up in a horrible way. And he says that if he had not done that, the training center would have had a better chance of recovering. But during their meeting, Azelia tells her father that she also wants to watch that fight, asking if he can prepare another seat for her, and he is surprised, because she said she hated it because it was barbaric. But she says that sometimes she thinks barbaric things can be good too. But Nixer thinks that this can be very stimulating for her, and she thinks that stimulating means fun, and her father says that she really wants to see this. So she thinks that she is usually not interested in fights like these, but she wants to see for herself how that boy fights. So on the day of the fight near the arena, the protagonist heads there, thinking that the time has finally come, totally determined that the moment has arrived. And before the protagonist fight, Torres manages to defeat his opponent quite easily, and everyone cheers for him going crazy. And in that, Gato says that that was a great fight, and Torres, he educated him well and made him a champion in just 1 year, and Nixer agrees with that. Then the next one is called Sansalite and Kali, and Azelia says that they are all tall and muscular, but that boy named Kali makes her wonder if he thinks he can become a fighter with that small body. But Nixer says that for a fighter, physical form is an absolute factor, because physics is directly related to his strength. However, there is still a way, and he stands face to face against that giant. Then Solite talks to Kali, asking why he doesn't surrender now, because if he fights him until the end, his health will not get better. But Kali says that if his skill is as good as his mouth, he would have already become a champion. So he starts thinking of something, saying he knew this would happen, and he can't find a place to hit him, because the most serious thing there is the difference in physical form, and it won't do much damage if he hits his torso with a punch. And he needs to hit his jaw, and to do that he needs two things. The first is that he tries to hit the boy's face with everything, so Kali gets out of the way, evading his attack. And when he does that, he fulfills the first requirement, which is to make his upper body lean down like now. And Solite tries to hit him with his other hand, but the boy runs away again and tries once more. But Kali continues to dodge calmly, dodging all the blows, and everyone yells at the boy not to keep running away, asking what he's doing, questioning if he's scared, calling the boy scared. But Solite is already suffering from all those movements, and he thinks that being provoked by them, he ended up almost losing all his energy. But he wonders why that idiot Kali is still okay, and he goes after him again with all his strength, wanting to end everything in a single blow, while wondering what is wrong. But that is exactly what Kali wanted him to do, saying it is simple. He made him keep attacking him. That is why he almost lost all his energy faster than he, who was just avoiding his attacks. And secondly, when he loses the war, he should hit the jaw. But while he was trying to hit Solite, and the boy grabs Kali by the shoulder, he is surprised, because that is cheating, and you should not grab in boxing. But even so, Kali ends up getting punched in the ribs, which hurts a good part of them, and the boy already starts screaming, so he thinks he is using real punches. But no one is caring about that, just wanting Solite to knock the boy out. He questions if no one has seen what he is cheating, because he grabbed him with all his fingers and not with his hands, and so he thinks he never thought this would happen, wondering what he should do. But in that, Kali forces himself to get up while the count is still being made, and wonders how many ribs he has broken, but thinks that this is not not the problem now. So the referee goes to him, asking if he can continue the fight. And the protagonist actually agrees, already remembering the boxer he was in the other life, really wanting to finish that guy, saying that he has already died once and will not let that happen again. Then Soulite says that he will regret getting up, but the protagonist thinks that his ribs are already broken and now he cannot move freely, and that is the worst that could happen because Soulite is already coming with another punch in the direction of the boy, and Kali thinks that since everything has already gone to hell, he will do everything to win, putting his own head in Soulite's hand, stopping the punch and going after him, injuring Soulite's hand with his own head, and he is surprised by this. So he says that now that he is surprised, it is his turn to attack, going close to the boy and changing his fighting style for infighter, but Soulite uses the other hand, which is still good to try to hit him, but the protagonist manages to get out of the way of that punch and thinks he needs to avoid it, and at that moment it's his chance and he goes all out, beautifully hitting Soulite's chin, but instead of him falling unconscious, he still manages to hold on and remains standing even with that punch, asking if he thinks just one of his punches will make him fall, but that's really what happens, because even though he thought everything was fine, he ends up falling backwards, and the countdown begins with no one understanding what's going on, and in that, Kali actually manages to win, while everyone questions how this is possible, thinking it's crazy and what happened, because that skinny kid won, so Kali thinks he survived, happy that all his effort paid off, thinking that he won't let his second life slip through his fingers, and he'll make this life worth it. Man, imagine there will be the same rule in all of Kanto, in all of the universe. Go for it. And so, a week later, the slave traders arrived, and half of the apprentices were sent to the mines, and the only exception among the inferior students was Kali himself, as there were only 10 people in the training camp, and the environment was very silent. In an Algus mansion, he is taken inside with Nyx. There he says that the handcuffs will be released when he returns to the training center, and the protagonist is surprised to see Algus mansion, saying that it is the first time he enters there. Then Nyx asks him how his body is, and the boy says that it is fine, but questions why the lady called him to go there, and Nyx tells him that she seems to be interested in him. Oh, the last fight can come, and he goes to Azelia's room, who greets him as a slave, saying that they met again, and the protagonist thinks that it is better for her not to say that again, as it seems suspicious. So she tells Nyx that he could wait. They're outside, so he finds it strange, but agrees, and the girl tells Kali to sit there, but he says he'll be fine standing, and she ends up accepting because he wants to stand, and she doesn't go against his will, and he questions why she called him. Then she realizes he's very impatient, throwing an apple at him, saying he seems tense, telling him to eat some fruit first to ease his temper, and after throwing the apple inside, full of hunger, the girl watches him and says she called because she has something to ask him, asking if he knows that slaves have no right to refuse, and he notices that that lady is hard to read, telling her that he knows that yes. Then she says he was incredible in the last fight and came out well with those thin arms, and managed to knock him down in a single blow, saying that her father said it was luck and coincidence, but it wasn't. And he notices that the girl is intelligent and picks things up quickly, and Solik's punch was a coincidence, but he says it shook his head, so she asks about it, and he says yes. And he says that if you hit the chin precisely with your fist, your head will shake, so you lose control of your body temporarily. And of course, this happens when the impact is strong enough, so she asks if he aimed an attack, and he says yes, and the girl likes that, saying he did very well, saying she's eagerly awaiting his next moves, telling him to keep winning and become a professional boxer, because if he becomes a champion, he will be able to become a free person. And with that, the boy returns to the training center and is finally released. Then he thinks about being a free person while going to the afternoon training. Meanwhile, Thor is there training once again, squatting with that wooden log, and he thinks that his goal is that he will certainly achieve freedom. He remembers his childhood when they told him that he will become a very strong king. He was 14 years old at the time, and Nixer says that if he wasn't, he wouldn't have taken him from being a farm worker, saying that he has a very good physique and a good spirit, telling the boy to work hard so he can become a champion and a free person. And he thinks that he hated this guys like Kali, who do pathetic things every day without a purpose, but suddenly he changed, defeated Solid, and survived. And he says that he never knows what will happen in the world. And lately, they wonder if Kali isn't thinking too highly of herself, talking to Torres, asking what about they give a lesson to the boy, because of that cowardly bastard, Solid went to the mine, and he tells Torres that they are going to beat Kali, asking what he thinks, but he tells them to get out of there because they are disturbing his training. But Manji asks if he doesn't want to go with him, saying that it is boring, but the protagonist says that if he wants to change himself, he will not bother him, and he was just irritated by his request. So meanwhile, Kali is training alone and thinks that his ribs are finally completely red, and they are surprised that he started exercising around the time he recovered and gained muscle mass too. But then that idiot kid goes to the protagonist, saying that he hasn't seen him for a long time, and Kali thinks to himself that he was wondering when he would show up, and that idiot asks if it was fun to win easily. So the protagonist tells him not to start, saying that it will be a nuisance if he gets hurt now, but with that he tells Kali not to be afraid, because he will go easy on him. But Kali denies it, repeating once again, saying that it will be a nuisance if he gets hurt. But the kid decides to go after Kali, who quickly dodges that ridiculous punch he gives, stepping back, and he keeps trying to hit him, but Kali dodges each of his punches and ends up hitting him too, just like he did with Solid in the same way, hitting the chin directly and knocking that idiot out. And he says that he must have thought he won by pure chance, but in fact, they are just idiots who don't see the obvious. And he talks about that high height and impressive reach, and says that it is like facing someone with a spear and punches that do not allow any approach, and the long reach is completely disadvantageous. But Manny has a wide movement and a curved swing, unable to take advantage of the reach, and with that, he can easily attack while defending himself. And he says that he is just a big punching bag, continuing to hit Manus time after time. So he thinks that he should not give him any chance and no opening, and continues to hit him several times, keeping the pressure. But in that, the other two hit the protagonist, trying to join him. But Kali dodges calmly and notices that it isn't a 3 against 1. Realizing that Manus is tired, but still has Swole Ultis to help him, and Manus tells him not to get cocky with the blow he got by chance. But the protagonist says that he is coming with 3 because he can't do it alone. But with that, he tells the boy to be quiet, returning to attack Kali. But while he defends himself from Manus, another one grabs him from behind, and he says that they ignore Ultis, so they need to humiliate other people to maintain their self-esteem. And with that, Kali is thrown to the ground, and he thinks that looking like that, his own past self, wasn't much different. But then Torres appears there, saying that he won't be able to take it, saying that if he's going to lynch someone, he should do it right, and he asks if he needed help in a 1 versus 1 fight. Then Manus talks to Torres, asking why he's on Kali's side. He says that he's not on anyone's side and is just angry with the bastard who was defeated by Kali and is acting recklessly. But Manus screams, saying he wasn't defeated and he just let his guard down for a moment. But in that, Torres orders him to fight again, saying he'll be the judge. So Manus sees that there's not much he can do, asking Kali to go for it, asking if he's scared. But the kid already gets up in an absurd way, full of hate in his lungs, and Manus wonders if that's really Kali, terrified of the boy. So when he goes for it, Kali manages to dodge each of his punches and says that his slow punch would be strange if it hit him, and lands several punches on Manus' ribs. He tries to attack from the other side, but Kali manages to evade each of the punches, dodging perfectly, and he says that he's wasting movements while entering his guard, saying that all he sees are flaws, hitting Manus straight in the chin. He starts to realize that shit happened, being knocked out and thrown to the ground, and Torres notices that he acts like an experienced boxer, saying that he has the potential since his father is a champion. But in that, Kali talks to Torres. He questions what it is. Then Kali says that he thought Torres hated him, asking why he helped. He says he has no reason to explain, simply leaving, telling the boy to get out of his field of vision. So after that, no one challenged Kali. They silently acknowledge that Kali is part of the apprentice boxers, finally leaving the boy alone. And in the guest reception room of the August Apple, Nixer learns of an upcoming fight and goes to his master, saying that he told him to refuse this fight and he only has novice boxers on his side. But August asks if he can't, saying that anyway, Dorman didn't bring any real boxers, saying that he can beat them if he does well. And in that, he says that there are 2 ways. He must prepare the best members in fight or send a scapegoat to the next round, and August just says it's an order, telling him to choose the 3 best in fight, and he wants to see Baron Dorman lose his temper. But the one who's losing his temper is Nixer himself, asking how much more he needs to destroy the training center before he realizes what he is doing, and if veterans like Torres can't fight anymore, training camp will end. So he thinks he has for days, and he must prepare and train them for the competition. No, and then Torres, Manus, and Kali are called, and he says he decided to train the 3 of them and put them in a fight against Dorman. He then says he chose them because they are what he and the other instructors believe to be the best. Torres asks the instructor if he thinks this team will win. He then remembers his master saying it's an order, telling him to take those 3 and win by all means. Nixer says that the 3 of them have a ridiculously small chance of winning. Manus is scared to death, wondering if they will die if they lose. Nixer says that the master won't let them die because they are his property, but the opponents can break their bones if they want. Kali asks if they called him because they believe they can win. Nixer says yes, and says they will start, telling Torres to try sparring with the other instructors repeatedly, and his practice is to gain more experience in 3 days. Meanwhile, Manus tells him that he must find a way to deal with his fear, telling him to train his mind. And he says that he only chose Kali because of her recently good looks, but he has nothing prepared for the boy, so he doesn't know what to do with Kali, and in that he says that he will need someone to help with his training. Meanwhile, Torres is getting beaten in training to gain combat experience, and the instructor tells him not to hold back, saying that his opponents are experienced fighters, but they are also human, and no matter how strong they are, when they hit they will fall. And he tells him to act as if he were the winner, even if his legs are shaking and he is about to collapse, and says that he has to make the opponent feel that he is an immortal human being right in front of him, then says that they should take a break and continue later. While Torres looks at Kali, noticing that he is training alone, he questions what the boy is training, but in that his training partner asks if Kali is going crazy, and that is Valkyria, so the boy tells him to just do it, and apologizes if he hurts, throwing a rock in Kali's direction. Then he manages to escape the stone, thrown at close range, dodging it, and he says he got the mistake right. And that is one of the keys to modern boxing, and no matter how he trains in those 3 days, there is no way for those muscles to grow. He thinks about the movement of his feet, the dodging, and his reflexes, saying that he will train them, and the most important weapon for him now is this. And they continue like this until sunset, with him throwing the stones at the protagonist, until Kali catches one with her hands, saying that that is all for today, training his reflexes more and more. And this is also training for boxers, but inside the dormitory of the training center, everyone there is angry with Kali and Manus tells him to let go, while Kali asks what happened. With everyone they're broken from head to toe, and one of them says he won't forgive that bastard. Then Kali asks Manus what the hell is going on. He also doesn't really know what happened, but Kali tells him to tell the truth, because this seems like a serious situation now. Then Manus says that the fighters from Dorman's training camp just passed by, and they beat him mercilessly because they were angry about the fight, but there were no serious injuries, just bruises. So it's difficult for the instructors to deal with this, and Manus says that they will be completely defeated, but they are full of anger at Dorman, wanting to grab a dagger and go after him, saying that they will kill him. But at that moment, Nyx arrives there asking what they are up to, very angry, also asking if they are stupid to hit one of them, and says that if they lose, it's over, questioning if they think they lost. And those who have already been beaten continue to be beaten and die of hatred. But at that, Nyxa tells them to become stronger than them from now on, and so Kali says that she finally realized. After training and living with, he says he's created a bond with those guys, and from now on, the fight won't just be an event for the citizens, but a fight for proud and rich masters. So he thinks it's a battle between the training camps. And so, for days later, at the Albus Arena, everyone is there to watch the fights. The stands are packed, they're even shaking with so many people, and half the state's population must have gone there. Then Nyxa says he's giving them herbal tea, saying it will relax and give them strength. If they think they're going to lose, they should raise their fingers high, and it's better to have their pride hurt than to die. He says the order of fight is Kato, who is also Montes, Torres, and Kali. So he tells Kato to get ready while the kid almost gets lucky, asking Nyxa to wait for him. Kato isn't eager, he's first. He says it's like that, telling him to go ahead. But then Kali calls Kato, asking him to wait. He tells him the boy speaks quickly, and Kali tells the boy not to let the opponent get close to him, asking if he understood. But Kato calls him an idiot, asking what he is saying. After all, he has to stay close to be able to hit him. But Kali gets very angry and tells him to listen, and with that Kato is called to the sand, while everyone is cheering for him, also for August boxers. And he becomes more and more frightened by this. But it gets worse when his opponent enters the ring. Guy with a lot of experience, full of scars all over his body, and much more imposing than the skinny boy, and in that he calls the boy a child, saying that having long arms and legs does not necessarily make him a strong person. And with that, Kato already starts to tremble in front of him, showing that he is afraid. So Torres thinks that it is over because Kato is shitting himself in fear around that guy, and the protagonist realizes that things might not go very well. Meanwhile, everyone notices that he is tall, but he is still a child, with Doraemon asking if it is not true for August, but he says that it has not even started yet. Pissed off at Doraemon, who is totally right, and gets angry at Nyxar. After all, should have sent someone who can win. And when the fight starts, the Doraemon fighter goes after him quickly, trying to hit Kato right after the bell rings, but the boy manages to get out of the way, dodging all of that fighter's attacks, but still scared. And with that, everyone tells the boy to become a man, telling him to attack and not just dodge, asking if they came there just to see something like that. But with those screams and the fight, Kato gets more and more nervous, and he thinks there's not much he can do in that situation. So the fighter asks how long he's going to keep running away, and Kato thinks he's going to hit his head, putting his hand right in front to try to stop that punch. But while he defends himself on top, the fighter hits him right in the stomach, so he thinks he's falling for silly tricks like that, saying the boy is pathetic, hitting Kato again right in the face. taking him to the ground, and the whole team gets really nervous because of that. And when the boy falls, the audience doesn't stop booing, asking if this is boxing, and telling him to get up quickly, because if he's going to fight like this, he must just die. Then Kato starts to think that there's no way he can win, wondering how he would do it. But he thinks that if he just gives up, everything will be fine. But something doesn't like how things are going, and looks at the boy with a very murderous look. Then he gets up, thinking that if he loses without landing a single blow, he will be expelled from the training center, once again trying something. Then Dariamon's fighter is surprised that he still has the will to fight, but Kato tells him to shut up, saying that he is also a boxer, so he thinks he should calm down, doing what the instructor told him. Then he remembers Nyx, laughing until he says that he heard about him losing here. Questioning him if it's true, he confirms it, saying that he already knew. But then Nyx asks him if he has ever stopped to think about why he lost. He says that he hasn't thought about it, and Nyx tells him that he didn't see it for himself, but he's sure it wasn't a fight he should have lost, because he has an advantageous condition as a boxer. He's tall and has long arms and legs, and it seems he didn't use what he has well, and he says he must have lost his cool and become impatient, and that's why he let Kali get close to him, and if he does that in that fight, he will definitely lose. So he remembers that he has to stay calm, putting his head in place, and thinks he shouldn't be afraid and not let his opponent get close. And when the fighter starts coming towards him, he thinks he should intercept the attack, and he actually manages to hit Dariamon's fighter right in the face as he was coming towards him, and with that everyone on his team starts to think the boy is going the right way. And Kith himself doesn't believe he actually landed his first attack, and with that attack hitting, the boy's morale goes up, and he keeps hitting that fighter, not letting him get close, and the crowd goes crazy. And Kali thinks he's so flexible and fast because he eliminates unnecessary stress on his muscles, so his attack is more threatening. And compared to the fight ahead, the boy has evolved a lot, and in this he starts to look like a praying mantis in the middle of the field, as fast as one. Then the fighter thinks he is ready to hit him. Booth is tall, he can't find the perfect angle, and it's also difficult just defending himself, and if he manages to hit him harder than he hits, that's his end. He goes all out for Kith, trying to hit the boy's chin, but he manages to dodge it just by moving his body. Then he thinks he's caught him by throwing a punch, right while he's within reach of his long arms, once again putting Doraemon's fighter to lie down. At that, he gets scared and looks back at Nixa, who agrees that he did a good job. With that, the boy finally manages to win a fight. Everyone wonders what happened. Albus starts to mock Doraemon, saying that his apprentice won, asking if Doraemon sees what these apprentices are made of. The nobleman next to him is dying of rage, while Albus, who is actually a complete incompetent, is full of himself. He says that he still has 2 more rounds to go, but Albus tells Valkyria to say something to him. Nixa says he doesn't care if they die, they should just win, and send the loser to the mine. And Valkyria tells this to Nixa, who really doesn't like her master's shitty attitude at all. So he asks if the two are listening, saying he said he'll send the losers to the mine, but the master is drunk now, so he'll persuade him later. And if they're in danger, they should surrender immediately. But Torres says there's no need, because he'll win. And the protagonist sees that one over there is the fighting spirit they all should have, but that guy named Molga. He thinks they're on a different level than the last fighter, and with Torres facing his opponent, it looks like a father-son fight. And he says he'll give the boys some advice, saying it's too different, and if he doesn't want to get hurt, he should give up now. But Torres isn't intimidated in the least by that crazy guy, telling him to shut up and go for it. And right at the beginning, Torres leaves on top of him, and the two exchange blows at the same time, with one hitting the other in the face. And at that moment, Malado starts to go down, but Molga hits the boy again, throwing him back. But Torres remains standing and hits him again, and they continue exchanging blows in a pure face-to-face exchange to see who will resist the most. And at that moment, Torres stops, wipes the blood from his nose, and asks if Molga has come to his senses, and thinks that even if he feels like he is going to collapse, he needs to act as if he is winning. And Molga says that it is like facing an active soldier, saying that he will take back what he said, trying to hit the boy with a cross. But Torres gets out of the way, managing to dodge, and thinks that swing is slow, but realizes that he was not trying to do just that. And at that moment, Molga begins to remember his past, and 18 fighters have already fallen before his fist. And even though he failed to become an 11 fighter, he prides himself as a veteran fighter. But that brat over there who is fighting him, a measly apprentice, is very strong, and even receiving all the punches possible, he managed to return with the best strength possible. They ask themselves why the boy doesn't fall, and everyone goes crazy watching that fight because they are like wild boars, and tell them to keep fighting. And the protagonist realizes that he is the most surprisingly powerful barbarian and is on a different level. And with that, Torres manages to hit once more, drawing even more blood from Molga's nose and making him fall before his fist. And so the count begins, and Torres finally manages to defeat the veteran, and Nixer tells him that it was an excellent match, meeting the audience's expectation, but he is in bad shape after the fight and very tired. Then Kali says that he did well, but Torres talks to Kali, saying that the honor of every victory is in her hands. but the protagonist says that there is no problem because he will end this soon, leaving all determined, quite contrasting with his skinny physique. And then they say that the final fighters are entering, and one of them is Verito, and the other is Kali, so everyone wonders what they are thinking, because that blonde boy seems smaller than him son, smaller than Valkyrie's bench, and starts rooting for Kali. And Azalea is surprised, asking Valkyria if he knows him, and he says yes, saying that he helped him with his training, and it was training to dodge rocks being thrown at him, and she is surprised by this. Doraemon thinks that this was ridiculous, because he has to admit that he let his guard down, but that brat seems very easy to beat, and in that something is said that is clear, saying that he would need at least one victory to save his reputation. But Azalea says that she will be waiting, so this time too, thinking about what Kali will show him, and the protagonist comes face to face with that veteran, which is double or triple its size, and Verito apologizes to him, saying that he can't let the boy get away unharmed, charging at Kali at an absurd speed, scaring the boy. And he says that he's faster than he thought, and the boy steps back, moving away from him, and says that this distance is dangerous. And when he notices that he's being cornered, he thinks that the guy is blocking his movements, is planning to finish him in the corner, so he thinks he has to avoid this at all cost, throwing punches at Verito. But he notices that the boy's punches are very weak, and everyone tells him to fight properly, because the opponent is just a kid, and 13 wins under his belt, asking where Verito's punches are, and in that he notices that the audience isn't liking it very much, and Kali says that she thought he wouldn't let him get away easily, asking why he doesn't just try to throw one punch, and in that he notices that the boy is using the audience, and he doesn't know what he's trying to do, but that's just accelerating his defeat. So he prepares a punch stronger than he can throw, and Kali realizes that he got what he wanted and the punch is coming. And when Verito throws the punches, the boy manages to dodge calmly, escaping each one of them without being hit, and everyone is surprised, and Verito too, asking if he really is an apprentice, and what kind of gift the boy has. And at that, Doraemon starts to curse his boxer, saying that he can't land punches, not even a weak child, saying that he will kill this shit later. And Zelia thinks to herself that he is not just a normal apprentice, ordering him to show To that he is not an ordinary fighter. And when Verito goes all out for you, her thinks he always starts with the right hand, and the boy manages to dodge it, and then he notices that he goes for a left hook and a right uppercut. And he remembers when he was training with Valkyria, and the boy asked him if it's really okay for him to keep dodging, and the protagonist tells him to look at him, asking if he wants him to take all the hits, because one is enough for him to knock him down. And Valkyria tells him that he's not wrong, but he can't win if he can't land any hits. However, the protagonist says that dodging is buying time, and Valkyria asked what time is for, and he says it's time to observe the opponent's movements and analyze their patterns. After he manages to evade for a while, he notices Verito's foot moving to prepare the next move, and also analyzing his shoulders, chest, and waist, and moving to prepare the next punch, and deduce the pattern to counterattack. He says he doesn't know if his glass-like body will hold up, but with his experience and sharp vision, it's possible, and the boy manages to quickly dodge, preparing the counterattack, hitting Verito square in the face, landing in a sticky mess immediately after the single punch. But he manages to connect a second one, knocking him down, so everyone is surprised by that. And Valkyria realizes that everything Kali said was true, that he was reading the pattern. As Verito falls to the ground, he wonders what happened, and Kali prays to the heavens that he shouldn't get up, as his hand couldn't support his weight, and he's feeling the pressure of that counterattack. He says he can use his right hand one more time, but Verito drops to the ground and gets up, pissed at the boy. Kali thinks he's screwed. Verito calls the boy a rat, saying he's going to crush him, grabbing a handful of sand and charging at the boy, thinking that no matter how fast he is, throwing sand in his eyes will be a disaster. When he throws sand, the protagonist is indeed blinded, and Verito says it's over when they can't see. Then Azelier says he's overpowered, but Dorame says it's his fault for letting that happen, and it's normal for sand to get into your hands when they fall. And the protagonist says he can't get used to boxing there at all. While he is blinded, he ends up getting punched right in the face by Verito and is thrown away. And Verito stands there full of swagger, saying that the beating he took from the protagonist hurts like hell. But the boy gets up after that punch, and each one stays in a corner of the arena. Then Verito goes after him again, saying that it is the end, but the protagonist thinks he needs to remain calm as he approaches. He thinks that the analysis has already been done and can see how he is approaching, even without looking, and says that he always starts with the right punch. And with that, he manages to dodge once more. Then he goes with a punch to the right side and manages to hit Verito's face again, mistreating his nose again, and with that the boy manages to take him down, winning the match despite his cheating. Then Zelia is surprised, because the boy still managed to win. And he says that all the path he took to get there was worth it for him to feel that. And Nixer goes to the boy, being very surprised by the three because they actually won. And so after the fight, Baron Dorman left the territory as if he was fleeing, and Gadolf rewarded him with a barbecue, and they all ate and enjoyed themselves throughout the night. And so 2 months later, the harvest season arrived. But Kish, while working, harvesting the sweet potatoes, asks if they think they are farmers. But at this, the protagonist tells him not to complain so much, saying that this isn't a way good for the muscles to grow. And so the boy has already changed a lot in the meantime. And with Kali's body going through those changes, he has gained both strength and muscles. One of the farmers is thanking the boy for all his work, telling him to feel free to get some, and he thanks him. But at this, the farmer speaks to one of them, asking if they are going to Duke Wister's Autumn Festival. But the protagonist has no idea what that is. But Kichu says they won't, because they are only apprentices, so they can only leave after another year, and they question if it is really, saying that they would like to see their matches again. But the protagonist asks what is interesting about the Autumn Festival, and Kichu questions if he is stupid, and says that the highlight of the Autumn Festival is boxing, and his master is one of Duke Wister's vassals. And he questions if he doesn't know that Dorman and Ald are competing against each other under the Duke's patronage. And of course, Dorman is currently ahead. And the protagonist finally understands, and Kichu talks to him, saying that he must have taken a real blow to the head back then to be able to forget. But the protagonist questions if it is a year, and meanwhile, in the reception room, Nixer is talking to the master, asking for just 1 more year, and says that they were prepared for the match last year, but luck also accompanied them. But at that, the master says that he has a letter from Duke, and says that he heard about his victory last time, and as much as he wants to give them more time, Duke Wister wants to see those 3 apprentices. And if he doesn't accept, things will go wrong. And Nixer says that Duke Wister is one of the 5 greatest dukes in the kingdom, and there's no way he can deny it. So he just understands, and something is said to him. They will leave the day after tomorrow, telling him to be prepared. And from now on, those 3 are official boxers, ordering them to be branded. And apparently this branding business isn't very cool. And the protagonist is really branded with a hot iron and thinks it still hurts. But he can still fight even with that thing, so he goes to the carriage, but he's walking next to it, and Azelia from inside congratulates the boy for becoming an official boxer and says that it's funny he receives the honor of walking next to a Lordran. It was really good, right? Really good. There are a lot of horses, and you put the 3 people there to ride. There are several guys riding alone on the horse. What would it cost for one of them to go there? People. And the protagonist asks if she is talking to him, and she says yes, it is him, and he thanks her. And at that, kid is all silly looking at the girl, and she goes back to talking to Kyle, assuming he has certainly changed, telling him to make sure he shows off his efforts at the festival. And at that, kid asks if his lady isn't beautiful, and talks about that intense red hair, seductive lips, and everything more, saying that he can tell she was beautiful from afar. And the protagonist really thinks about the girl, noticing that she is really beautiful, but Torres tells him to watch his tongue, unless he wants to be punched to death by his master. And in this, he doesn't quite understand, but he asks since when Torres cares about him, telling Kyle to get it, saying that the truth is that Torres likes her. But he gets very angry and starts hitting Kid, and he ends up getting a scolding telling them to be quiet. And already at night, they say they will rest there. But Kid doesn't like it very much, because since they are using the mountain path, he is being bitten from all sides. But Kyle is surprised, because who would have thought that the bridge collapsed because of the rain, and he thinks that if they encounter bandits, it's over. And in this, Augusto says that the sun sets faster in the mountains, telling Zelia to go to sleep first. He says that they will leave as soon as dawn, but the knights say that the bandits may be hiding around their bush, and since it's harvest time, it would be best to leave as soon as possible. But Augusto tells him that he's paying his salary to fight bandits. But while they're arguing, protagonist sees that there are bandits very close to them, hidden in the bushes, and he feels their presence. So he tells Augusto that something moved there in the bushes, saying that it would be better to leave now, and he is surprised, because a bratty slave dares to interrupt him. But in that moment, one of his knights ends up dead, with an arrow in the middle of the face and several other arrows right in their direction. So he runs away while the knights step in front, stopping the arrows. That they were warned by the boy, so they send to protect the Baron. And Nixa calls all his boxers near the trees so they can hide. Then they notice that the arrows have stopped, but the bandits have appeared, and there are many of them. And Kidio says that the soldiers will not be enough, saying that if they release the gems, they will fight together, and all of them. So Nixa really decides to do this, freeing the boys, and tells them to only fight with others who approach, and their priority is to protect the Baron and the lady. But then a bandit goes towards Kidio, and the protagonist quickly puts his hand around a chain to stop that sword, and manages to knock out the bandit before he does anything. And then they tell them not to stand there and go for it. And the two, seeing how angry the boy is, think he is completely insane, and decides to do the same to be able to defend himself, saying that he is definitely not normal, and Kali thinks he needs to find Zelia, and while he is running, the Baron is throwing a tantrum, and the knights say he has to leave now, and the protagonist notices that it seems he is safe, but Augusto shouts to him saying that Zelia is still inside the carriage, and he notices that it's shit because someone is approaching, and a bandit is running in front of him, and he tells him to stop. But the bandit turns to the boy and stabs him with a sword. But the protagonist manages to defend himself using that chain. But even stopping the attack, he notices that the man is very strong and is thrown back, and in that he opens the carriage door. Coming face to face with Zelia and hearing her scream, the protagonist realizes that he really things went wrong and he wasn't able to get there in time. And then that bandit who went to the girl comes out with her in his arms, and she's apparently passed out. And Kali, seeing this, screams at Zelia, but the bandit starts running, taking the girl, and Kali goes after her while Augusto continues just giving orders and being protected. And when the boy goes after them, the man goes to the edge of a river. Then Kali tells him to stop, saying that he has nowhere to go now, asking the man to let her go. But then he drops the girl on the ground and says that Kali seems to be a slave, pulling his sword, asking why the boy doesn't join them. Then Kali asks why he's recruiting him, pointing a gun at him, saying that if he follows her, he'll probably end up dead like all the bandits. Then he says that he ended the conversation preparing to kill the boy, but Kali notices that that's a rehearsed move, noticing that he's a gladiator, and he says that he is one with 40 victories. And the protagonist notices that a direct confrontation will be bad, and what he can do is fight or dodge. And the boy steps back without being hit by the sword, and right after that he goes for it. And so the gladiator is surprised that he passed and is invading his space, but he not only passes through his space, but goes after Azare, grabbing the girl and running away. He says he thinks he should apologize because why fight if he can simply run, grabbing the girl and throwing himself into the water. And the gladiator, seeing that, just waits up there. But then a while later, Kali is calmer. After all, his lady is breathing, and she wakes up scared, wondering where he is. Then he realizes that she finally woke up and tells her the whole situation, telling her to make sure to remember that man with the eye patch that he hit. Meanwhile, Kali is happy that he could finally use the camouflage technique he learned in the army, and she says that anyway he should light the fire or something because she is freezing. But he says that they can't because all the trees are wet to be lit, and that man can find them. And she thinks he is useless if he is shivering all over. But then he looks at her situation, thinking that her wet clothes are decreasing her body temperature. So he says that if she wears wet clothes, she will catch a cold, saying that she will be warmer if she takes them off. But the girl gets all red and nervous, asking if he is telling her to take her clothes off, calling him a pervert. Look, I've seen a berserker, and there was a similar development, and the gut tightens. I don't know. Kali, I think you want someone. I'm finding this little talk, I don't know. But he tells her not to misunderstand. He just thought it was better than dying of cold, and says he will stay back, and she continues calling him cheeky. But he says he has to protect her from now on, because if something happened to her, he would be killed on the spot. But then she tells him not to look back, because if he does, she will stab him with her blade, and he just agrees. However, while she is taking off her clothes, he begins to be affected by the effects of puberty. Then he asks her if she's better now, when the girl finishes taking off her clothes, and she's still shaking, but a little less. But he thinks Wo is also freezing, and bets that her lips are already blue, and he says there are just solutions. Either she uses his body to warm herself, or they keep their bodies close. But she says she doesn't need it and is already fine. But Kali starts to think they're next to her, and she finds this strange. So he gets up and apologizes, and she questions what he's talking about, but he comes closer and grabs her arm and says that, as he said before, they have to stay close because he heard that soldiers during the winter march do this to keep warm, and he knows she doesn't like it, but he will die if something happens to her. And the girl ends up agreeing and letting this happen. Well, they stay together until tomorrow, the next day, and after sunrise, they get ready and leave the cave. Then he notices that the area seems safe, asking if she can walk, and she asks why, questioning if he will carry her, and he notices that she is still angry. But to make matters worse, her stomach starts to rumble, and she gets even more nervous, saying which he can't help, since they haven't eaten anything since last night. So he looks ahead, seeing a river, asking her if she said she had a knife, and he goes over there, asks her to start opening the fish in front of the girl, and she gets all disgusted while he offers her raw fish. But when she approves, she sees that it's not so bad, and he says that if they continue upstream, they should meet up with the people. But at this, she questions what they will do if they encounter the bandits first. But he says he will leave it to their luck. Then she notices that he is being responsible, but he says he is always doing his best, so all that remains is for luck to accompany them. But the girl begins to realize that he is not like a slave nor a boy, and is sure that he is not literate and educated, but it is comforting to be around him, so she thinks he is an enigma, but thinks this out loud, asking if she said anything. But she just tells him to pay attention to the path, and where he is stepping. Meanwhile, that mercenary on top of several of the Knights of Outpost says that he is going to sell that girl for a good amount and gets pissed off with that brat, saying that he will finish him off if he sees him again. But then he hears something and soon lies in wait, and it turns out that it is the protagonist and her. And he says that they should be able to meet with the soldiers soon. And she says that it is the third time he has said that, and for the soldier, this ends up being a godsend opportunity, and so he goes after them, because it is very good to see him again, and the protagonist is already nervous with her, seeing that man once again, and he asks if the boy will leave empty-handed, saying that it is very stupid of him, because after killing him, he will take that deliciousness behind him, so the protagonist already feels that he is too evil, and he says that before selling him, he asks why the two don't spend time playing, and the girl is horrified by his words, and the protagonist says that he has big dreams, asking who said he will hand her over, and thinks that the chains fell into the river, so he has nothing to defend himself, and the gladiator gets angry with the boy, saying that he will cut him first. Then Kali sees the sword passing very close to him several times, with his hair being cut and almost being torn in half. Then the gladiator, he notices that the boy is fast, but asks how long he can hold out, almost ripping Kali's head off over and over again with his attacks, until, tired of using the sword, he headbutts the boy, throwing him away. When Kali falls to the ground, the girl starts yelling at him to be careful, and tells him that the sword is coming again, but he manages to dodge it very quickly, avoiding getting his head pierced. He rolls on the ground and gets up away from the gladiator, thinking that swords have higher mortality rates with a longer range, but he already knows how to win, and he thinks that fighters with long limbs, or weapons and blades, he knows well how to win, because if he wants to finish everyone, not just his fists, he has to advance into their attack area. Then the mercenary says that he is advancing straight to his death, and the girl is very surprised by how he is doing things, using boxing to defeat that armed man. So he enters his defense and hits that guy right in the middle of the rib, greatly irritating him. A gladiator who loses his cool, attacking in every way possible, telling the boy not to think he's a fool because he landed a few punches. And the protagonist thinks that what he needs now is something different, and in doing so, he ends up getting his nose cut, earning a scar right in the middle of his nose. Then he says that he now needs courage to face a blade face to face, and strategies to advance, leaving again, dodging the blade, and going to the gladiator's blind side, where he uses the eye patch. The gladiator realizes that the boy is using his blind spots, and ends up hitting him in the chin. Once more, when the man is thrown up, the protagonist grabs one of his arms, now using judo, throwing him up the tree, and continues beating, pulling teeth, elbowing, and everything he can, until he reaches his limit, and as the man is lying there, almost fainting, only he is left lying there and the sword dropped. So he thinks he's going to kill the boy, but Zelia goes to him, taking the sword, standing up, ordering him to pay for his crimes, killing that man. And she says that 1,000 deaths will not be enough. And the protagonist is very scared by the girl's action, saying that she is certainly not a typical lady. I was not expecting that. I thought he would be in that dilemma of kill or not kill, something I would not expect much from him, especially since he is the Yakuza. But the girl goes there and finishes him, very angry, and after they take care of the leader, the soldiers find him, and they're saved, late obviously, and Nixerwin finds the boy, says that he was lucky, because if he were taller, he would have gone blind. But Kali says that now he looks more masculine. But Gadov goes to the protagonist, talking to Kali, thanking him for rescuing his daughter, and Kali is surprised that the noble is thanking the slave. But he says that he only fulfilled his task. But Gadov tells him to rest, saying it's an order, saying he has that right, and now those guys over there, they are scoundrels who don't do the job a young warrior did, and says that anyway. He managed to beat a gladiator, and that's splendid, asking if he used secret techniques. And he says that having a weak appearance has its advantages, because the opponent is always with his guard down, and after he rescues Azalea, and to prove his loyalty, he returned to the other two apprentices. Then Kitty tells him not to lie, asking how he would beat a gladiator, so they were allowed to travel by carriage the rest of the way, and they finally arrived at the Worcester Hall. And arriving there, the Duke greeted them quite happily, saying that it had been a long time since he had seen something like this. I don't know what I was calling him, but I don't think it was that. I'm confusing the names. And he tells the Baron that it must have been a long journey, but he just thanks the Duke for welcoming him. And he talks to Azalea, saying that she is there too, saying that the girl really looks like his mother. While she is greeting the Duke, the protagonist is behind her with a different outfit, and remembers when she gave that outfit to him, and she says that one of her servants is sick, so he will serve her until then, and says that he is more used to this, because all the others are muscular and look aggressive, so they are not suitable to be her servant. He thinks he should train more, because it's not cool to be called skinny. So, all the nobles sit down at the table to have dinner and talk. Wister says that Augustus won all 3 matches in the last boxing match, saying that he heard that they were all apprentice boxers. He says that, without wanting to brag, but they recently became official boxers. Wister is proud, because it was expected of his training camp. As they continue talking, Zelia doesn't pay much attention, getting all bored until she goes to her father to talk to him. She asks Kali to follow her, and the boy agrees. And already in the middle of the city, she says that she would die focused if she stayed there for another minute listening to that litany. She says that she never wanted to be there in the first place. She asks why the old men don't talk about interesting topics. However, he says that she doesn't seem well. She says that her father is obsessed with finding her a husband. She asks if it's terrible to be threatened without your knowledge, and he says that he doesn't know what. Say in a situation like this, but she simply says she won't let that happen, until she looks to the side seeing something she can buy and likes, and gives him a lollipop, saying that those are candy balls, saying she bet he's never tried that before, and thinks that the only sweet things he's tried there were fruits, and notices that it's good. And she's all happy next to him, much calmer. And everyone who's passing by thinks the girl is beautiful and falls head over heels for her. And the protagonist notices that he's attracting a lot of looks to her. But that lady, why does she keep following him there? A woman who looks like a pirate or a gypsy. And so she goes to the girl, asking if she can read her fortune, which would be destiny. So he simply asks Zelia to leave, feeling that that lady there is trouble. But the girl thinks this is fun, saying that hearing her destiny sounds interesting. So the old woman takes her to a tent away from everyone, and the protagonist is quite wary of this. And the girl goes into that tent, as it is a fortune teller's tent. So inside, the protagonist questions what that old woman is planning, and she then begins to read the crystal ball, saying that the girl's life will not be very peaceful and will have many ups and downs. And the girl is enchanted by this, saying that if it is like the others, life will not be interesting, and also tells her to look at her marriage or love of fortune too. But the protagonist, as he is already from a much more advanced civilization, thinks that the reading of psychics is always same everywhere, and there's the same delay. So the old woman says that her companion may be very close to her, but it won't be a love blessed by everyone. And the girl starts to get interested in what the lady is talking about, and she says she'll include a reading for that boy too, asking what Kali thinks, but he says he doesn't need it. But the girl tells him not to be a spoil sport, saying it's free, and so she'll read it too, and says she sees a very distant place in his destiny. And so he starts to get a little puzzled by what she's talking about, and she says it's a place that people from there couldn't imagine. So he asks where it seems to be, and she says there's no way to know that, saying she's just saying she can see it. Then Zelia questions what she sees, and she says it's a piece of metal flying in the sky, and something like carriages, but without horses and a human inside a box. And at that, Kali is quite surprised, because she really is seeing something that wouldn't exist in that world. And he starts to realize that maybe that woman isn't a fake. To be honest with you, the last thing I expected was that this woman could actually see something in that ball over there, and I thought she was just going to steal some gold from the girl and run away. Since she's really reading his past, the boy gets scared, and she says he has a very unusual aura around him, as if he had a guardian spirit by his side. And to this, Zelia says that this is the best luck for a boxer, saying that maybe that's why he can win every time. But to this he says that this is just a myth, and only idiots believe in things like that. But Zelia doesn't like this very much, and says she knows it too, asking how dare he try to teach. And to this he keeps calling Zelia, saying that wasn't what he meant. But as he leaves, the lady is very surprised that he is a slave, saying that there is no way someone with that energy could end up being a slave. And so for 3 days, he had to try to resolve her anger all the time in the castle, and arrived the day he had to go to where the other slaves were. And he thought he was finally at peace, but then the soldiers started to join him, asking if that skinny brat is a boxer, saying that his puppy must be a hunting dog then, and he wonders why they are fighting with him, questioning if he can pass, and they say of course, but he will have to pass under their legs. And they both start to laugh desperately at this unfunny joke. But then he asks if they have ever been hit by a boxer, asking if that little guard wants to try it, and he gets pissed at the guy, asking how dare he. But then the Duke tells them to stop, asking what they are doing. And seeing Duke Wistro there, they stop immediately. They say that that slave dared to be insolent with them, but he says that that boy is a guest of his and a property of Baron August, asking if he is trying to tarnish his name. And with that, the 2 soldiers die of fear and leave with their heads down. And at that, Wistro says that he never imagined that the boy would be a boxer when he saw him for the first time, noting that he is 1, 2, 3, and the protagonist confirms that he is. And then Wistro begins to see the boy's muscles, noticing that the muscles of his shoulder are certainly well developed. but to beat a gladiator with just that would be too much, asking what the boy is hiding. But when the protagonist gets scared, Wistro just smiles apologetically, saying he just loves boxing, and tells him to forget about it, and says he'll see him during the fight. But the protagonist questions what was that he just felt, and so in the slave and boxer quarters, the protagonist begins to train, and says that when thoughts are racing too much, he thinks he has to put his muscles to think in their place, and that's the solution, and he's simply doing handstand push-ups with just one arm, until Torres goes there to call him, asking if he had fun for 3 days in the castle, and he says he thought he would die if he stayed there. But in that, Nixer says that it's impressive because they've grown a lot since the last time, and those guys are stronger boxers than Doraemons, and if they're lucky, they might be able to avoid the fight, and the numbers might fill up before them. But in that, Torres asks the instructor if it's lucky they don't fight those guys, and Nixer says that for now, yes, because it's a century too early for them to fight the boxers there. But at that, Torres asks if he's telling them to rot in the training camps, and he says he's 100% prepared to beat them all. But at that, Nixer just feels that the boy doesn't know how big the world is, and goes there and kneels the boy, making him kneel and tells him not to make him laugh, saying that kids like them would all be killed in the elimination round, saying that he's a brat who doesn't know his place, and saying that having a boxer with dozens of consecutive victories means that there are dozens of boxers below him, and if it weren't for this fight, he would have killed him. And Torres admits that he was wrong and apologizes. Meanwhile, Kitty is scared to death there while protagonist realizes that things really are like this. The Nixer says that no matter how strong someone is, one wrong move can cause their downfall, and he talks to Kitty, says he's worried about him, and the boy asks why, but before he could answer, someone starts shouting, saying that Dorman's ogre is around. So Nixer asks about this ogre, and it's a gigantic guy, and so Nixer says that Dorman is doing his best to bring that monster, and at that, Kitty asks if that thing is really human, and he says that everyone compares him to a monster, but then they question if that gigantic thing would be the least bit human, and Kali says that it really looks like an ogre from fantasy books, and it's Dorman's ogre, a warrior with 76 victories in 1 year. Man, pick up a stone. There's a book there that talks about the crazy guy who rolled up a stone, threw it at the head of a guy that size, and look, it was a ditch and a pond. Seeing that he won 76 times in 1 year, Kitty is more than surprised, and the protagonist too. And Nixer says that according to rumors, he rips off his opponent's limbs with his own hands, and I don't know much about boxing rules. I confess I'm a layman, but I think that's not valid. I think that's wrong, you see? And he says that his nickname really suits him very well. And Kitty asks if that isn't dangerous, since all the tutors are trying to get the best place in the fight. And he questions what will happen if they veto fight the ogre. And he says that his master must have chosen the fight where the ogre won't go. But it could happen, because the chances are small. But not even he can guarantee it, and everyone seeing that thinks it's incredible. And his nickname is no exaggeration, and he's from a completely different race than theirs, and Kitty gets even more scared, talking to Kalia, saying that her fist won't even reach his face, and bets that hers will. However, unlike the fear they're having, the protagonist is making plans, thinking that his chin won't reach his, and even if it does, he won't have enough strength to be able to take him down, and he needs to make his body lower at all cost, and he wonders how. And maybe he needs to tire him out first, or aim at other parts of his body, but he thinks not, because his fist won't be effective enough. And so Kitty realizes that that guy is completely crazy because he's thinking about how to fight that monster, and sometimes he thinks that Kalia is from a very different place from them. Yeah, you're right. And Nixer puts an advertisement in front of the nobles, and Dorman says it's a shame because he wanted to fight him one more time, and he thinks it makes sense that everyone wants to avoid the ogre, and something tells him that there's always a next time. And in that, Nixer says that his master did a good job, because if he fell into his trap, all the boxers would have died, and he says he knows that, asking if he thinks he's stupid, and questions what kind of lunatic would instigate a fight against a monster like that, because he understands why Dorman's ogre is so popular, and he says he wanted to avenge the souls of the 3 losers of that fight, but he sees something wrong, and in that Nixer asks if for souls, he thinks he killed them, and something tells him that apparently he made those 3 fight the ogre, and since they lost 2 apprentices, it must have angered him, so it was basically an execution sentence. And in that, he talks to Nixer, asking if he didn't come there to watch the matches, and he says yes. So Torrid goes on the first day, Kalanin on the second, and the ogre fights on the first day, but fortunately not against them. So they say they are lucky that it's not with them, and they both agree together. And already on the first day in the stadium, the guy who had the misfortune of falling against that monster and something is shaking, and when the ogre steps into the arena, he asks him not to come closer. But as he gets back, he ends up trapped in the corner of the ring, and the ogre approaches, even more preparing a punch, playing against that guy, and he barely manages to get ahead. And the arena pillar ends up being completely smashed by just one punch from that thing, and the crazy guy almost fall shits. And Doraemon outside says that the ogre is an imbecile, and he already told him not to break the corner powders, and he apologizes to Istra, saying that he will make sure there is compensation for this, but he is actually quite happy, saying that the ogre did a good job, because he must make sure that they know who he is, and Callan, seeing that, begins to understand why he is called an ogre, because he really feels ordinary, and in that everyone tells him to kill his opponent, and they shout to finish that guy, so he says he surrenders, asking the ogre to let him leave, but the ogre tells him that the audience wants death, going to punch that guy again, and with that punch, he probably crushes him completely, and the protagonist says that he has seen many deaths in his past life, but he has never seen a death as horrendous as this, and he continues beating the fallen guys so he can finish the job with all certainty, and he says that it is like seeing a human without a weapon, fighting against a beast fierce, and he thinks the good thing is that the ogre has absolutely no technical skill, and he thinks he should find a way. But then Kithio talks to Kali, asking if he's still trying to figure out how to beat him, but the boy says no, saying he doesn't think he'll even need to fight the ogre, but Kithio tells him not to think about useless things, because he'll die immediately, and Torres says that failures are unacceptable to them now, because if they lose, they'll die. And the ogre lifts that completely dead opponent in his hands, screaming and cheering the audience. Are you crazy? A punch from that guy must be a cannon shot. He reminds me of Eren from the boxer. It's Saitama's one punch, one death. And in this, Kali talks about August Bohr, and true to his title, Torres never backed down, and after a fierce fight, he decorated the final match of the day with his victory, and after he managed to win, Kali thinks that tomorrow, it will be him standing there, while he is still completely stunned by this idea. Zelia talks to Kali asking if he happens to be interested in men, and the boy asks a very strange question, saying that not even Ferrando is like that, asking if she called him to ask that question. She says there are many men here wanting to talk to her, but he's very calm, and that's why she asks, asking if he's not scared, saying she heard that most boxers end up dead in the first rounds of the fight, and that it might be their last day together. He says he's not a nobleman like her, so he has nothing to lose. She says it's impertinent of the boy, assuming he would need a lot of courage to be a boxer. She says that if he wins tomorrow, he should offer his victory to her. He says he will definitely win, telling her not to worry. The next day, he says he's ready with Nixer. Nixer thinks that the boy's body has changed drastically, and the muscles in his shoulders and back have grown a lot. He enters the ring very differently. His opponent is a gigantic guy, a veteran boxer with an impressive 21 wins, the Iron Wall, Vartman. Nixer says that his opponent is a small boy, the rookie from the training camp, August, and everyone there starts booing the protagonist, saying they didn't come to see a child fight, and Azelia tells Callus to make sure he wins. But Nixer tells her that the result is kind of obvious, that skinny guy would never win, and that boxer named Kishid is someone he's keeping an eye on. He's a contender for the championship title, and Nixer thinks he's very annoying, and that's why she didn't want to go there, and he questions why. Because he thinks that young man will win, but he says that weight and physique are important in boxing, and it's a little embarrassing to say, but he has a history of street slapstick, and the girl gets fed up with it, saying that it's not something to be proud of, and then she asks if he'd like to make a bet, saying that he'll put his chips on that young man, and if he loses, she'll spend time with him tomorrow, so he says he's in, but if he loses, what can he do? Then she tells him that there was a very beautiful ruby necklace in the store she visited yesterday, and he understands right away, saying that it was very easy. She definitely has feelings for him. After all, he thinks she is making a bet that she will clearly lose. But the protagonist says that brute is not intimidated in the least, and he says that he will finish the boy very quickly, telling him to put the blame on his master, who put him in that fight. However, the protagonist says that he and the others, all of them only fight with their mouths, telling him to come up. Looking firmly at that kid, then he thinks that a kid like him doesn't even deserve attention, and in that the protagonist thinks that as expected, his muscles are as strong as metal, and his neck is thick, so even a blow to the chin won't defeat him. He thinks that another blow is coming. He tries to give a cross, but the protagonist ducks, stepping out of the way beautifully, jumping back and creating space. He then asks if the boy only knows how to dodge, and thus thinks he will end Kali's entire escape route, attacking him time after time, forcing him to retreat. At this, another boy tells Zelia that the bet is over, but they notice that Kali managed to dodge each of the blows, tiring his opponent as he tries to land with everything he has. He wonders how the boy is doing it, while Brutalmoni himself thinks it's impossible. Everyone notices that the skinny guy is the apprentice who defeated Doraemon's boxer, and they say that apparently he won with his eyes closed. The nobleman, thinking about this, questions what he's talking about because he didn't plan this. Zelia continues to be very happy with how the fight is unfolding, and everyone in the stands is open-mouthed at Kali's resourcefulness. The boy wonders if he can take him down with a single blow, wondering if he should accumulate damage to wear out his muscles or take another action, also wondering if he can hold out until then, and in that he thinks about the back of his neck and also his ribs. Meanwhile, Brutalmoni is almost collapsing, with his heart telling him to stop, because otherwise the one who will stop is him, and the protagonist thinks he can't miss this chance attacking upwards, going all out and throwing a punch as hard as he can throw at that man's rib. And he notices that it worked. And Nixer notices that the punch in the middle of a sequence of continuous dodges and the perfect distribution of balance is something that is not easy, and it is the hard work of muscle training that is paying off, and something that his original thin body could never dream of, and a punch that doesn't use the opponent's movement or weight, but with the direct force of Kali. And after breaking some of his ribs, Brutalmoni is already bleeding, and the protagonist moves again, and this time hits the chin squarely, and in that Nixer notices that the boy really has grown, and everyone in the stands tells him to keep punching, because he can. And the nobleman starts to get scared because he's losing his bet, and the protagonist notices that it's working, and the thick armor of muscles is weakening, and then the brute tries to do something by throwing a desperate punch, but the protagonist dodges beautifully and hits again, once again in the same broken rib. Then he thinks that this is not a normal punch, because it's like a spear. It hits, comes back and pierces, that it can penetrate everything in front of it. A sharp spear, and after this punch, the protagonist thinks he'll end it with the next one by hitting the face, and then going for another blow, wanting to hit with everything. And so, when he throws the last punch, the bruteman falls backwards unconscious in front of him, and with that the boy wins another battle. So the nobleman thinks that this is impossible, but Zelia says that he apparently won the bet, and the necklace will wait for him, and he leaves there completely frustrated, because it would be less embarrassing if they fought equally. Then something starts to say that that boy is his boxer. He invested a lot in him for sure, and in that he notices something strange, with the protagonist looking directly at him, and Kali hits in his chest, raising his hands towards the two, and something says that he is offering victory to him. And he says that the boy certainly knows he is in debt, but in fact, Zelia was the target of this tribute, and he says he succeeded, becoming stronger and stronger. And in that Nixa tells him that it was a good match, saying that the audience and the nobles must have also enjoyed his fight. But in that, when the boy goes to get the towel, he feels his hand hurting too much, so Nixa tells him to wet it in water, taking the bandage off his hand, seeing that it is all purple and bruised, and says that as expected, he still has a long way to go. And the protagonist says that he didn't know he was injured, and if he had gone further, he would have damaged his bones. And in that Taurus says that he still has a body of glass, but he did well, because he thought he was good just using his head. So there beside him, the kid is shaking all over, thinking that if Kali, if he won, he'll win too. But Torres tells that kid to stop being weird, so Nixa asks him to take a deep breath, asking if he wants to lose, without throwing a single punch, and he says his ears are ringing with the noise of the crowd, and says he can't breathe, and it's suffocating, and he's going crazy. And then the protagonist notes that it's a panic disorder, saying it's not surprising that he has one, so he tells Kit not to think about it too much, telling him to just dodge back and use those long limbs like his, like last time. Then he asks the kid if he thinks it's possible while he's shaking all over, but after the fight, he actually ends up winning, being all happy, and Torres thinks that's annoying, and the protagonist doesn't even know how to react, and Kit goes to him, saying that he actually won, thanks to the advice, and says he's strong and smart, saying he's the best. And the protagonist thinks he said that as a last resort, but he might be more talented than expected. And then Zelia says that he should have seen how his face turned red as a tomato, that nobleman who tried to bet with her. But the protagonist asks what she would do if he had lost, and she says that he assured her that he would win, and that's why she was so confident. And he begins to assume that the girl fears nothing, and she says that she will take that as a compliment, calling Kali. But as they were leaving, the Baron arrives there, calling Zelia, saying that she has a visitor, but she asks why she's in such a hurry. And then he says that he is the second son of Count Joseph, who is there. So the girl doesn't like that at all, and the boy lost the bet and arrives there, surprised that she is a lady of the August family, saying that he found her when looking for a beautiful red-haired lady, saying that he will introduce himself again. And he is the second son of Joseph, Val and Joseph. Then she notices that he is so confident, now that he knows she is the daughter of a nobleman of lesser rank than him. And this is irritating her, and she thinks that Count Joseph is quite powerful even among the central nobility. And of course her father was in a hurry, because he is in a hurry to find a husband for her. And in that Valen gives her the ruby necklace he promised, saying that its craftsmanship was excellent indeed, and it matches her reddish hair. And she thinks that if she makes things difficult for herself, then she says he's really a man of his word, asking him for permission. But he says he ended up losing the bet, but asks if she would do him the honor of walking with her, and she thinks he was trying to escape. Before that happened, and something looks at his daughter, hoping she'll accept, but since the girl is running away, he says his daughter is too shy to accept, and he'll prepare her immediately, and Valen tells him to take his time. But in that she asks her father why he said that, saying she has no intention of spending her time with that guy. But he asks Zell to wait, asking if she can can't at least do it just this once for her father, saying he might not be as bad as she thinks. Besides, he just wants her to live in a better place than his estate, and she feels bad for refusing, saying she'll do the penalty this time and won't go the next time he visits. And in that something asked all her maids to prepare the girl, and the protagonist thinks that guy is a man pathetic and he runs a boxing camp, but he knows nothing about it and is only looking for the profits before his eyes. And he even had to sell boxing apprentices, his sources of income, and it's a miracle he hasn't gone broke yet. And at that, Valen makes out that the young boxer was Adler, saying that it's no wonder he was so confident when he made the bet. And the protagonist questions what he's talking about. Then he says that the protagonist is despicable, saying that they both conspired against him, cursing him, saying that he's eyeing that mediocre slave, telling him to consider himself lucky this time, slapping Kali in the face, saying that he got involved where he shouldn't. Then he completely changes his treatment, talking to Zell, and is ready to take her. But Kali stays behind, pissed off with that boy, realizing that he is that kind of person. And then they actually go to the meeting, and Kali lies down a little, far away, questioning if it's really okay to be with that two-faced guy. But in that he thinks that the weather is good and ends up falling asleep, and remembers when he was still alive training boxing and beating others. So he thinks that he only has to hit after being hit, and there is no one who can stand before a blow from him. And he says that it was as he thought, and he was arrogant. And the protagonist says that he dared violence to increase his ego, and he remembers when he beat others in his past life, and if he could go back, he would never do the same. But in that he wakes up after a dream and says that he got a second chance, but if he could go back, he would never live like that again. But in that, one of the maids comes to him screaming, asking Kali to help them. Meanwhile, Zell asks what the boy is doing, and he tells her to stop playing hard to get, asking if she knows how expensive that necklace was, saying that if she received it, she should pay for it by returning her body at least. And he tells her not to joke, saying that she got it fairly and honestly in the bet, calling him shit and kicking the boy in the balls. And after he receives this kick, he doesn't fall or anything, but returns a slap in the girl's face. And Kali, seeing this, gets very angry and goes after him. But then the boy's henchmen say that there is no way they will let him get close to their master, calling protagonist an idiot. But Kali doesn't care about any of it off them, saying that if they block him, they won't go home today, asking if they're sure. Then they say that a shitty fighting technique that only uses fist won't do anything against real combat. But then the protagonist hits the first one, grabs his finger, and starts breaking it, actually twisting and destroying the hand of one of them. Then another sucker runs out saying he's going to call the guards, telling them to hold Kali until then, but the ones who stay are scared to death, and the kid just calls the next one. And with them trembling, he goes straight ahead, beating everyone and going to the sucker who's trying that bad thing with the girl. He sees this and goes in hard, throwing Valon away, and after being hit, he asks how the kid got there, and Kali continues cursing him, asking if he really knows what he's doing now. And he says that of course he knows, and he knows very well, and he was about to receive compensation for the ruby necklace. But the protagonist sees him say this, dies of rage remembering his past self, and the boy asks if he has a problem with that. But the protagonist starts beating him, throwing some of his teeth, and questions about this compensation, grabbing his face and putting it in the water, trying to drown him. So Valon asks for help, but the protagonist says that the compensation he wanted is that one there. While continuing to drown him, he asks if he thinks the world is his just because he is noble, asking if he thinks he can trace his path as he sees fit. But Azalea asks Kali to stop, and at that the boy says he was wrong asking for forgiveness. And the protagonist says he hopes he has learned his lesson, asking if Azalea is okay. And she asks if he knows what he did, saying that he is from the Joseph family, telling him to run because he needs to get out of there now. And at that the boy's butler arrives there. Then the soldiers also come with him, while telling him to stay right there. But Kali tells Azalea that it is too late. So Valon, he orders that boy to be arrested right now, but thinks that this is not enough, ordering Kali to be killed right there. The rumor that the Joseph family's son was beaten for the slave quickly circulated among the nobles at the festival. Valon thinks that to ensure that his family is not ridiculed, that bratty slave must be immediately executed. He says that he will also ensure that the August family never gets involved in politics. August gets pissed off, wondering what he should do. He thought everything was going well, but it was very different from what he thought. He says that damn Valon Joseph is crazy, questioning how he dare touch his daughter. Anixa says that Kali is currently being held in the guards facility, so he cannot be released. He thinks that the life of a slave is difficult. But then Azalea arrives there calling for her father, and he asks why she is there, because she should be resting. But she tells him that he has to help Kali, saying that he saved her twice. Slave or not, he must maintain his honor. And even the beasts are rewarded for their loyalty. But Kali is not being. But in this, August asks Nixa to take care of her for him. And the girl says that she knows what he is going to do and plans to get rid of him. But Nixa says that they can't do anything else. And the girl continues thinking about Kali. Meanwhile, the boy is in prison. and one of them who is there says it's amazing, saying that he is like a hero. But in that the boy asks why that other man was arrested, and he says it was robbery. And the protagonist thinks that it's not a big deal, and he says that at most he'll have his hand cut off, but he'll be sliced into pieces. But a guard arrives there, telling that thief to be quiet, and the protagonist thinks he abandoned his chances of fighting again, but he would have regretted it for the rest of his life if he hadn't rescued there. And so in court, the protagonist comes face to face with the judge, who asks if it was he who did that to those two, asking if that proves his crimes. And the boy really says it was he who did it. Then they start talking about how they should nail his head to the castle walls and put him on the guillotine, throwing things at the boy, telling him to die. And the protagonist thinks that everyone there is nothing but trash, because it's as if they were saying that Valen's actions against Azelia are acceptable. And so the judge says that as an order of the court, the slave Kali will be sentenced to execution, and if anyone is against it, they should speak out now. However, the Duke comes to his defense, saying that before the final verdict, he questions whether he can say a few things, saying that that slave committed a serious crime, that they are in the middle of the festival, at a time when even beggars are treated kindly. He is saying that the battle slave must die like a battle slave. He fears that the battle slave called Doraemon's ogre has heard that he has carried out an execution before. Doraemon says yes, saying he sees what he is getting at. He says that to provide entertainment for the public, he tells the ogre to fight criminals sentenced to death. The Duke thinks that a rookie against that thing is the same as an execution sentence. Doraemon says that would certainly be it. He says that as a battle slave boxer, death in a fight should be an honor. So he calls for a final fight between the ogre and Kali. Kali, hearing this, thinks he is completely screwed. The Duke speaks that only if the Count agrees this will happen, and Count Joseph thinks for a bit and says he agrees, and with that the guard takes the protagonist to his waiting room and says he heard that he tried to protect his lady, saying that the boy has loyalty and he admires that in him, and says he will root for Kali, and Kali is left in that darkness while there were some people talking outside. And it turns out that Kirio goes there with Tora as the instructor to be able to see the boy. Then he asked why they are crying, and Kirio thanks the boy for helping him last time, saying that that idiot nobleman deserved it, asking why he has to suffer this. And Torres says that in the beginning, he hated the boy because he was a complainer, but now Kali is a nice guy, asking the boy not to die, and tells him to take some of that because he will need strength when he fights. Then Nixa says that how he saw the ogre is beyond his imagination, and his only flaw is that he has no technique at all, wishing the boy good luck. And Nixa feels a little hopeless, but is happy that there are people who will mourn his death in this life, and that is enough for him. But Zelia also arrives there, and he questions why she is there, and she says that she is not someone he would turn her back on, the one who saved her. He asked her to worry about herself before him because she was kidnapped by bandits and got involved with the engineer's son of a bitch. So she says that if he's so worried about her, then she asks W how he doesn't live to continue protecting her from now on, going to him and kissing the boy. And he questions what she just did, and she simply says that she doesn't know. She doesn't know what she did, asking him to promise, swearing like the last time that she will win. And she says this with half a tear looking at him, and he says that she is making his death difficult, saying that he guarantees that he will protect her a little more. But meanwhile, Dorman goes to the ogre, saying that it is time to fight, saying that it is an execution fight, ordering him to be as savage as possible and to make sure he kills in the most cruel way possible. And the ogre actually stops eating that piece of raw steak he was eating and prepares to go into the arena, and in that, saying that the most awaited moment of that festival has finally arrived. The executioner ogre Dorman enters the arena, and the criminal condemned to death, the battle slave Kali, is on the other side, and everyone tells the ogre to crush that damn criminal because that's what he deserves. It's moral man. It's like I'm watching in Tibet again. That scene where everyone is rooting for the guys. The crazy guy saved everyone, did a great deed, and there are some people wanting him to die. I don't believe it, man, no, crazy. And then the ogre arrives there, all like the Hulk, shouting at everyone there. And the protagonist says he's noisy, stands in front of him, and stupidly wide too. Then he tears his clothes and puts the band on his arm. He says that with that physical strength. Of course, he doesn't need techniques, and with that, he prepares to face that mountain, standing face to face, and already throwing the first punch at the ogre, hitting his rib, but he doesn't move, doesn't even feel it, and he notices that as expected, that the blows have no effect, so the ogre starts hitting, and the protagonist backs away while running away from that hand. Then he thinks this is crazy, because just by swinging his arms, he raises a cloud of dust, and the ogre starts saying he's going to kill him, but apparently he felt that punch in the rib, and Kali says that that world is fair at least, because he has a body given by God, but no intelligence, and his physique is something surreal. He's never seen anyone like him on Earth, but to overcome their weaknesses. Humans have always used their wisdom and created techniques, and with that, he thinks they are a race, used to fighting opponents stronger than them, and apparently he has a plan, and with that, the boy calmly walks towards the ogre, in close to him, and everyone is surprised that he is even noticing that the boy is crazy crazy, and Kitty also finds his courage absurd, and Doraemon asks if he gave up, because he is going straight to his death. But the protagonist faces the ogre without looking away, and in that, the ogre tries to hit him, but the protagonist moves out of the way and evades each of his punches. And he asks why he keeps punching, saying that he is getting slow, but he thinks that his mistake, and he will be dead, and that absurd speed that he has with that body is too much. And while he continues to run away and tire the ogre, the dup but sad. After all, Callie had a lot of potential. His courage and techniques are all being wasted, and he could have been the turning point for the fighters. But the ogre can't hit the protagonist at all, while Callie thinks that instead of delivering a critical attack, he needs to keep accumulating damage, hitting the same rib over and dodging the punch. And the ogre gets irritated, while the protagonist thinks that this is exactly what has to happen, because it makes things easier for him. And he keeps hitting the rib over, and Dup thinks that this is the next level for current boxing techniques, and the revolution he was looking for. And at that, the ogre completely loses his patience, raising his hand, telling the boy to stop running, and the protagonist realizes that he's getting what he wants, dodging the attack, and hitting the rib with everything again. And now the cry that the ogre lets out is of pain, and he thinks that it's a non-existent technique there, striking with the side of the fist, and has a more powerful force behind it, and is also unpredictable, especially against such a foolish opponent. And at that, Doraemon starts screaming that there's no way, the ogre losing, and he's undefeated, and both Torres and Kichi can't believe it. Torres thinks that the boy has always been like this. He always exceeds everyone's expectations, and creates variables at every opportunity, and with that he tells Kichi to root for him, because Kali could end up winning. And in this, Kali's strategy to defeat the ogre has been to accumulate fatigue and damage. Unlike his current technique of aiming for the brain or throat, and it's common sense. The bigger you are, the easier it is to get tired and lose oxygen in the blood after a certain time. But that's what Kali thought, because the ogre doesn't slow down at all. And the boy is surprised, because he's a monster, wondering how he still has so much strength, and says that he tried to reach him, but he got tired first, and he thinks that's bad, trying to dodge each punch more and more fast, with him increasingly tired as he is losing breath, and in that he thinks he has screwed up, and ends up not being able to escape from one last punch and is thrown away. And even intercepting that punch, his hands tremble because of the force that was applied, and he thinks that his arm would have broken if he had not moved back. And in that, he gets up, trembling more and more, and the ogre goes for him. Even hurt, but still full of hate, however, the ogre simply begins to fall, and feels his head starting to shake, and finds this very strange. And Kali realizes something, thinking that it must be his first time, as they prolong the fight so much, moving so actively, since he finished everyone in a single movement, and thinks that even not appearing, he is still a human. And in that, Kali decides that this is the moment, and this could be his last chance, going for the ogre. And while he is balanced, he tries to land a punch on the boy. While he is tired, the protagonist dodges that punch and hits him again, once again, on the side that is injured. However, his wrist is completely damaged because of that, but his chin is lower, and this is his chance. With him so bent over, he aims at the jaw of that thing, then lands a punch on the ogre, tries to catch him as he falls. However, the boy steps back and hits it again, this time in the back of the thing's neck. However, his forearm is already completely destroyed. Still, he goes for another attack, finishing off the ogre, who falls foaming at the mouth on the ground. The entire arena goes silent, thinking it's a lie. After all, the ogre is dead. And with that, Kichi shouts to Kali that he won. And the protagonist thinks that if the ogre knew how to fight properly, he would have lost without a doubt. And he should blame the Baron for not having taught him how to distribute his stamina correctly. But in that, it turns out that the ogre is still getting up, and they realize that that monster really is too resistant. And the protagonist doesn't even know how to react with that monstrous thing getting up and heading towards him. And he's all screwed, because now the ogre has completely lost his mind and kicks the boy in the stomach, throwing him up. And when he falls, he already falls spitting blood. And everyone shouts that that's a foul, but they realize that this is an execution match, and probably is no rules, while Kali thinks that that hurts, and notices that that guy is unreal, wondering how he can move like that. And with another kick coming, the protagonist even moves out of the way, but feels the pain of the last kick, not being able to move properly. Then another punch comes towards him, and he is thrown away. And the ogre starts to enjoy this, going up to the boy and stepping on his foot, breaking Kali's leg. And with that, he grabs the boy by the neck. And Kali's situation gets worse and worse, while he wonders if this is what he calls boxing. But my friend, did you really expect this monster to act justly? And as if his situation wasn't bad enough, the ogre simply grabs the boy and gives him a bear hug, about to break the boy in half. And Kali tells him not to dare, while he tries to hold on. And with that, he grabs the ogre's hair and brings his head towards his, simply ripping off his ear with a bite. And with that, the ogre throws the boy away, and Kali spits out his ear, and everyone notices that he ripped off the ogre's ear, thinking that the boy is very barbaric and then the ogre feels pain, and the boy trembles all over, and Kali thinks that so, his blood is red, too, and not green, completely berserker looking at that thing while he is bleeding. He goes after the protagonist, saying that he will kill him again, ready to punch him. But Kali plays the game of all the fighters in that world, throwing sand in the ogre's eyes and blinding him. He thinks he is strong, he recognizes this, but continues hitting him, and this time he hits his leg, making him double over. But the ogre manages to land another punch on the boy, finishing off another part of his body, because Kali thinks that each of his bones is creaking and his insides feel like a mess. But he notices that it is not painful, going after that thing again, grabbing his hair, and kneeing the monster square in the nose. And the Duke begins to notice that it was not a fight between a beast and a human, but rather a fight between two beasts. While he thinks this, the whole audience screams for Kali wins, and the ogre starts screaming, "Kid, I'm getting goosebumps, he's crazy." The kid is so angry, and he changed the audience's opinion. And this time, the audience is screaming for the boy to be able to emerge victorious. And Kali hits that monster in the face once again, repeating several attacks. And the ogre continues to be beaten, but still conscious, and the protagonist can't even think straight anymore, but keeps hitting, and the ogre, seeing that he's being beaten too much, simply says he surrenders, lying on the ground with his face in the sand, and the protagonist raises his arm, emerging victorious from that massacre. Then the entire audience goes crazy, while the two Josephs are completely desperate and pissed off, because their ogre lost, and Kali's two friends go crazy, but against everything and everyone who is there, they order Kali to stay still, saying that the execution will still proceed. And he notices that those are Count Joseph's soldiers, realizing that that world is still like that in the end. But in this, a stone flies at one of the soldiers, and the public asks what they are thinking, ordering them to let the boy live, calling them dirty bastards, and they all go to the soldiers regarding what they are doing. But one of the soldiers says that they are not doing this because they want to. So Joseph asks what they are doing now, and the Duke says that they need to let Kali live because the Harvest Festival exists to fulfill the citizens' request, and if they kill him, the Harvest Festival becomes meaningless, and if the boy dies, the festival ends. And in that, he speaks to Count Joseph, saying that he hopes he understands his decision, and Joseph thinks that he does not want to create problems with the Duke, and ends up agreeing, telling Valen to get up because they are leaving, saying that he cannot forgive the Baron for making a fool of himself, and he will make sure that they do not live in peace. Meanwhile, Valen is dying of hatred for Kali. And so in the fight between Kali versus Ogre, Kali won. My friend, this was one of the best fights I've ever seen in Manhwas. And after the boy is taken from the arena to be treated, it is said that it is a miracle that he is alive, because he fought with that body, and all he can say is that the boy has courage. And at that, Nixer asks if the doctor can save him, and he says that if he needs to be hospitalized, he needs to pay. And Nixer starts cursing something mentally, saying that even if he is afraid of Count Joseph, the least he could do was pay for the boy's hospital expenses. But at that, Zelia tells Nixer to use that as payment, taking it from his earrings, asking if that would be enough. And the doctor then takes Soya and looks, and says that of course, saying that he will do his best. And they both get pissed at him, but the boy starts coughing blood, asking what happened next. And it is said that the execution was revoked, and the audience did not want his death. And Zelia says that he won that victory, and she is happy that he is alive, and the boy is more relaxed, saying that at least he will live for now. Then a week later, he is still all broken and being taken back home. Then Kid asked who this is, saying that it is none other than the main character of the festival, the Hun Tariff Ogre Kali. So he is surprised by this nickname, questioning who gave him that shit, and they say that everyone was calling him that. And Torres says that the boy is lucky to travel lying down, saying that he is jealous, but he says that he is stuck to die there in that pile of shit. And Kali remembers that they said that his bones will heal well, and the stretching of his ligaments was expected, and the problem is in his shin. That ogre really hit hard, and fortunately, Nick, Sarah, and Zelia convinced him not to expel him. But Algos is still pissed at the boy, but he says that there is no chance of him being treated better, and the path towards Ystrel territory was difficult, but the way back has been smooth. And Kali and his companions returned safely to Algos territory to rest. And 3 months later, winter arrived, and he says that he waited 3 months, asking Nick, Sarah, to at least say something, asking why he is still in this state, with Kali limping, and Algos asks him if it's possible to completely heal that leg, because they said his bones didn't heal completely, and he says that the broken bones healed improperly due to a growth spurt, and Nick, Sarah, says that he might be limping for the rest of his life, and with that, Algos sends him to tell him personally, asking if it's true, and he says it is, saying that his leg won't return to what it was, and so he says it's over. And then Zelia is the Ogre Slayer, saying that the boy is useless now, and says that it's winter, and the traders no longer pass through them, and they are running out of firewood and food, saying that it's Kali's fault, because he got mixed up with the Joseph family, saying that he should have been killed by the ogre back then, and Nick, Sarah, starts to think that they need to prevent Kali from being killed or expelled, and he says that it may be impossible as a boxer, but his skill is fully capable of becoming an instructor. But the protagonist says no, saying that he doesn't want to be an instructor. But then this kid asks if he's crazy, asking if he rejected the instructor position, and he tells the boy to shut up, saying that this is his choice. But Kid tells him that he's stupid, saying that the best position for a boxer after retirement is to become an instructor, and he questions if he thinks that instructor Nick simply offered him this position, saying that he gave him this opportunity because he saw himself in him, and so he asked about waiting until the summer, saying that it's absurd, saying that he won't interfere anymore, saying that he doesn't know how a person with a limp can return to boxing, and if he knew that, he would have continued boxing for a while longer. But the protagonist thinks about it and seems to have a plan, and Kato asks if he was hit the wrong way when he fought the ogre, saying that it is less that he has gone crazy, it will not work. But the boy tells him to shut up and worry about himself, but in that he asked what, saying that he already has 7 victories already achieved. But Torres questions if he really went crazy, saying that he even angered the master, but he says that he will be hated no matter what he does, so why should he soften things, saying that it was he who abandoned him first. And so Torres notices that the boy really has courage, and he says that the 3 months he was in bed, that Torres participated in several fights in order to gain fame, and of course if he became an instructor, his life would become peaceful, but still there is no meaning if he does not fight for himself. And in that, a while later, Kali is helping the guys are collecting firewood, and they say they'll have another warm winter thanks to him. He says he's doing it because he wants to, and they both notice that, thinking about it. The boy has grown a lot. He asks if it's serious, because maybe chopping wood has helped, and one of them says that if his leg wasn't so bad, he'd be fine. But then the other tells him not to mention it, because the boy is feeling down. He says everything's fine, saying it will heal soon, and that it's cooling down, saying he's going home. And once he's back, he gets pissed, but thinks he should calm down, because he has knowledge and experience that the other boxers don't, and he knows it's impossible for his leg to be healed with the medical technology there. But then he questions what's going on. However, Zay shows up, saying he scared her, questioning why he knocked on the door, but he asks why she's in his room, and she says he talks as if she can't be there, and in that, he thinks he can't look her in the eye after what she did. Then the girl senses him, and she says she came to say goodbye, and he asks if she's going somewhere, and she says the territory is in terrible shape, and besides being poor, even the markets have been closed by the Joseph family, because all the merchants who pass through, they are sole traders, and the weather is getting colder, but the cost of living continues to rise, and the more luxury goods, the more basic goods are in short supply, and at this rate they will succumb to winter. And he says he heard it's bad, but he didn't know it was this bad, so he asks what she can do, and she says that if the merchants won't come, they'll have to make one themselves, and she will personally deal with the merchants union. And he asks if the master won't join her, and she says there's no way he will, because he's living like a corpse now, and he's too afraid of the count to leave his room, and she refuses to lose to him, and she's learned that without power, justice will mean nothing. And the protagonist realizes that she's grown, and she thinks that if her family had the power, everything would be fine, but notices that his leg is still bad, and he says he chose this, and was prepared for whatever came. And she says she heard that someone with the ability to heal a hopeless leg has appeared, and with the merchants union she will be able to get more information, and says she will ensure that his leg is healed. But he asks her to please not worry about it, saying that he has no reason to help a slave, but she says he saved her life twice, and that's reason enough. So, when she leaves, he says she's a girl barely 20, she's doing so much, and he can't just stand there. Then a few days later, someone comes walking by while he's cutting the line, saying they heard he's a boxer, and he says yes, saying he's there for rehabilitation training, and they say it's good they have more hands for the job, asking if he can consider chopping wood as rehabilitation, and he says it's impossible to fight in his condition, and he can't react with that leg at all, but he must do it, and if he stops there, all his work will be in vain. So as he tries to chop, he can't. One of them starts laughing, saying that's not how you use an axe, asking him to show him, and he gives a much better axe swing, and the protagonist observes this, and he says that the key, it's not the power, and it says that the power is only a small part of it. And the protagonist thinks about changing his way of seeing things, and says that this really uses the muscles in your back and waist. So one of them calls them to be able to win now, and they question what he means, since he still has time to do this. But one of them notices bear tracks around there, saying that he must have gone down a hunt, and by the size he seems to be younger, and without his mother, it's better to be safe than sorry, and they are going to finish and leave. But one of them asks who that limping boy is, since he's never seen him around there, and he says that he's a slave from the boxing school, and they ask if he's ever heard of Kali, the boy who fought the ogre at the harvest festival, and he is surprised, and comes face to face with the ogre hunter, saying that his son went to watch that fight, and the protagonist turns all red while they talk about the Ogre Slayer, and he says that he thought he had already forgotten with that nickname, asking them to stop, please. Then in Kali's room, he is surprised that Torres went up to there asking him to teach techniques, asking if the big one validates something and if he is asking him to teach him, and he says it's a big deal because he is almost fainting there, saying that they will not leave him alone. Then when he tries to pick up a glass, he almost fails, almost falls to the ground too, and the protagonist is surprised. Then he says that his body does that sometimes he loses control of it and sometimes he can't see properly. So the protagonist asks him to try to pick up that rock, and he can't. And in that he realizes that it is retinal detachment or boxer's syndrome, or maybe even post-conclusion effects, saying that Torres receives as much as he gives back, and says that if he takes more blows to the head than that, he may become incapacitated. And he says that is why he came to the boy, asking him to teach his techniques, but in that the protagonist begins to teach something that Torres does not recognize. And he says that it is a defensive position, saying that he is increasing his defense area by bringing his arm closer to the body, and at that moment his sense of distance is impaired, so that would be his alternative to dodging. But he says that his vision is limited and makes it difficult for him to attack, and he says that he fights considering this, and frontal attacks too, but he needs to move his head and upper body to avoid attacks coming from the side, and when he attacks, he has to generate his upper body to add acceleration, and the important thing is to block and then hit, instead of being hit and then hitting. And he thinks for a bit, telling Torres that he seems to have damage to his eyes or brain, asking him it wouldn't be better if he took a break, but the boy tells him not to joke about it because his schedule is full to the brim at that moment and everyone else is injured too, saying that he can't be the only one out. However, the protagonist asks what the instructor is doing, saying that he should be the one responsible for stopping the master from acting recklessly, asking why he is allowing this to happen, and he says that apparently the master doesn't even listen to him anymore, and the only one with any sense was the lady, but now she's gone too, and at this rate, the training camp and the territory will sink. And he says that the administration of the territory was at its worst, and that winter is colder than normal, and apparently, the Doran couple fled during the night. It is said that Gadolf and August never had a good reputation, so people's complaints continue to increase. And then they ask where that boy with the broken leg is, and they say that if he is referring to Kali, he's already reached his quota, so he's probably training somewhere. And the veteran is surprised because he's faster than him, so they say that he's probably nearby, just sending for him. And the protagonist, meanwhile, is punching a tree, getting stronger and stronger, and he says it's a bit rough, but it works, and it's Wolf's Law. And he says that when bones are damaged, the calcium content is increased to make bone density stronger, and so if trained at the proper rate, the bones will become denser to create a physical structure similar to a weapon. And he keeps hitting the tree because of this, and he says he has to get stronger than before, just with his back and waist, no matter the cost. So they go there talking to Kali, saying that they are about to leave, but at that moment one of them starts screaming, and the others ask what happened, and he tells them to look ahead, because a wolf is dead up ahead, and they say it's already dead, so he stays surprised, saying that he was scared for nothing, and one of them says that it's a shame, because it seems that the bear killed her, and probably went back to her cubs before dying, and they say that it's unfortunate for them, but it's better to leave it to Mother Nature, because they can barely feed themselves now. However, a wolf cub goes towards the protagonist, and they start to say that the wolf liked the boy, but tell him that it's better not to get too attached. And the protagonist realizes that he is also desperate, thinking that he supposes he should stay too, but he takes the wolf home. And Kichu thinks he is very cute, but tells the protagonist that if any instructor finds out, it's over, and he says that he has been giving him part of his meal, and it's not like he's taking more than is provided. But an instructor arrives there at that time, and says that he is getting cocky, asking the boy if he thinks he is a free man to have a wolf cub, and Kali apologizes, and he asks to give it to him right away, saying that he will play outside. But as soon as he looks at the wolf, being that cute, he can't, and Kali simply takes the wolf from him. And at that, Nixa says that she supposes it wouldn't be so bad to have a dog at school, but at that Kichu says that it's a wolf and not a dog, and he says that it's the same thing, telling him to make sure he won't bite other people, and sends him to sleep, saying that Kali will have to help with the construction of the estate tomorrow. But at that, Kali asks if they are getting rid of the main hall, saying that it's a damn determination of the master, but he says that his determination and stubbornness are one of his positive characteristics. But he says that of course, the problem is that it's always a strange direction. Meanwhile, he's drinking and thinking about something, thinking that if it works, something will happen, but it's certainly something stupid. Edric Gadolf, who was suddenly drowning in alcohol, had a good idea, and it was to use the popular whiskey boxing matches to make connections with merchants and other nobles. Unfortunately, he had some up-and-coming fighters like Torres, and his fame for training the ogre hunter in his training school also attracted audiences to watch the free boxing matches. So Nixer says they could invite the group of boxers, Caterin and Hunt, to be the opponent, but the cost would be very high if they consider the construction fees. But then he says they should just offset the cost by collecting emergency fees. and silver utensils from every house in his territory. But it was said that the population would not react well. But Gadolf says that this is a problem for him and his soldiers, saying that he should just focus on his work as a trainer, and says that they are doing this to revive the territory, saying that they will deal with some losses like this, ordering Nixer to leave there. Then it is said that about 10 days later, countless luxurious carriages lined up at the mansion. Then the territory's vase was finally full of guests, and a free boxing match with the famous boxer participating. No one would refuse such an offer. And seeing the group of boxers, Kidron shuts up and thinks that they are skilled. They are not slaves, but professionals. And in this, Torres thinks that they will lose again, but one of them arrives there asking if he is the famous Kale, and he says that he is not famous, but it is Kale, asking if that is a new slave, and he says that he is Karen of the Sun and is a navigator, but the protagonist says that he does not look like one, and he says the ship was destroyed and he was captured by slave traders, and he's going to gain his freedom and return to his hometown. Anyway, whenever he asks about the strongest one there, Kale's name comes up, and apparently the rumors were exaggerating, saying he's weaker compared to Torres, and besides, he limps. So the protagonist says that if he's an apprentice, he should focus on training. Then he notices that the protagonist isn't even taking him seriously. He says it's an honor to meet him, asking why they don't shake hands and questioning if that limping guy is a creep like Torres, saying he'll crush him in no time and regain his freedom. The protagonist actually extends his hand to him, a little wary, and when he takes his hand, he says he's pulled ropes and sailed for over 5 years, saying he won't lose when it comes to gripping and strength. But then, while he tries to shake the protagonist's hand, nothing happens. And he says that his bones, he feels like they are being crushed. And then Kale asks what is wrong with Xiang, saying that he does not look good, and he leaves with Enno's hand. And Torres is indignant because the beginner is acting as if they were the greatest, saying that he would never say that if he saw Kale fight, and he himself says that if he wants to become free, then he must pay attention to the fights, because the ones who need to win are those guys. And in that, Kirill stands face to face with his opponent and thinks he is the best and the strongest of all, looking at him with a completely psychopathic look. Then he hits his opponent from a considerable distance, who does not even see, and so Torres says that damn Kirill has been getting into this lately, and he is confident that he does not lose to anyone, completely changing his way of thinking, and he lands several punches before his opponent even gets close. Then, when he goes in, Kittle returns with a punch, stopping him halfway, and the protagonist says that he is right. When approaching the opponent with greater reach, but approaching him without proper techniques can be very bad, and he thinks that it would be better for his opponents to hold out until Kittle gets tired. So Torres tells the boy that he did well, and with that, he enters the ring to be able to do his part, and everyone is happy, and he notices that he has started again. But he is barely seeing everything blurry, and thinks that at this rate, his boxing career will be over. And he also thinks that there is no gay. He assures that Kali's techniques will work in real fights, and for now, he will win using his conventional methods. However, his opponent stops his punch and returns it to his face. He thinks about Torres, as they say he will continue fighting no matter how many blows he receives. He says that his title of Boar really suits the boy, but he will be hunted by him today. As soon as Torres misses the blow, he is in a vulnerable position and ends up receiving a blow, being thrown to the ground. Then they think that this is the Istri-style technique. She has been around recently, and it is the first time they have seen it in person. The protagonist is quite surprised by that style. That technique, which avoids the upper body, is clearly a reference to it. It is a fist-fighting technique created by Duke Istri and boxers after the Harvest Festival, commonly known as the Istri style. It is not the traditional covering style, but rather the knockout style, which relies directly on skill and evasion, and most people consider it a Duke masterpiece. And anyone with a deep knowledge of boxing knows that Kali is an inspiration, and Torres thinks he's seen it before. And asking who saw it, his opponent asks if he already knows. So Torres thinks for a moment and follows Bravo's advice, using the infighter pose, and says he's going to show him something fun, and thinks that nothing will stop him now. Going forward, dodging, and entering his opponent's guard, who tries to hit him, but ends up failing, hitting Torres' hand, who is defending himself very well, and with that, he stops, not receiving the blows, leaving his opponent surprised, as he's never seen this before, as he doesn't react when you move away, and his exposed area is the side of his abdomen. However, if he approaches very quickly, he will be able to hit you, and when Torres goes forward, he thinks he can avoid it, as he is slow to close his fist. But it turns out he has nowhere to hit, while Torres is looking directly at him, changing his position and throwing another attack in the direction of the opponent. Then he notices that he moved his belt to be able to accelerate, and says that he has to stop this. But he can't, because that punch undoes his defense, and Torres takes advantage of the fact that he managed to undo that defense to use this type of innocence to his advantage. hitting the chin of his opponent squarely, knocking him out, winning beautifully. And the protagonist thinks it was similar, and honestly, he was surprised by that oyster style. But still, he says he didn't explain everything he needed to Torres, but he managed to make a footwork movement in the middle of the fight because his legs moved poorly. But Torres, on the other hand, had a natural belt change, and he was taught about the guard stance and had a different way of advancing. And after the boxing match ended with a successful takedown, Algo smiled in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, and he talks to Joseph, asking if he thought he would fail, and he did, because each of the nobles returned promising support to Algos, and everyone really liked that demonstration, and he says he will make the territory revive again. However, there was no contact from the VIPs, who were sent after a long time, and he is surprised that there was no response this time either. And it was only at that moment that Algos realized that they had only words, empty, and had no intention of helping him, being very angry about it, asking if it only came for the free boxing game, saying that he even fixed the mansion, getting very angry, ordering even more alcohol to be brought. And so a few weeks later, the hunter gets very angry at his house, saying that he doesn't know what will happen because he is not good at managing documents, but he is still a dictator who simply took all his wood from there until someone comes back, and it turns out to be Kali, saying that he returned from training for his captain. And so he says that he has been training all day, telling the boy to take a break, but he says that he is doing this because he needs to. And so, when he sees the little wolf, he is surprised, noticing that the little animal has grown a lot, asking Kali if he has a name. He says that he named him Robot because he looks more like a dog than a wolf. And after talking, the protagonist leaves once again, with the captain telling him to come back when the training is over, then they will be able to go down the mountain together. But as soon as he goes into the forest to train alone, something watches him very closely with a not so friendly aura.
While the protagonist is in the foresta, he thinks that both Torres and Kichu have become considerably stronger, and those boxers over there are also improving rapidly, and he continues training in the tree, and he wonders if he will really be able to box normally, questioning whether he should have accepted the offer to become an instructor. But then he notices something, and when he looks back, he sees Robo looking a little worried. The protagonist tells him to be quiet, but Robo keeps barking at the bush. So the protagonist pays attention to what's happening there, but he continues training, saying that although it's still a little uncomfortable, he gradually gets used to putting his weight on one leg, and so he manages to throw a punch, much more powerful than before. But then he also hurts himself with the pressure of that blow, and Robo gets worried about it. Then he notices something, and gets even more worried, going towards the protagonist, trying to warn him. Callie says that even if he tries not to overload himself as much as possible, it becomes a little overwhelming. So he continues talking to Robo, saying that he knows something strange is happening, and he says that there's no wind, but the bushes are moving, and the presence he felt before is getting closer and closer. He gets scared and notices that it's a huge bear coming from there, but it's kind of skinny and apparently hungry. The protagonist begins to worry as the bear rises, ready to attack. Callie laughs nervously at the sight, thinking that if he can't trust his own fists, who can he trust? The bear prepares its claw to lunge, but just as it attacks, Callie manages to dodge downwards, causing the bear to hit only the tree behind him. He returns the blow with a punch, right in the middle of the bear's chin, drawing blood from its nose. Robo then draws the bear's attention by barking nearby, and the protagonist uses this to land another punch, right in the bear's face, leaving it even more disoriented. However, as a last attempt, the bear scratches the protagonist, opening a small opening in his stomach. The protagonist is worried about the wound, and the bear lunges again. Callie faces it with all his might. Meanwhile, the man in the cabin wakes up when someone knocks on the door. He grabs his axe to go to the door, wondering if Callie is so scared that he doesn't even. He manages to open the door, then he throws it open asking who is there. And when he sees outside, he is surprised to see Callie all bloody, returning home in rags. And so he asks why he opened the door so late, because he was starting to get worried. And that guy questions what is happening, and asks about those wounds, and the protagonist says that they are going to eat meat and bear stew today. And the man, connecting the dots about what he said and those wounds, and how he is, can hardly believe it because the protagonist really defeated the bear with his bare hands. And so the news that Callie captured the bear quickly spread, and it wasn't even a fully grown adult, and it was also thin and weak, but capturing a bear with bare hands was ridiculous. And some people thought it was a lie and an exaggeration, but the lumberjacks believed it without a doubt, because at the end of winter they saw trees that had clearly been broken by human fists. The harsh winter had passed, and the property was full of life for the first time in a long time, and also, The elves shout that the lady is coming. Send Eros, the gate opens, carriages arrive in droves, and everyone is happy because it's salty. Then the lady appears, asking where her father is, and the guard says he's probably at the mansion. She says it's been a while since she returned, but it's very rude of her not to come and greet him. The girl sees a happy family passing by nearby, and the little boy is smiling at her, and she's happy to be back, just hoping he's doing well. And when Callie discovers that the lady has arrived, he gets all excited, and his little wolf is already much bigger, and his friend says that's right, saying that she's incredible and can reach the top on her own. And he says that's really incredible, and the other says that because of that, there will be a party at the mansion, and it's been a while since they've had meat, and it will be the first time they'll have meat besides bone meat. And the wolf gets all excited, but the protagonist says that he can't go to the mansion with him, saying that he's sorry, but he'll give him something. And so when he goes to the mansion, the two of them really do devour a huge cob, eating as if there were no tomorrow. And then the guard goes to the protagonist, saying that the lady is calling him, and he's even surprised, and arriving there, Godolph starts talking to the protagonist, and the girl says that she hasn't seen him in a long time, asking how Callie's leg is, and he says that it's still the same, but he's used to it, so he doesn't feel uncomfortable anymore. But she thinks there's no way he wouldn't feel uncomfortable, and the protagonist says that Zale talked about how she reached the top, and said that Count Joseph made things difficult by interfering here and there. So Godolph starts to get angry, because he's a dirty human, and he's as dirty as shit. So she says that's why she went to the Imperial City, so that Count Joseph's pressure wouldn't work, and she could buy supplies. And so Godolph says that she did well, as expected of his daughter, and the protagonist says that the Empire, he heard that the region has a strong military power, and also heard that the language and customs are similar, because they share the same roots with the kingdoms of Dali. Then she says that she heard an interesting story there, telling Callie she's not sure if he'll also be interested in this story, and that's why she called him there, and he's surprised, and she says she heard about a famous doctor there. He's the doctor of the imperial family, and he's also called the God Doctor, because he can amputate and attach members, and so Godolph is surprised that she says this, since only an imperial physician could go that far. However, there's no way an imperial physician could cure a slave from a kingdom like theirs. But Azali contradicts what he's saying, because if she's the one who requested it, it's possible, since she made connections with the imperial family, and within the empire, she enjoys fighting, and any gladiator injured during the fight is welcome. She's thinking of taking Callie with her there, after she's rested enough. Godolph is overjoyed, telling Azali that she's a true blessing, picking up his daughter in his arms with so much happiness. The protagonist is surprised that his leg can be healed, and asks her if that's true, questioning whether his leg she'll be able to come back, and she says of course, and for sure that she'll find a way to make it happen. But she thinks to herself that it's impossible for a low-ranking noblewoman like herself to find the royal family, and she hopes Callie hasn't discovered what's behind it. So, after a while they're training, the protagonist keeps wondering if his leg will really heal. Then the trainer arrives, asking what Callie is thinking about, and the protagonist is surprised by what he's talking about. He says that tomorrow is the boxer apprentice test, and the protagonist says he was thinking about the child in front of him, saying he's thinking of taking Takayan or Shiran. The trainer says Takayan has great flexibility and moves like a leopard, and Shiran has great muscles and a fiery spirit because he wants to return to his homeland. The protagonist thinks it's good that he has a reason. Meanwhile, the trainer thinks about Callie, noticing that he's thinking about something else while he's there, saying that he'll treat his leg. But why does he seem so sad? The protagonist says he knows it's an exaggeration to say he believes in someone who. Others say that a limb can be attached, and medical practices there are far behind modern times, and in fact, surgeries were useless even after fighting the ogre, and they depended on luck because there were no painkillers or antibiotics, and if there is only a futile hope, and if it cannot be fixed, then he wonders what he should do, but then he thinks of composing himself, since Azalea put a lot of effort into it. However, Kite arrives there, questioning why the protagonist is banging on the table, saying that he is scaring the wolf, but the protagonist questions if that is his room, asking why he is not going to training, and he says that since they have a learning test tomorrow, they must take a day off today, and they said that he should too. Then the protagonist talks to Kite, asking why he boxes, then Kite questions what he is talking about, and the protagonist says that there must be a reason, like wanting to prove something, and he questions what reason there is, and just because he was told to do it, saying that the little wolf is he's so cute, he could die of love, not even caring about what the protagonist is saying, just hugging the wolf. The protagonist realizes that the kid is really very simple, but then Kite asks if he's saying saying there's something he wants to demonstrate. The protagonist is surprised by what he says, and so the next day, the apprenticeship test is held, and an apprentice becomes an official boxer, competing in a fight against a professional boxer and gaining recognition from the trainer. In reality, the apprenticeship test is more like an informal and ceremonial event, and it's because only apprentices with the skills to pass show up for the test in the first place, and they themselves don't even know it, and the apprentices select their opponent boxer by drawing lots and proceed with the fight, and so one of them ends up drawing Kite, and he asks if he's been giving up from the start. Then Kite ridiculed the apprentice with his skillful footwork, and it's inevitable to employ an outboxing style that widens the distance due to body structure, and the protagonist notes that he has become skilled, and here he is the Kite he knows, and both Kite and Tori have become stronger. So what's the point of just throwing punches at people? And he hasn't used that fist on anyone yet, and whether using his legs or not, he wants to prove he's strong. Then the next guy climbs into the ring to help, and he simply jumps, pulls the stick, and walks right past that guy, calling Callie over. He says that just because his leg is a little uncomfortable, he questions whether Callie might be thinking of avoiding the fight. Callie looks directly at the protagonist, challenging him to a fight. One of the instructors notices that the guy is choosing his opponent alone, and Nixer thinks that even though this could disqualify him, he honestly wants to see it happen, and wants to see how Callie will fight with that leg, thinking that he wasn't just stalling. Callie actually gets up, questioning why he chose him, and the boy says that he humiliated him last time, and he's going to show him who he's messing with. The protagonist says that if he's going to fight him, he won't avoid it, telling him to lend him a leather strap for his hand. So the two actually go to the ring. However, Shiran finds something strange about Callie, questioning why he wrapped the cloth around his fist. The protagonist speaks to him, asking Shiran if he has trained his abdomen well. Shiran thinks he's heard that, contrary to his nickname Ogre Hunter, he fights not only with strong fists but also with technique and intelligence. Now, because one of his legs is broken, he's fighting at half his ability. The boy charges forward, trying to surprise Callie, but Callie realizes it's to the left. Everyone is surprised by the weak defense, questioning how powerful his punch has been. The boy falls to his knees, clutching his abdomen, almost expelling it. The judge asks if Shiran is alright, and the boy starts to think his ribs are broken. However, the judge says it's only the beginning of the fight, and he can still continue. The protagonist thinks he wrapped his fist with cloth and leather, but believes he hit the right spot. Shiran tells him to just stay strong. With his strong determination, not his strong muscles, he tells Shiran that he's not bad, and the boy realizes that he can actually defeat a bone, and he believes that the rumor isn't a lie, but he says he won't lose to someone who can't even use their leg properly, and so he thinks he was hit on the side, and his leg was affected by that blow as well, and so the protagonist questions who can't use their leg properly. The kid gets increasingly irritated, because that's not what he heard about him. Then from outside, everyone asks why he's standing there, questioning what he's doing with his legs, and Shiran says he knows what he has to do, saying that he's not like him, saying that he can still move around there, hopping and trying to surround the protagonist. However, when Callie turns to try and keep up with him, he feels her leg and notices that he's going to attack her, and he actually lands a punch on Callie's face, thinking he'll keep pushing her away, but in reality Callie was already expecting it, because after receiving that punch, he prepares the next one, hitting the boy in the face with full force in a single shallow, which makes him flip over and fly away, falling and sleeping on the ground with his face all squashed. After the boy wakes up, they tell him he chose the wrong opponent, saying that no matter how bad his leg is, he's still the egg hunter. The boy starts complaining to Nixa, saying that all the trainers there lied to him, saying that nobody said he was still that strong. However, the trainer slaps the kid, saying that he knows he's angry, but nobody lied to him, and until last year Callie only used his technique. They say they've never seen Callie use such a strong fist before, so the boy wonders how he can have such a strong fist in just one winter, and he's like an ogre, or rather, even a monster. Then Torres goes to the protagonist, surprising him, saying that he didn't expect this, that he didn't expect him to change his fighting style, that he didn't expect him to abandon his fighting technique and focus on using his strength. The protagonist says that he changed his strategy, and now it's no longer, I'll avoid it and then I'll strike, but rather, I'll strike somehow. Torres thinks he really wants to fight him now and see who is the strongest between them, thinking it wasn't a bluff to say he would make a comeback even with that leg, and he thinks there must be someone who doesn't believe it, and he'll just leave them thinking again, and he'll think about it when the moment comes. And so he thinks it's more than he thought. Boxing without using his legs is sinister, and to compensate for the lack of strength, he must use his back and waist, and to reduce the strain on his injured quadriceps, he tired his knees and thighs, but he still needs to fix his strength distribution. It is said that that after the apprentice test ended, spring arrived, and after resting, the merchants that the lady brought left the territory. So while they were leaving, the protagonist was with them all, guarding the robot, until it starts barking, and a woman asks if he is favored by his lady, who questions whether he is Callie, saying that the boy is quite handsome, and he says that his face doesn't give him any advantage. After all, he is a slave, but she says that's a great pity, but she doesn't care if he's a slave or not, saying that saying his face is handsome isn't a bad thing, saying she is Salivan from the Salivan mercenary group, the captain of those men, saying that they are not evil. And the protagonist also introduces himself to her, and she says that she heard the rumor within the territory, asking if he really defeated the bear, and continues talking to the protagonist. However, she thinks he seems sad, wondering if it's because she came alone, but she thinks there's nothing she can do about it. Then a man arrives there calling the captain, telling her to stop chatting. They helped set up the tent, please, and she says she's going, and the protagonist says he'll help too, but she says it's not necessary because she knows he's still uncomfortable with his leg, and so everyone leaves him there, and he notices that things are getting really awkward. But Zalia arrives, believing there's nothing important he needs to do, and she says that they really care about his leg. So it's going to be difficult for him to help everyone there. But he says she's also part of it. But Zalia says they can't keep their circumstances. Embarrassing, she tells him to follow and prepare for what will happen next. He questions what she's talking about, and she says he'll eat with her. The protagonist awkwardly follows, mentioning that those mercenaries are still young, most of them teenagers or in their 20s. She says there's no mercenary group that would follow a young woman like her, as they say it would bring misfortune if a young girl became captain. He says that's not true, and she says there's nothing she can do about that myth. She had no choice but to form a mercenary group in a situation similar to his, and nobody wanted them because they were young. Then they bring the food, and she says she'll bring his too. He's surprised, and she tells him to eat there. He's embarrassed, but she insists they eat together, telling him to sit down. When he sits down, he thinks it's become even more awkward. Then she talks to Callie, asking, because he fights, asking if it's to gain his freedom, and he says he's like any other slave, but she says he's not just any slave, and he knows it, saying he can achieve many things in his situation. However, the protagonist just keeps eating, but she asks why he decided to be a boxer even knowing this, since it's not like his life would get worse if he stopped boxing, and he questions why she's bringing this up out of the blue. However, she asks what he would do if he could choose between his leg and freedom, and he says he doesn't like the word if, but she says that if that's the case, she'll suggest something to him, saying that if he gives up treatment for his leg, she'll make him a free man, saying she'll convince his father. However, he says she's right, but he doesn't need freedom, and just wants to prove he's the strongest, winning every competition again and again, and so she smiles, and he says he prefers to have losers in front of him, so that he chooses his leg, and then she leaves him there, saying she's tired, saying that he'll leave first. So while she goes to bed, she's still frustrated, calling him an idiot, but she thinks it doesn't matter, because in the future, when he finds someone he loves, he'll notice his life, but it will be too late because he spent it filling it up, and when he really needs it, he won't be able to fill it up anymore. And the next day, the protagonist has a face like he ate something he didn't like, and Salivam arrives asking what's wrong, and he says it's nothing, trying to change the subject, but Salivam asks if it's about his leg, saying that he just needs to hold on a little longer, that he'll be in the free city soon, and he questions this free city, and she says that she's talking about a city without hereditary lords, and it's chosen as a special commercial district, and they elect their lords by elections. Wealthy merchants pay the company a lot of money, and bribery, kidnappings, or assassinations of other families are common. But the protagonist says that the outside world is good, and she says that these things only happen behind the scenes, and that the outside world is more vibrant than other cities, and so they go to the wall and confirm that she is Azalea of the Albus family, saying that her stay is for 7 days. And it is possible to extend it at the city hall. However, the guard, upon seeing the protagonist, he asks if it's a wolf, saying that wild animals aren't allowed in. However, the protagonist denies it, saying it's a dog, a hybrid with wolf blood, and that his name is Wolf. The wolf then stands there pretending with its ears down, and the guard pulls a mask off, telling him to pass. However, he raises the mask, asking how he could say it's a dog, questioning how he can lie like that. As he passes, the guard maliciously snitches that Albus's guys have arrived, telling everyone. After a while, a group gathers, but they start to find it strange that the protagonist's legs are trembling. A bald man starts yelling at Kale, saying that this is where the participants come from, telling him to leave. However, Kale says that he's also a participant, and the bald man gets angry, saying that this is serious, because it seems like everyone is becoming a fighter now, even the guys with broken legs, telling him to go in there, because he's going to teach them a lesson. And when the protagonist steps into the ring, Salivam becomes completely attentive, because that guy is the famous one who defeated the the ogre, trying to gauge what he's capable of, mentally apologizing for having faked it. But as long as he's the ogre slayer, it shouldn't be a problem, and she says that if the objective from the beginning is to win, then this is the minimum. But then they are surprised, because the protagonist simply puts that guy to sleep with a single punch, and he notices that he aimed for the leg, but hit the waist. Then Kale questions what happened and asks if that was all, and Salivum starts laughing again, saying that it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he would win, because she's never seen a punch like that in her life, and the protagonist says that he took advantage of his opponent being distracted and easily passed. However, she says that making the opponent lower their guard is also a skill, and he was excellent at it, saying that they say if he comes back there at noon tomorrow, everything will be fine. But then she looks at Kale, saying that now is a skill of master, and he doesn't even seem like a slave, and now he understands why the noble lady fell in love. And that night, the protagonist thinks it's comfortable dealing with someone as resilient as that day's opponent, because at least he trusts his own physique and faces things. And the problem is a sterling style, because if he delves into his weakness of mobility, it will become irritating. And at noon the next day, people begin to gather, but the man asks them not to fight among the participants, and everyone is on edge. And Zelia sees that the place is too unpleasant, and the protagonist questions why she didn't stay there, and she says she's leaving first. And at that, she draws everyone's attention, saying that the drawing of the confrontation grid is beginning, and the protagonist picks number 4. Salivum says that if it's number 4, it seems he'll be fighting number 3, and he says it would be easier if the organization simply drew up the matchups, but Salivum says it's different from the games he usually plays, and apart from the finals and semifinals, they end up playing every day, and to achieve victory, it's necessary to win 5 games in a row. But if he finds a strong opponent at the beginning, it will go badly for the protagonist. He thinks it must be unfavorable due to injuries and accumulated fatigue, and she notices that he understands because it's a public draw, and it's only possible to manipulate it with the game schedule. The protagonist learns the result of the match and mentions that, behind the scenes, there's a considerable amount of money at stake, and the prize money is so large it seems insignificant. The protagonist notices that, given the money involved, it seems like gambling. The first and second fighters go upstairs to face off, and Salivum realizes things are getting serious. Next are the third and fourth fighters, and a very friendly boy approaches the protagonist. Salivum says he's a boxing student, and the protagonist finds this strange. Then he and Sparrow come face to face, and the boy says it's good to see everyone again, promising a good match. However, when the protagonist shakes the boy's hand, he notices something different. Salivum explains that the boy is probably from a wealthy family and signed up to test his boxing techniques. The protagonist thinks that's why they referred to him as a boxing student, and it makes sense now, as his hands don't seem rough. She says he might be an easy opponent, but Callie shouldn't underestimate him, because things get awkward when it's among the nobility, and he says that's something he learned the hard way. After that, she goes to the other people's group, pulling out a bag of money and asking if they trust her. They question why she's suddenly pulling out the bag, asking if she's going to share her salary, since what they've done so far is also valuable. She says it's half of her 6 months' salary, and they say the captain is precise with money calculations, so they trusted her. Then she says that in this tournament she's going to bet all that money on Callie. They question if she's gone crazy, but she says she's not, asking why they think that. They don't like her betting on a guy with that leg at all, but she asks if anyone has ever suffered losses for listening to her. They think not, because in 2 years nobody has died, and she questions why she might. They say the captain knows when to fight and run, and she says yes, saying that's what her instinct is telling her, and now is the right time to strike and go in, and they immediately think of it, and one of them agrees, and the others follow suit, saying that if it weren't for the captain, they wouldn't have endured the mercenary life anyway, thinking that losing this is nothing, and they can start over, and everyone goes along with her, and she thinks that's good, calling everyone back to the barracks, while Azalea notices that what seems to be happening, she's plotting something fun, and so the 32 rounds of the first game of the tournament begin, and the fights start frenetically, and the protagonist notices that the level there is much higher than he imagined, and after blocking his opponent's vision, he goes straight for the blind spot with another blow, and a fundamental move in modern boxing. But he thinks it's unusual there, and he must have had a lot of experience to do that, and so number 2 wins that fight, and everyone goes crazy, and then the protagonist realizes he's being too noisy, but then his number 4 is called, and it's the protagonist's turn. He enters the arena, still limping and drawing everyone's attention, and everyone finds it strange, questioning how he can win with that body, even asking if he will survive, but then the young nobleman tells him not to listen to those people. saying that he won't belittle him if he, the protagonist, not having a functional leg, thinks that, as Sullivan said, if he truly is a nobleman, perhaps he will have problems later. If he punches him too hard, he will win by hitting his chin moderately, not hitting him too forcefully. The boy then moves very quickly, getting close to Callie without him even noticing, hitting his nose directly, unleashing several punches at a speed too high for him to think. The protagonist then thinks he should defend himself first, but when he does, the boy turns sideways and manages to hit the side of Callie's head. However, Callie decides not to let him win and won't let him do whatever he wants, returning the boy's punch. He flees using his speed, and Callie begins to realize that Callie's punch looked quite threatening in that blow. Callie notices that his style is Istran, and he asks if he knows it, saying he went to Duke Istran to learn it. The protagonist says that this was his style at the beginning, so he knows it very well, by the way, and he was taking advantage of his situation, and now it's time to take this seriously. The boy comes back trying to hit the protagonist, but he manages to dodge. However, he takes a blow to the ribs. When the boy hits that rib, he finds something strange, but it's too late. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks he saw the fighting tower, but now he's sure. The Istran style doesn't have perfect footwork, and the force when the foot touches the ground isn't perfectly transmitted to the fist. Weak fists are a big problem, because the muscles can't generate more impact on the opponent. So the protagonist manages to return that blow only with his shoulder, completely controlling the boy. The boy thinks that this type of attack won't work on him, but the protagonist decides to corner him. As soon as he touches the ground with that broken leg, he feels an absurd pain, but still continues forcing himself, wanting to go on the offensive, and says he's going to finish him off at once, projecting himself towards the boy and hitting him directly in the ribs, making him vomit a little. The boy realizes his leg is also injured, starting to feel pain from the blow, and he can barely move. Callie thinks he should have trained his abs more, approaching him, stepping on the boy's foot, and preparing to strike. The nobleman starts cursing the protagonist, but it's too late, and he receives a powerful punch to the chin. Meanwhile, the other fighters are shocked by the protagonist. After all, how can he beat someone who uses the Istri style, especially since he's limping? They realize he's really good at it. Later, the nobleman arrives shouting at Callie, asking how he dares to do that to the boy, completely enraged. Everyone there glares at the nobleman, noticing that he's being quite rude, asking how he dares to say that to a fighter, telling the boy that this is a place for fighting, asking if he thinks he has the right to complain about someone stepping on his foot, saying that in this place, such things are just normal, calling him a rascal. Then the protagonist thinks that he has experienced worse things, like someone throwing sand and grabbing his hand. And if he doesn't have much experience, he must think he's getting in the way, and he thinks that's how it was in the past. But then he goes to the nobleman asking him to the protagonist follows him, saying he'll teach him something good, and the boy asks what he wants, wondering if he wants to fight again. The protagonist replies that if he fought in the street, he'd already be dead. However, he mentions that the boxer Istri recognizes his skill, and the protagonist says he recognizes it too, but he learned it wrong. The boy is surprised by what he's saying, and he explains that moving his legs quickly doesn't mean it's a good move, and he'll be the first to get tired. Besides, he needs to move his body correctly, and he has to use the power of his legs for his fist. As the boy tries, he sees that it actually works better, and the protagonist says it's more or less like that, and it's difficult to land a strong blow using only the strength of your torso. The boy starts to think the protagonist is a good guy, calling him Cole, but the protagonist reveals his real name, Callie. The boy agrees, telling him to keep fighting, saying he won, so the winner is declared. But as he leaves, the protagonist continues, with Callie's name on his mind, and wondering where he'd heard that name before. 2 days later, Salivum says it seems he'll have easy opponents in the 8th round, and Azalea remains quite apprehensive. The protagonist is all bruised, saying it really isn't easy, and his leg is getting worse and worse. He says it's a misfortune that everyone was exhausted in his previous matches, but Azalea sees that he's injured again. Everyone there is still angry with the protagonist, and if it weren't for him, things would go better. Salivum tells Callie not to pay attention to their words, as they're just annoyed at losing their money, but Callie says she doesn't care. Salivum says all he needed to do was observe his next opponent. Then everyone in the arena is cheering for Jurika, saying they bet everything on him, and that's the boxer Jurika, the one with the demon face on his back. Salivum says he was a slave. From the western desert region, he's popular for crushing his opponents, and as a boxer, she believes he could become a free citizen if he could gather a crowd like that. However, Azalea finds it strange, because he can be a free man, but he's still a boxer. She says he just enjoys torturing people through fighting, and he really seems like someone who enjoys it, calling his opponent over, telling him to hit harder. The other guy notices the other is crazy and goes on the offensive, trying to hit him, but it doesn't work very well. Jurika takes the punch and likes it, and goes back to hitting his opponent, saying it didn't hurt at all, returning several punches. The two continue in an insane exchange, so the opponent thinks it's strange because he's sure he hit him, but he doesn't back down at all, and Jurika keeps going after him with that psychopath look on his face, and his opponent even questions whether he's immortal and says he surrenders, but Jurika doesn't let him surrender, landing a punch before he finishes speaking. And so he thinks that if the guy thinks he can surrender easily, he can't, but then the judge says that he just said he wants to surrender, and Jurika keeps hitting him, apologizing and saying he didn't hear. And so number 8 is the winner, and the guy is carried away on a stretcher, and the protagonist seeing this. Jurika is a bit apprehensive, and Sullivan asks him what he thinks, since this is his next opponent. Loving to callous, he thinks he can win, and says that when he looks at his fight, he doesn't think he'll lose, but there's still something that catches his attention. Azali asks what that something is, and the protagonist just tells her to ignore it. Sullivan finds him annoying, and the protagonist notices that Jurika doesn't have many skills, but his physical ability is quite good. However, he doesn't feel anything special like the ogre, but there's something dangerous about it. In the circle of 4, everyone is chanting Jurika's name, telling them to take him down. The 2 girls there, who are still cheering for the protagonist, stand out a bit from the others, and Azali notices that everyone is cheering for that crazy guy who already has an advantage. But Sullivan tells her not to worry, because Callus isn't the type to get easily discouraged by this kind of environment, so she cheers for Callus. Go there, because she bet everything on him wanting to win with the boy, and Callus also notices that apparently he has a strong support base, and instead of disastrously hitting his opponent, he chooses to hit the vital point. And then the judge tells everyone that the semi-final that everyone was excited about has arrived, and it's Jurika versus Callie, and Callie then questions who this guy is, saying that it's unfair, because how do they expect him to hit her, and starts laughing at the protagonist, even before it begins, but then he simply takes advantage of this distraction to try to hit Callie, but he manages to get out of the way, not letting him hit him, and Jurika notices that the boy has a good eye, and the protagonist notices that this guy started without the judge having said he could start, and the judge says that he didn't warn, and if he does it again, it will be a foul, and he just agrees. Then he thinks that this is nonsense, because if the audience doesn't notice, it's all right, and so they begin, and the protagonist realizes that an aggressive person like him, he's sure, will attack first, and he actually does it, but Callie manages to get out of the way and quickly return a punch, leaving him already disoriented, hitting him in the stomach and making him spit blood. He thinks he's knocked Jurika to the ground, and he falls hard after that punch, still spitting blood. Everyone is surprised, questioning if that's how fighters fight, saying they can't believe he lost to a weak guy like him. Callie thinks that was his strongest blow, and he won't get up. Then the referee asks Jurika if he's dead, or if he's just trembling on the ground. But he actually wakes up, asking who he thinks is dead getting up, saying that's great, saying that Callie made him feel uncomfortable for a short period of time, and that his fist is quite powerful. But he asks why he seems to be trembling, so Callie is shocked that he got up, because he's sure he wouldn't get up from that blow, and Callie tells Jurika that he should avoid it this time, or he'll die, but Jurika says that the mistake was his punches, they don't even tickle, but that face. His stomach proves otherwise, and he begins Jurika moves in front of Callie, and Callie notices that he's still moving around as he did before. If he hits him in the abdomen again, it will make him fall. He says he doesn't want to kill people with his fist, thinking he has to go sideways, creating an opening. He throws a punch, causing Jurika to move out of the way, thinking he can land a punch. When he actually throws the punch, the protagonist throws his shoulder in front, but realizes Jurika has prepared another punch and moves out of the way before being hit. Jurika says that's a shame, because if he gets hit this time, he's finished. He thinks that's why his previous opponent was hopeless, realizing he's stronger than he thought. Even with that punch and the protagonist defending, he's still hurt. However, Callie tells Jurika that he's now abandoned the idea of not killing people with his fist, saying he'll kill him directly. Jurika continues shooting at the boy's face, saying that's what he's going to do to him. But as soon as he throws the punch, Callie feels that same pain in his leg, but manages to get out of the way of the punch, preparing to hit Jurika with everything he's got. With that hit, he breaks Jurika's ribs, but he remains still, enduring the pain and ready to retaliate. The bastard even laughs at the situation, and he starts telling Callie that it's very funny, returning the blow to the boy's face and throwing him backward. The protagonist thinks he's sure he broke his bone, but he continues attacking, not giving Callie a chance to do anything. He only starts to defend himself, noticing that he has a lot of stability, but that's not the only reason he got there. He thinks he needs to defend himself from that, while Jurika shouts that he's invincible, and so Callie ends up being pushed back. But in this, he tries to retaliate, once again punching Jurika Jurika in the abdomen in the same place that was already bruised. He takes advantage of the fact that he's about to spit blood, throws the blood in Callie's eyes, and this time lands a punch right in the boy's face, throwing him to the ground, and everyone starts yelling for Jurika to crush Callie. Zale gets increasingly apprehensive, and Sullivan says she seems very worried, telling her to stay calm because Callie is Ria's tough nut to crack. However, inside she's just hoping Callie wins because her money is at stake. When he's lying on the ground, he takes the opportunity to think a little, because as expected, he always finishes off his opponents with a punch to the jaw, and luckily, he managed to tilt his head back and dodge, because it seems he feels no pain at all. Then, Jurika starts yelling that he's blessed, saying he was blessed with an immortal body, saying it's different from his, who's just a cripple. However, Callie says that's not a blessing, that he says his body is completely broken, and it's too late to realize it. But he asks if the boy didn't hear, saying he was blessed with an immortal body, but the protagonist says there is no such thing as an immortal body, and he will prove it to him by killing him. He says he has abandoned all the strategies he had planned, and now he will just finish him off using all his strength, but he advances with his injured leg and just asks her to hold on a little longer. And Jurika says the protagonist realizes this won't work while the boy charges forward, but when the protagonist hits his arm, he defends himself. However, he notices something strange about his hand and realizes he hit his hand so quickly the audience didn't even notice. His hand is already limp, and he tries to hit Callie again, but Callie moves out of the way. He tries again, but Callie's body is completely wrecked, and his leg won't even move. Callie thinks he hit him, striking the same rib he had already damaged. The boy is also badly injured, but Jurika smiles again, saying that's exactly it, that leg, and that's the boy's weakness. Even all bruised, he still wants to continue, and everyone shouts that Jurika is the best, telling him to show his fighting spirit. Callie gets worried, but while Jurika charges forward, he stands face to face with the boy, laughing. He's in front of the judge, who doesn't understand anything. Callie simply raises his hand and touches Jurika. He falls hard backward, and he continues smiling even after falling. Then it is said that 7 years ago in the western desert, Jurika, who was 15 years old, was working there until a rock came down on him, leaving him badly injured, especially his head, with that gash we see all the time, and everyone notices that he was crushed by the rock. Then, 3 days later, he opened his eyes and felt as if he had received a blessing from God. He gained a power stronger than any other, and his body feels no pain. He crushed the slave who tormented him and left the western desert. Then he went to Corin, who began to think he was the strongest and invincible, saying that he had received the blessing of a god. But while he was face to face with Callie, who was attacking him, his heart sent a message on WhatsApp, saying that if he didn't stop, Callie would stop, and now he is on the ground fallen, thinking he was immortal, but he is no longer. This unjust man comes to him, noticing that he cannot, continuing, saying that the winner is Callie, who even though he won is completely exhausted, and his leg can barely stand. While everyone is happy, Sullivan keeps shouting to Azalea, but Azalea starts crying, saying that she is truly happy, trembling all over because he managed to get out of this, and Sullivan doesn't even know what he was doing. Meanwhile, that little nobleman finally remembers who Callie is, and that he is the ogre hunter, and so the next day, in Callie and the group's accommodation, he wonders what is happening in front of him, because everyone there is finally realizing who Callie is, and is calling him the ogre hunter. He is totally embarrassed, while Sullivan, she says that he is the most popular fighter now, and everyone now knows that Kai is the ogre hunter, all because the audience that watched his fight in Corinne enters. There were those who watched his fight at the Wisteria Harvest Festival, and she tells him to have his breakfast, because she's going to see the doctor. She knows very well. It's said that Callie's fight with Jurika received a lot of attention, and as a result, the fact that he's the ogre hunter spread through the alleys as well, and everyone is surprised that that lame guy is the ogre hunter, and that's the participant in the Fujilist fight, come back, and he says that's funny, asking how a lame guy like him he can defeat an ogre, cursing his subordinate, but he asks if he didn't see how he crushed Jurika, saying that they can't ignore him. After all, even Voltem knows he can't beat Jurika, so how can he beat someone who beat Jurika? And so Voltem gets angry, putting the knife to that guy's neck, asking if he's underestimating him, but the bald man starts apologizing. Then Voltem tells him to find the guys quickly, because if they're aiming for victory, they have to make a perfect plan, and they're going to cut off his leg. But the doctor who arrives there also says the same thing to Callie, and he's surprised that they want to cut off his leg. So he says that the protruding bones continue to dig into the flesh, and it's a knee, so he can just bandage it, saying that it will hurt a little. And then a question arises, why does that old man insist on saying to cut off the leg? And the protagonist says he has a fight tomorrow, but the doctor is surprised that he's a boxer, saying that so he's the one who beats and kills people, and now he's trying to ignore your suggestion. But then Sullivan asks if he knows who he is, since he's he's a rising boxer these days, asking if he's ever heard of Callie, the ogre hunter. But then Callie tells Sullivan to stop, and Callie says he'll seek treatment elsewhere, so he should just give him some medicine to hold on a little longer. But the doctor says it would be easier to just cut it off, and says that the medicine is very strong, so he should only take it once a day. And as soon as he hands it over, Sullivan leaves with the old man, but he calls her back, saying that the boy's leg, he didn't just say to cut it off without reason, talking about those who were stabbed, and those who were hit by an arrow. He knows surgical procedures very well for various people, so he asks who she thinks can treat the boy's leg, and she says she must know about the god of the empire, and he says that god, he's heard about him frequently, and that person's name is John, something she doesn't remember. But then she even asks if the old man is going crazy, and so the next day, Callie is quite happy looking at her leg, saying that they are much better now. And one of the guards looking inside says that now it's easy to protect because there's only one person in the room, and the other says he's right, they don't need to be afraid that the boxers will fight each other. But then Sullivan arrives there, calling the protagonist to eat. He arrives with the wolf all excited, and the protagonist says that it's been a while since he's seen him, and Sullivan says that he still doesn't believe he's a real wolf, asking how he can be so sweet around him. And then, while they are inside, two people enter the place, and they are two boys, saying that they are fans of the protagonist, asking if he could shake his hand. And so, he actually goes to shake the boy's hand. But before that, the wolf begins to show hostility towards him, and Sullivan notices immediately and instigates him, telling him to step back, getting in front, and taking the knife that would have come for him before it reached the boy. But she manages to subdue that assassin, quickly throwing him to the ground, and the other tries to attack, so he goes directly to Callie. And from the angle she rises from, she cannot. Callie has a lot to do, but she thinks there's no time to overthink, and she needs to avoid the dagger. However, the wolf lunges at the guy trying to attack her, but the wolf quickly falls back without being hit, and the two run away. The protagonist asks if she'll be okay, and she says she will, saying she only hurt her finger, implying it must have been Voltum's fault, that the idiot must have planned it, and that she didn't know it was going to happen, and it's her fault. Looking to the side, they see the fallen wolf, and Sullivan runs to him, saying everything is fine, that it's just a minor wound. Then she tells Callie to just focus on her fight, saying she bet all her money on him, including other people's money and the money she saved for her retirement. The protagonist just agrees, completely furious, saying he'll be back. Back in the arena, when Voltum sees Callie, he starts trembling, wondering why he isn't injured, and he also notices that the expression on the girl's face, while Callie thinks it's really his fault. And so, when the fight begins, Voltum starts to hallucinate, thinking that he is shorter than he imagined, and his leg is not in good condition, questioning whether he should attack him, because besides that, his defense is weak, and he goes on the offensive, throwing the first punch, and says that it's working, and he can attack him again. But when he tries to attack again, Callie simply blocks the punch and speaks directly to Voltum, but Voltum also tries to attack him, but Callie blocks again, and so he goes on blocking each of his punches, until Voltum tries to throw a wider punch, and Callie simply hits his arm, and he questions what this is, seeing that the boy is not playing around. But when he opens his mouth too wide, the protagonist shoves his fist inside, asking what's wrong, questioning why he doesn't spit it out. Then Voltum starts to cry, while Callie rips all the teeth out of his mouth, and he is left completely toothless. The reaction, crying his eyes out, and then Callie says that he won't need to eat meat anymore in the future. My friend, that guy is 399% pissed off, and after that punch, he even tries to surrender, but he doesn't have the teeth to pronounce things properly anymore, and Callie goes after him again, now hitting the hand he put out, breaking all the fingers, and he unleashes all his anger, now hitting Voltum in the face, Voltum hitting him in the stomach again, with a punch so strong that it almost knocks the guy apart, and everyone is shocked because Voltum falls hard to the ground, and the judge, seeing that, is shocked, but says that the victory belongs to Callie, an overwhelming victory, and after Callie wins, he feels his leg hurting even more, realizing that everything was in vain. And then at the closing ceremony of the tournament, the next day, they congratulate Callie for winning. He says that when he has time, he should return to Kor again, as he promises to give him good treatment. And Callie agrees, and so they go to Azalea, saying that the boy is really strong, giving her the prize money. But when she picks it up, she gets kind of down below, looking at those coins, because when Callie returns to the lodging, everyone congratulates him, saying he's incredible, that they became rich thanks to him, saying he deserves the treatment, saying that when he was knocked down by Jurika, he thought he should return to August's territory and do some hard work with the axe. And Callie gets all flustered with so many people praising him, until the doors open and the person who enters speaks to Azalea, saying it's been a long time, and upon seeing that guy, nobody there likes him, and so Azalea Azalea goes to him, saying it's been a long time, saying he was waiting for this. And so when he enters, he says he didn't expect him to win the tournament and take the money, saying he couldn't believe that that lame boy was a boxer, and he's also an ogre hunter, and that's totally incredible. And so Azalea says that there are the 10,000 gold she promised, so her deal with him is closed. But he talks to Azalea, asking why she's trying to get rid of it so easily, saying that he doesn't actually believe that receiving only 10,000 gold from her is enough, and everyone there dislikes the subject. He mentions that he bet on Eureka, and he's not happy that Callie won like that, questioning why she didn't tell him before that he's an ogre hunter. The protagonist starts to think this is absurd, while Azalea understands what he's talking about and speaks to Sal Ivan. She throws him another bag of gold, giving him 20,000, leaving him with nothing. A little earlier, Sal Ivan remembers when Azalea wanted to bet all the merchants' money, and she tells Sal Ivan that she's doing it, so why can't she? She just says she understands, but asks if she wasn't against it before, asking if she's not afraid he'll lose because of his leg. Azalea says that's absurd, because Callie won't lose. Sal Ivan is surprised by the girl's faith in him, so she questions why she was against it, and she says that of course Callie will win, and he might even break the rest of his leg. Sal Ivan is surprised that when she found out they were betting, she wanted to bet with her own money, noticing that this woman is intimidating. Azalea asks him what's wrong now, asking if it's not enough, and he even looks annoyed, saying it's a huge amount. She says she'll take the amount, but she's surprised that it's only that much. Then he orders someone to come in, and a guy enters, saying it's a pleasure to see him again. The protagonist is surprised that it's Spyro, and the boy asks if he's really looking after him. He then speaks to the boss, saying they'll let it slide this time, asking how Koring's head guard could do this. Every day that news reaches his uncle's ears, he must know what will happen, and he just stares blankly, letting it go. And Sal Ivan is happy that he is a nobleman, and the boy wonders if he is too refined to become a fragilist. Then he says he is curious why someone who hurt his leg while fighting the ogre went there and fought. And he also uses the pseudonym like him, saying that his real name is Lorvim Korina, and his current uncle the Dean of Koring. And so the guards question whether he spoke about Korina, asking if it isn't one of the 3 families that founded Koring, and they realize it's true. And then that jerk tells Lorvim that he's leaving now, and also talks to Kyle, saying that next time he'll bet on the boy. But the protagonist just thinks he never wants to see him again. And Lorvim is surprised to learn what happened with the Joseph family, saying that she will ask the highest members of her family to help Auguste, saying that however, the Joseph family can sell their goods to them at high or low prices, and it's not really her area to interfere. But she says that this is already enough to help her, thanking him, and the protagonist thinks that if they can get help from those in the upper echelons of Koring, Count Joseph won't be able to do anything. But then he leaves calling Kyle, and the boy asks why Lorvim called him, and he says that he came to talk to him, saying that he saw all his fights, and he is indeed a true boxer, and completely different, but he says he won't hit Lorvim anymore. However, the boy says that he was actually going to buy Kyle from Azalea, but she refused. The protagonist asks if he likes these things, but he says no, stating that he would buy him and release him immediately, as he thought it was a waste that he wasn't a free person. However, the protagonist says he didn't find this status really bad, and he knows it's dangerous, like walking on a blade all the time, but it's an important life for him. Then Lorvim asks if he thinks fighting is important to him, asking if he thinks it's more important than freedom, and the protagonist says it's better to die than not be able to fight. After a while, it's said that the number of people guarding Merchant August is more than double what it was the first time, thanks to Korin's care, and they've made so much profit since entering Imperial territory that it's absurd. One of them speaks to Azalea, saying that they will arrive soon in Macedon, the capital of the empire, and she grows increasingly sad as they soon arrive. Upon reaching Macedon, Sorlevin notices that the roads are all paved, and the protagonist thinks it resembles ancient Rome. But then the Imperial troops begin to approach and order a path to be cleared. The protagonist observes all the knights marching in a line, and Sorlevin remarks that the Imperial troops are truly incredible. The protagonist asks if she has seen the Imperial troops before, and she questions whether she told him, saying that they were bandits before being hired by the lady, and that at that time there was also the prince and the Imperial army that had just returned from subjugation. And perhaps at that time David connected with the crown prince, and that's why she survived, and the protagonist thinks about the prince. And at the gate of the wall, one of the guards is giving permission for the others to pass, and Azalea goes there, ordering them to get that letter and deliver it to the third Princess Kondar. And she also tells Callie to go to her room when they arrive at the lodging, and when he passes by he starts to feel something strange, and goes to Azalea again, and after she talks to 2 guards, she asks everyone to leave, and he sits down next to her, and she tells him it's best she rest, but Callie says she'll get a good rest afterward, so it's alright. Then she talks to Callie, saying that the third prince, Iskandar, is arriving soon. The protagonist realizes she knows him, and she confirms it, asking if he wants to fix his leg. He says that's why he came all that way. She then says that from now on, whatever Iskandar does, whatever he says, whatever he does to her, he just has to stay still. This limping business is pointless. Just put on a wooden leg, and it's fine. Let's go home. Get out of here. I'm not going to stay quiet. The protagonist finally thinks to himself that he was so absorbed by the treatment that he even forgot to ask the price. He questions what she means by that, and he thinks that to grant the treatment to a mere slave fighter like him, it's impossible for him to do it for free. He gets angry with Azalea, but then someone knocks on the door, and she says she thinks it's the prince. Iskandar is already there, but he asks Azalea to wait, pulling her by the shoulder. She questions why he's acting this way, and he asks what the point of coming there is, if he sees her being disrespectful. She says that all he needs is to live and fight, questioning whether he should do whatever he wants, and the protagonist finally understands the mistake he made. She goes to the prince, greeting him, and he says he ran as soon as he heard she was there, saying that even though their last meeting was a long time ago, he never forgot. Talking with Azalea, the protagonist finally meets the third prince, but thinks he looks more like a boxer than an aristocrat. The prince asks if he wants to go to the bathroom, since the suspension wasn't there, and the protagonist realizes he's been noticed. Azalea says he's the fighting slave she told him about, Callie, and he's surprised that he's the ogre killer, saying he heard about it. He's a famous boxer in that kingdom, and he tells his servants that he'll go first and take care of the welcoming process, so they should take the guests to the palace. He says he can't leave his future wife in a place like that, and when Callie hears him talking like that, she freezes and is shocked throughout the entire walk. Sullivan finally realizes that this is an agreement with the prince, and she says that the prince told her directly that he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Sullivan is surprised that the dear lady of the barony will become the prince's mistress, asking if she's talking about this in front of everyone, but she says no, because if she had spoken about it beforehand, they would act as if there were another way. So he'll let everyone know when he's ready, and the protagonist just thinks it's because of her, and it's because of her leg that she's enduring this. Sullivan doesn't like that atmosphere at all. Meanwhile, back with the prince, the servant asks if he will make the lady of the barony his mistress, and he says he will discuss any political action that might arise from this with his brothers later. He says he loved her at first sight, that she was beautiful, and also how she became a merchant. But he says he didn't like that guy named Callie, as it was the first time he saw him. But his eyes, they were a little worrying, but he thinks a promise is a promise. Asking where the divine doctor is now, the servant then says that the divine doctor went to the Western workshop with the first prince, and he doesn't like knowing that those two nerds are together at all. At dinner time, everyone gathers, and Callie puts on some very nice clothes. She tells him that now that he's washed and changed properly, he looks different. Sullivan says that the slave fighter's treatment is over because he's now a warrior, but the protagonist is still completely irritated, seeing the prince and Azali there, and he gets very angry about it, thinking that she's not the right person for him. Still, he wants to do something, but Sullivan asks where he's going, telling him to relax because it's the lady's choice, and he was the one who ignored the opportunity and the signal she gave him. He says she's talking as if she's experienced it, and she says she's been observing from the side for almost 2 months, and how could she not know? He says that this is different because now the trade, things are going well, and the Algo's estate has also revived, but meanwhile, the prince is just getting drunk and ready to cause trouble. He talks to Azalea, asking if she didn't say that Callie is a great boxer, and she says yes, but mentions that his leg is now injured. At that point, he yells at Callie, calling him a slave fighter, asking why he doesn't liven up the atmosphere of the banquet. Callie asks what the prince means by that, and he says that maybe he's not a boxer, but he thinks he's good at fighting with his hands, asking why he doesn't take it lightly and call one of his men. Azalea says that Callie is now injured and not in good enough condition to fight, but he questions whether his hand is injured and if she's worried. He suggests that they don't need to move their legs, which scares her, and Callie simply agrees. Everyone there is shocked, but the prince says that it should be fun, even if it's just with bare hands. If that knight loses to Callie, he'll be fired, forcing Callie to show his skill. However, Callie gets very angry, but says he can't save Azalea without doing anything, and the only thing he can do now is simply win. Callie looks at the man with a totally menacing expression, and the man says that he is young, but thinks he is quite disciplined. He says that if he gives up or retreats, he loses. So the two prepare to begin, and the knight thinks that Callie only strengthened the bread, and if he provokes him, he's sure the boy will will attack. So the prince orders them to fight and leaves his place. Then the knight attacks the protagonist, but he gets out of the way and returns the punch with absurd force, shaking the knight, as the punch leaves a bruise on his arm, and he's shocked that Callie has so much power at such a close distance. So Callie continues attacking until he manages to return the punch, but the boy prepares for another one, hitting the knight directly in the ribs, making him kneel, and everyone is surprised that he won. But the protagonist continues thinking that all he has to do is prove his strength. Then the prince looks closely at the protagonist with a decidedly unfriendly expression, and that knight over there says that normally he would only celebrate this, but the prince thinks it's boring, as he hasn't yet had the feeling that he's the ogre hunter, thinking there must be something to wake him up. When he looks to the side, Azalita is completely satisfied that the protagonist won, and he says that this is all for today's entertainment, thanking everyone for participating, and that they should take good care of him at the next ceremony. He grabs her and pulls her into his arms, and the girl becomes very uncomfortable. After a while, he's getting increasingly drunk, as it seems his wife doesn't reciprocate his feelings. He thinks he needs to talk to Azalita, knocking on her door. She asks who it is, and he says it's him, as Kandar. As soon as he opens the door, she asks if he's drunk, and he says he really is, as she can see, saying he'd like to tell her something he couldn't say at the party. She becomes completely uncomfortable with the situation, but thinks that she can't do it now, as she doesn't want to spend the night with the prince until Callie leaves the Empire, and so he calls her to drink in his room, and while they drink, she questions him about the Divine Doctor, and he says that the Divine Doctor is an incredible man, and not only in medicine, he is good in many ways, saying that he is a friend of her father, and also her godfather and guardian of her brother, the first Prince Felipe, and says that he is old, but likes to make new inventions, and so she thinks that he certainly seems like an incredible person, saying that if he is such an incredible man, he should be able to easily fix a broken leg, and at that the prince gets angry because she is talking about it again, and he questions if she is worried about the slave fighter Callie, and she says that it's not quite like that, and he says that it continued to bother him for some reason, getting up furious, throwing the girl against the wall, giving a punch that breaks the concrete, and she becomes increasingly frightened watching this, but then he tries to come to his senses, saying that he lost control, trying to tell her that she doesn't need to be afraid, but the girl with she's definitely scared, and he grabs her chin, saying that he won't let her think about Callie for the rest of her life, and that she'll only think about him from now on. However, Azalea doesn't like the idea of only thinking about him for the rest of her life at all, because she literally sees him as a monster, and she starts mentally begging for Callie until she begs him to please come over, shouting his name quickly. The door opens and the protagonist bursts in, hitting the prince on the head with a chair, telling him to take his hand off her, and then, "My friend, I think your leg problems are about to end, you'll probably lose it," and that's it. Moments before, Callie was outside, completely anxious, wondering why he had encountered the third prince, as he was on his way to his room. But then he realizes that this is Azalea's room he's entering, and he doesn't like the situation very much. He remembers everything Azalea did for him and the moments he spent with her, but thinks it's none of his business. However, as he turns to leave, he hears her voice, wondering if he heard wrong, but he really does hear her scream. Entering with everything, looking at the prince, and he lunges at him with everything he's got, slamming that chair over his head, ordering him to take his hand off Azalea. However, while the prince staggers in pain, Callie also collapses to the ground. He asks what he's doing and what the hell he's thinking, but Callie simply grabs one of his feet and hits the prince in the face, asking how he dares to threaten him. The prince questions what he's talking about, questioning what he means by such nonsense. He looks back and sees the girl trembling with fear, and realizes the situation isn't looking good for him. He says he doesn't care anymore, simply turning onto his own leg. The protagonist is surprised that he hit his thigh, and Callie says it's painful, saying that now he's regained his senses, and an insect like him can't do anything. But the protagonist doesn't think much and lands a powerful punch to his face, making him spit blood. The prince responds with a knee strike to Callie, throwing him far away, and Callie notices his strength. He says he understands the complicated story behind his actions, but now he declares this woman as his, and so the protagonist thinks he did it without thinking, so he wants to end it quickly, saying he's going to punch him in the jaw. As the prince gets close, Callie prepares to hit him, saying he'll use the momentum to throw a punch at him, and he does. The prince's face is thrown back by the force of the punch, but he still manages to grab Callie's arm, saying he must follow his rules. When he grabs Callie's arm, he bends it, putting the boy in a joint lock, and he starts pressing almost to the point of breaking it. Callie feels this, trying to hit him to make him let go, but the prince holds on and prepares to really twist the arm until it breaks. He realizes realizes this can't continue because his arm is going to be ruined. However, they hear something, and the girl goes over there to hit the prince's head with a candelabra. She's totally nervous after doing this, but then the guards arrive, asking what the noise is. And when he sees those guards, he says he's leaving, and they all surround the protagonist, telling him to just surrender. After a while, he's on his knees along with Azalea, and his older brother, the first prince, Philippus, asks him what those injuries are. He can't believe he's returned at a moment like that, and he tries to explain to his brother, stuttering a lot, but Philippus says he should do something to make him say it himself, telling him to tell the truth before he asks the lady beside him, or he wants him to beat him until he faints, like they did in childhood. Then he starts to stutter, but tells everything that happened, but Azalea thinks this is unexpected, saying that she'll tell the treatment for Callie's injuries, even though he was drunk last night, and she thought he would use that to his advantage, but he told everything without any distortion. However, it's still a serious crime for a slave like Callie to hit the prince, and the death penalty can be avoided. And so, Philippus says that his brother is really a piece of shit, and he gets all scared, and Philippus says that he should teach him a lesson. Beating his brother without mercy or pity, Skander starts begging his brother to wait, but Philippus tells him to shut up because he's never had a baby like his younger brother. Azalea, seeing this, can't believe it, as it's completely different from anything she's ever seen among the nobility. She questions how he can just go straight to a girl's room when he's drunk, asking if he thinks the girls wouldn't be scared, asking if he thinks the girl will be okay, even asking if he has shit for brains, and giving his brother a big kick in the legs. Philippus says he will conduct a swift trial in the name of His Majesty the Emperor, who is on an expedition to the northern region, ordering Callie to be brought to him. Callie is indeed brought to him, kneeling before Philippus, who asks if he is Callie the boxer. The protagonist says yes, looking at Philippus, who also stares intently at the boy. Philippus says the protagonist seems bigger than he imagined, saying Skander is quite pathetic, but he says that this slave laborer isn't just an incompetent boy, and that he was rudely defeated. However, Philippus tells Skander to shut up, asking how he can try to use the divine doctor's treatment as he pleases, and says that he also invaded a woman's room in the middle of the night and tried to harass her, and that he always does something stupid, and he can't even say anything. He says that Zalea came from a distant kingdom, and he made a pact with Skander, and didn't follow his heart. He simply takes off his gauntlet, goes to the girl saying that she committed the most serious crime in this case, slapping her in the face. The protagonist gets angry and is ready to attack Philippus, but she says that it's all his mistakes. He says that the crime of harassing the imperial family and Skander is serious, saying that the issue is that she ends up like this, and considering that she is a woman, she should know the nature of men well. Then Philippus looks at the protagonist, saying that how he can take on Skander with that leg. He's really tough, and the boy gets up, not knowing what to say to Philippus, and then he speaks to Callie, saying that even if he's in a hurry, Skander has a legitimate claim, saying that even if Zalea refuses to stay with Skander, that's their problem, and in that case, he's a criminal who assaulted an innocent person, and if he acts like a warrior to the end, he must also take responsibility, and he starts to draw his sword, and at that moment, Zalea starts shouting Callie's name. However, Philippus asks what the boy's last words are, and Callie, seeing the sword at his neck, says that he doesn't regret anything he did, and Philippus then looks at the boy surprised, but instead of cutting off Callie's head, he cuts the bonds, saying that Callie did well, and he must protect Zalea's law to the end. He says that's what a man should do, and he looks at his brother, and Skander understands that message, so Philippus declares, according to the chalk of imperial laws, that the victor will remain until the end, and the loser will be considered defeated, and what Skander wants is Zalea Alves, and the same goes for Callie, the Podalista, so they must settle this in a fight. And the fight will happen in a week. Simply, the protagonist pulled the trial by combat. My friend is getting better, and Sullivan talks to the protagonist, saying that she heard about it from Philippus, because they said he's a person without blood or tears. But this is surprising, and the protagonist says she's right. And the most surprising part is that he didn't run away. So Sullivan says that honestly that night left her uneasy. So she already sent some of her guys to the lady's room, and she questions if it's not because of what she said yesterday when she was drinking, saying that if it were him, he would have knocked down the third prince and run away with the girl. But the protagonist says no. But then while they are talking, someone arrives asking if he is the podalist who gave the prince a beating, and the two look surprised that it's knights who arrive there saying that he's awesome, saying that the boy did a good job, and next time he should turn Skander into mincemeat, and the protagonist wonders what this atmosphere is like, and why they call the prince's name so casually, but then they ask the boy to follow. The protagonist questions why they want this, and he says it's to find the divine doctor. Callie almost cries because finally the goal of this long journey will be achieved, and he will find the divine doctor and be able to fix his leg. I think a severed leg that's put back in place won't heal in 7 days. But let's go. You'll fall even if you don't hurt yourself. Even tense, the protagonist goes to the divine doctor's dwelling, and upon arriving, the guard knocks on the door. He asks who it is, and the guard says he brought Callie, the podalist. The doctor then tells him to come in. However, when the protagonist enters, he's casually talking about Felipe, but he corrects himself, saying that he's the troublemaker Felipe was talking about, asking if he enjoyed his fight with Skunda. Then they get straight to the point, and he sees that bone fragments are scattered here and there, and the connected bones are misaligned, pressing on nerves and muscles. The protagonist feels pain just from touching them, and the doctor says it must hurt even more. Even when trying to walk, the doctor asks how the boy survived, questioning when he was injured, and Callie says it was last autumn. The doctor becomes worried, and Callie wonders if he can be treated. He questions if it's too late for his leg to be treated, but he says of course not, adding that surprisingly, he thinks he can handle it. He was thinking of giving him a temporary prescription because he's fighting Skunda in a few days, and Callie is happy. The doctor says everyone can call him the Divine Doctor, but he doesn't actually like that. If he's okay with that, he can call him by his name, saying his name is John, American John. However, when Callie hears that name, he almost doesn't believe it, falling backward in shock at the sound of the American name. Seeing the boy's frightened face at what he just said, the doctor begins to notice something. The protagonist asks if he said he's American, and so the doctor asks everyone to leave the room. When the two are alone, he says he's searched for a long time, and no one has appeared, and finally finding him like this must be destiny. Then Callie asks if he's from Earth, and he says his real name is John Bradley Clark, and he arrived there more than 40 years ago. The protagonist then says that the two of them talk without realizing the passage of time. And John, he was an American Army captain who died in the Korean War in 1950. He was an elite military officer specializing in surgery and became a divine doctor after assisting the emperor with his excellent knowledge and skill. He found this arrival on Earth 60 years later fascinating, and he begins to realize that 40 years there is like 60 years there, so it would be about 20 years more. He starts to think that he will have to compare it with other cases, and Callie is surprised that there were other cases. He says that there are people in the history books who he presumed to be like them, with cases where, after they lost consciousness and woke up, they became different people and excelled in certain fields. He remembers that the boy talked about having remorse for boxing when he died, saying that in his case it's about medicine, and that's probably what brought them there, an intense desire that goes beyond the fear of death. He says he doesn't think it's time to talk about it, telling the boy to roll up his pants. Then the protagonist asks if he will. John suggests performing surgery now, but says no, explaining that he will only remove a piece of bone between the gastrocnemius muscles. He claims this type of treatment will reduce the pain, saying it will be over in an instant. However, Callie becomes apprehensive, questioning if he doesn't have good anesthesia. When the doctor begins to cut, Callie feels excruciating pain. The doctor says it should hurt a little, adding that he's very sorry because being old, he also makes mistakes. However, the protagonist thinks he should only move his hands and not speak. After removing the fragment, he realizes the bone is deeply embedded and begins to stitch the boy up. When he finishes, the protagonist notices a burning sensation from a foreign object, and he can only endure this pain. John explains that as a doctor, he wants Callie to avoid fighting at all costs, but he is in a position to support Philippus, asking him to understand and handing him the ointment. The protagonist says he doesn't need to worry about fighting, and so when he leaves, and one of the guards asks the divine doctor if he knows that enslaved laborer, he says he's a friend from the same city as him. After a while, Philippus goes to Callie, saying he needs to tell him something, and asks if he has time. He notices Callie's polite tone, but he feels he can't refuse the first prince's summons. Philippus says that since many are watching, he feels obliged to take the boy to another place. He mentions hearing that the divine doctor has been calling him frequently lately, and the protagonist says it's only for treatment. However, Philippus says that if it weren't for the divine doctor, he might not have been born and would probably have died in his mother's womb. That he and his benefactor, godfather, and teacher have been together for over 30 years, but he doesn't know much about him. Knowledge, inventions of unknown origin. Although it's not important in his father's eyes, he's very curious about it, saying he heard that he's from the same hometown as him. However, he hasn't seen the divine doctor leave the empire in the last 20 years, and besides, he's only 20 years old. In that kingdom, then he asks who Callie is, and so is the boy, and sometime before that night, the doctor asks if Philippus didn't kill the protagonist. He says he doesn't understand yet, and everything the prince said is true, and he also made him bleed. The divine doctor then says that this boy is the key to the development of civilization there. He taught him everything he knew. Philippus doesn't want to ascend to the throne with noble titles, but with his power. In other words, he's like a republican. If Philippus becomes the next emperor, there will be bloodshed in this empire, and in the empire, strength is important. Power is synonymous with status, but not a guarantee that a battlefield hero will become an excellent leader. The protagonist becomes apprehensive at these words, and the doctor says that's why Philippus seeks individuals willing to step into the fire without hesitation for their beliefs, just like Callie. He's currently trying to think clearly, as he's not trying to harm him. Callie then says it's just a matter of boxing, and Philippus says that looking at his response confirms there's something there, and he won't force him to answer, instructing the protagonist to keep the matter of that day a secret from the divine doctor, because he wants him to see him as a harmless disciple. However, if he changes his mind and wants to be more honest with him, he can go there anytime. But the protagonist says he's not sure about that yet, but will meet him when he changes his mind. The prince likes Ria's conversion, saying he gives her credit for her courage and audacity, instructing the protagonist to take that book, considering it a gift, and to persuade him. The protagonist questions what it is, and he says it's an imperial martial arts technique from the Ringer textbook, and Skander is the master of Ringer martial arts. However, the protagonist is surprised, asking if he wants Prince Skander to lose, and he says it's more or less the opposite. Skander is his favorite younger brother, and if Skander wins, being his older brother, he'll also be happy, and if he wins, he'll go and owe him. And so the protagonist notices that he wants to get him into trouble, saying that whichever side wins is beneficial for him. And so after a while, he thinks that Philippus is more frightening than he thought, and while he reads, he realizes that this is a combat technique, a practice that takes into account various situations. Especially many techniques on the ground are displayed, and if Skander hadn't been drunk, he would have been knocked down by it, and he's in big trouble, thinking that he doesn't know anything about the text written in that place, very angry, because he hasn't learned to read, saying that all he knows is his name and some words that he used frequently, and he thinks it's similar in English. He says there are several letters similar to the alphabet, and he thinks Sullivan doesn't know either, since she tells him she thinks it can only be read by officials or aristocrats, saying she really doesn't know, and he says he should ask John, but he's not someone he can ask anytime. Then he remembers Sullivan giving another option, questioning why he doesn't ask the lady, and the protagonist is surprised. She says the protagonist hasn't seen her in the last few days, and looking at her personality, she's sure she's blaming herself now. And she takes the opportunity to ask if Callie wants her to help her. So Callie gets even more anxious, and she says she only came because of that book. She asks who it is, and he introduces himself. Inside, she starts getting ready in all sorts of cool outfits, and he just mentally asks her to come slowly. Then the girl arrives at the door, all awkward and anxious, asking what he's bringing there. But before he can even speak, she notices that his leg has improved, and he says that it's not fully healed yet, and he only received the treatment he could before the fight. She gets really happy, even crying, and he blushes. He says he wants her to read it to him because he heard it's a martial art used by Prince Skander. She asks if he received it from Prince Philip himself, saying that he's strangely kind to the boy. She asks if he wants her to read it all, but he says he can't understand it just by looking at the pictures, asking her to tell him what she thinks is important. She looks at everything, but in the middle of it, while reading, she tries to touch on an important point, saying that until now he has never blamed her, but he says that everyone makes mistakes, telling her only not to do it again. He thinks that this also applies to him, and he hasn't even lived a good life before. So he asks her what that means, and she says it's a way to start a fight when facing an opponent from afar, but it's a dirty method, collecting a lot of saliva in your mouth and then spitting in the opponent's face. This makes the opponent feel physiologically disgusting, and he will wipe his face. The protagonist thinks that he has already fought the scandalous prince and believes that he won't use this. He is also someone who knows what dignity is. The girl continues reading and says that after that, he should crouch down and kick quickly, then drag his opponent down and dominate him. She says that if he does this while running, it will increase his power, and it's the perfect moment because after you spit on him, he can't react quickly. She makes it clear that that's what was written there, and the protagonist says that initially he was only going to check the parts he didn't know, but after he learned something, he wanted to learn more. However, the girl starts to get sleepy, and he says he can end it there because if he knows too much, he'll have too many thoughts when he fights. So she asks if he can win, since the boy is a boxer and a different martial art than before. The protagonist asks if she's already forgotten. He's the guy who holds the title of Ogre Hunter, but he just thinks that's too shameful. She says it's okay. He says he'll go now, but she thinks that if Callie loses, she'll be Skander's wife, and she wonders if that's what she can do to Callie. Then she gets up and takes him, telling Callie not to go, asking him to stay, and the protagonist blushes deeply upon hearing his request. And after that the candles go out, as the two apparently kiss, and the very next morning, Sullivan has that big smile, and the protagonist questions why she's smiling like that. Then she just stays there. And so she says it seems like he only came back to in the middle of the night. She goes to her room, asking Callie what the reason is, and he gets all nervous, saying it's because it was the eve of the fight, so he needed some time alone, and he immediately thinks he's crazy, questioning how she saw him at this hour. And so they actually go to the arena, and she tells Callie that he has to win, and he's more motivated than ever, if you know what I mean. And when he enters the arena, many soldiers are there banging on their shields, raising morale as if they were in a war. And the first prince observes everything, and they start saying that the third prince of the empire, Skander, is a descendant of the god of war, and he's going to give the brat a beating. And so Skander enters the arena, all cocky, with an absurd sense of power, and he says it's a great day to crush someone. But Callie is also forming that monstrous aura. And so Felipe orders everyone to listen, saying that the winner will remain until the end, and the loser he will be considered defeated. And this is the manifestation of the god of war. And the fight was also approved by Emperor Alexandros. And Skander says that now it's no longer just about the azalea, and he has no choice but to crush Callie, and he removes all the clothing from that finger, telling it not to shatter easily. And the protagonist notices that now it's a fight without rules and not boxing. Skander is a difficult opponent, but he must win at all costs, and he will prove that strength isn't everything. So they go into a circle surrounded by soldiers, while they prepare to face each other, and the protagonist goes all out against Skander, throws the first punch and retreats, and Skander notices that he can move properly now, thinking that this was really expected of the divine doctor. However, he comes with a huge punch towards Callie, who barely gets out of the way, and he comes in with an absurd sequence punching the boy from all sides, not giving Callie time to even think. And so Skander says that it seems that the air around him is getting heavy, and that's bad, but the protagonist notices something when he sees Skander throwing another punch. He's surprised, because now would be a good time to counterattack, but he wonders why he hesitated, remembering last night. He realizes he's afraid to fight with all his might, because he's afraid of losing something. However, while he's thinking, Skander manages to land a punch on him, forcing the boy to defend himself, but being thrown far away. He starts yelling, telling the protagonist to fight properly and get up. The protagonist thinks he has good body reaction, since he defended himself at the last minute, noticing that he jumped back the moment he kicked. Callie gets up, a little sore, and says he thinks he's going crazy, because how can he think about anything else in the middle of a fight? So he prepares himself and goes all out, and the two advance without hesitation towards each other. However, when Callie gets close enough, he stops and prepares a punch, but Skander also prepares to react, throwing a kick upwards at the protagonist. But then he stomps on the ground, stops quickly, takes a step back, and manages to lean forward again, hitting the prince in the ribs, who begins to spit blood. But before falling, he reaches up at the protagonist with his hand. But Callie manages to stop his grab. Skander punches the prince's hand, thinking that if he gets caught, it will be the end for him. No matter how hard he hits, if he gives the prince time to recover, it will be his end. If that's the case, he hits the ribs again, and once more, punches the prince in the face, hitting him repeatedly, determined not to let him recover. Meanwhile, Philip, observing the fight, says he thought boxing was an incomplete fighting technique, that it wouldn't work perfectly, and apparently, it will be difficult to win even using the ring. But he considers using the ring, saying he must do everything to win. Skander continues to hold back his punches while thinking, and Philip himself knows he will do everything to win. Then it is said that the princes in that empire undergo rigorous training similar to torture and are educated to become warriors. Even if they are born with royal blood, if they are physically or mentally weak, they are not recognized as princes or members of the family. Imperial forces, including the emperor, must always be on the front lines, and for the soldiers of this empire, the royal family is the object of loyalty, and they are comrades who have shed blood together. Skander is a born warrior, and when he encounters a strong opponent, he feels more joy than fear and strives to overcome them. Thus, he thinks that Callie is exactly like him, and Callie stops attacking for a moment and takes a step back because he thought he would rush there immediately, but he is calmly waiting to attack. If that is the case, he only has one way out, and so when Callie steps back, Skander understands, saying that apparently his leg has reached its limit. But then, when he lunges forward, Felipe thinks it was a trap, and as he flies towards Callie, he thinks that if he does it at the wrong moment, he will be defeated. But as he sees that giant coming towards him, he hits Skander directly on the side of the head, making him lose his bearings, and the protagonist realizes that he landed perfectly, but Skander doesn't fall with that punch, and simply lunges forward, giving the protagonist a tumble, knocking him to the ground. Callie thinks this is impossible. After all, he should be unconscious after that attack. However, Skander prepares for a flurry of punches, landing the first blow on Callie, followed by several more on the completely defenseless boy's face. face. After that barrage of punches, Skander turns around, and after acting automatically, wonders when he managed to make him fall like that. But whatever the reason, he continues attack. It's said that perhaps it's because of the continuous training he receives, but Skander can brutally break, crush, and destroy his opponent. And Callie, while defending himself from that meteor shower, thinks he needs to escape somehow, trying to get out of there. But Skander notices this, grabbing Callie's arm and preparing to break. Callie begins to feel the pain in his muscles, sensing that his arm is truly going to be broken. While he desperately tries to escape, Skander continues saying he will tear him apart, and the boy grows increasingly desperate. However, he sees the wound inflicted earlier, and seeing a way out, he simply plunges his hand into Skander's wound, causing him to howl in pain, releasing Callie's arm, and he takes advantage of the situation. Callie tries to hit the prince in the face, making him take a step back and escaping the lock. However, Callie wonders if her ligament is stretched, seeing that her arm is limp. Skander is also in terrible condition, feeling a terrible pain in his thigh. The protagonist thinks he now understands how he feels, and Skander notices that the boy is truly resilient. Felipe thinks that he must be enjoying this, making someone from the royal family give their all. He starts hoping Callie is as good as his courage, but then Azali runs over and sits next to Felipe. He tells her she's late, and she starts apologizing. But when she looks down, she sees the protagonist is in a bad situation, and she worries about Callie. Felipe tells Azali that he heard Callie is a slave of his family, and she confirms it. He then says that if it's money, he'll give her whatever she wants, ordering her to sell Callie to him, and she ends up without. She doesn't understand why he's bringing this up out of nowhere, and he asks Azali to sell him Callie, because he thinks he can take better care of him than she can, and Callie is too big to be imprisoned in his mold. The girl gets so angry she trembles, saying she hopes it's just a joke from the prince, saying she's very aware that Callie is too good for her. However, she questions if he doesn't know that they're not just in a master-slave relationship. He asks if she's willing to marry him, wondering if she wasn't the one who simply sided with Skander back then. However, she says she'll do whatever Callie wants, be it freedom, fighting, or marriage, saying she'll do what Callie did for her. While she's there declaring her love for Callie, talking to his brother, Skander is getting beaten like a thief, and he admits that Callie is stronger than he thought, because pride is a luxury for the victor, and he thinks he must win at any cost, getting even more angry. Callie, seeing this worries him, as he can only strike with his right hand now, and he wonders if he should use his teeth to attack him, since his leg is also reaching its limit. He thinks that if he can beat Skander in this state, it will be a great feeling, becoming increasingly excited about the fight. The two clash, striving for the pinnacle of the fight, and Callie thinks he needs to win to regain his pride, as he has lived as Pacantai for almost 30 years. He dodges each of Skander's attacks, saying he will put all the years he lived as Callie into this fight, because his life as Callie is important. As Skander tries to grab him, the protagonist quickly ducks to attempt another strike, but Skander comes in with a knee strike, trying to hit the boy's head. However, Callie returns the knee strike with another, unbalancing Skander, and thus he lands another powerful punch to the prince's ribs, but the prince doesn't fall, attempting a counterattack on Callie, who dodges before he can react, and prepares to strike Skander's chin with full force, and so the protagonist thinks it will be the end if he succeeds. His chin, delivering his strongest punch to Skanny, tries to give it, but things don't go as he expected, because Skander is completely insane and blocks his punch with his head, and uses that same head to deliver a massive headbutt to Callie, making his nose bleed. Then he continues shouting that he's a descendant of the god of war, charging at the protagonist, grabbing him by the legs and throwing him far away, making the protagonist look like a test dummy. While Callie flies away, he slams his back to the ground and falls hard, unable to believe that the madman threw him so far. As he's almost losing consciousness, Azalea goes to him, and he can only beg her not to look at him with that tearful face. However, unlike how she always did, she wipes her tears, looking at him determinedly, telling Callie to bring him victory as always. And so he laughs and gets up once more, passing the soldiers and returning to the battle, once again facing that brute. And so he asks if Callie knows why he didn't fall, and the protagonist says it's because his head is just a decoration. He just took a blow to the head today. He says that's wrong, and that's because he's a descendant of the god of war, and therefore he won't lose, saying he has sacred blood in his body. But the protagonist says that on that day victory is his, because the goddess of fortune has just arrived. But as he sees Skander approaching with everything, he notices that he's spitting, and seeing that, he realizes it's the way to start a fight with the opponent from a distance. Remembering what the girl taught him last night, he thinks he's wrong, because Skander will do anything to win, because he thinks victory is his pride, and he actually spits in Callie's direction. But Callie quickly stops the spit with her hand, surprising him, and coming coming back with a huge punch. A punch hits Skander's chin, who wonders how he did it, and the protagonist says he hears the goddess's voice. Skander thinks it's nonsense, but ends up collapsing in front of the boy, who automatically falls too. Felipe gets up, saying that victory is his, and it was witnessed by the first prince of the empire, Felipe, the proud soldier of the empire, saying that Callie, the boxer, won that fight. The girl is so emotional that she cries again. Felipe says that the empire and the god of war recognize this, and they all kneel before the boy. Felipe simply leaves, turning and walking away, saying that he can take everything as the victor, and Callie finally has the right to faint. And after a while, the divine doctor goes to see the protagonist, saying that it seems only his leg is seriously injured, saying that both he and Skander are quite resilient, and for normal people it usually takes a month or more to recover, but he woke up in 3 days. And so the protagonist asks about the prince, and he says that this kid has suffered from so many illnesses since he was a baby, so he's practically stronger, and now he's eating everything he sees, besides Callie's injury. It was more serious than his, but he's still thinking about it. Prince. However, Callie himself can't even imagine the prince in a childish phase, and he questions how long it will take for his leg to heal. The doctor thinks that Callie's muscles are strong and very elastic, and that this must be the secret to his crazy strength and speed of recovery. He says that his injury is now quite serious, and even with rehabilitation, it will probably take a year. Callie thinks that's a long time, but the doctor asks if he wants him to just cut off his leg and put a prosthesis in. He apologizes, but the divine doctor gets angry that he sighed in front of him, telling him to take what he said into consideration. The protagonist agrees, but then bursts in, cursing Callie and asking if he looked at his age book, because if not, it wouldn't make sense for him to beat him in the end. The protagonist asks if it's that book, but says he took Prince Philip's, and he gets angry with his brother, because whether he's his brother or not, he'll make sure he crushes him to death. But Philip arrives, questioning if he's going to crush him, saying it's a good way to think about it, questioning whether he should relax his body for a while. But then he asks his brother how he can lend his book much more gently, and Philip says it's not fair for a boxer to fight against ring technique, asking if he'll be satisfied with that. Then he congratulates the protagonist for winning that fight, saying he's really happy that he managed to win. He also says he heard that the treatment for his leg will take at least a year, and the protagonist says he's thinking of another way to cure it so he can heal his leg faster, wondering what the prince is plotting this time. And then Philip says it's a great idea to think of another way, but there's a problem, because it's about his status and nationality, because foreigners like him and Azalea aren't allowed to stay in this empire for more than 3 months. And although it's not really such a strong law, because they respect each other's territory, it's different, happening inside the palace, because it's related to security issues, and unless he is as a diplomatic envoy, it's definitely illegal for a foreigner to stay for very long. But Skander says he doesn't have many foreign guests in the imperial palace, questioning what they should do about them. However, Philip looks at him, realizing he's ruining his plan, and Callie asks if he's saying there's no other way for him to receive treatment there. Philip says no, explaining that there is a way, but it involves something else. The protagonist questions him about saying he needs to be a free man, so Philip says that all foreigners there become experts in their fields and occupy important positions, which is why they can stay for a long time. And with his skill, it's possible he could appoint him as a martial arts instructor to his liking, but it's not within his rights to take someone else's slaves and give them a position as he pleases. So he tells Callie that he needs to become a free man, but Callie asks if he thinks the lady would give up a slave whose leg she insisted on healing so easily. However, Felipe says she will do it for him, or questions whether he is merely a slave to Azalea, saying that if he asks her, perhaps she will also give him other things besides freedom. Friend, calm down. I know you saw a guitar coming out from her room in the morning, but calm. And he even questions whether Callie wants to continue limping like that forever, questioning the boy's decision. And Felipe says that if it's difficult for him to say it himself, he'll do it for him. But Callie says that it's not necessary, and it's not something he should say through someone else's mouth. So Felipe thinks that Callie is an excellent boxer who can surpass Skander in a match. In other words, he can become a great assassin or his guard. And then he goes to Azalea, who is happy to see the boy, and he is surprised that everyone is looking at him there, and the two who were with him already understand the whole plan, saying that their business is over now, wanting to leave quickly to leave the two alone. And Callie questions why she feels that something is strange, and then Azalea asks how his condition is, and he says that he still can't move properly, but he's okay nonetheless. And then, the atmosphere becomes very strange between the two, and Callie wonders what she should say, questioning how she can do it. That night, the girl asks if it's something that embarrasses her, and Callie says that it's something she can trust left him with, even with his red face. She says that it might make her uncomfortable, but the protagonist says it will take at least a year to heal his leg, and so she says that they won't be able to go back together. However, the protagonist says that Prince Philippos said he needs to become a free man to receive treatment there, and foreigners need a position there to stay for a long time, but slaves can't have that position, even if the prince gives it to them. She understands immediately, saying she'll prepare the documents soon, but he tells her not to worry, because after he heals properly, he'll return, and they'll defeat the champion of his kingdom first, then the champion of the empire. But she says that the fugitive competition is only happening in the empire, and the protagonist says that there are more reasons to return, but she says he doesn't need to return because Prince Philippos can do more than she can. However, the protagonist says no, saying that Philippos doesn't have. What he needs is the same, whether in a kingdom or an empire. It doesn't change if he's a slave or a free man. From now on, he'll only do what he wants, and he'll definitely return. She only lets him do what he wants, congratulating the protagonist on his freedom. After a few days, he receives his letter of manumission, saying he's now a free man, but he feels nothing, and truly doesn't, which is important to him. Meanwhile, Salival says it was a short time, but it was an honor to have journeyed with Callie, and he also thanks her for everything. She says she'll retire soon and open a shop in Corrine, telling him to visit when he can. However, Zalia asks if he didn't come all the way there to find her, asking him to take good care of her leg, saying that she wants to take care of him, but he is no longer her slave. Then he asks her to return home safely, telling her not to be kidnapped by bandits like before. However, she says she will call him when she has many children with the bandit leaders, and now he says he is really worried. Meanwhile, he also speaks to Rovo, who is much bigger now, running towards him. And the protagonist asks her to take that little boy along too, but he questions the why, because if she takes Rovo, he'll be alone, but she says that if he's busy with his training, no one will take care of him. He mentions that there are many men in August who will look after Rovo, asking her to take him with her. He also tells Rovo to keep an eye on her when she's away, saying that he's smart and knows what he means, and he understands perfectly. Then she tells Callie that they're leaving, and Callie watches them go. However, it's said that his time in the Empire was longer than Callie expected, and he ended up spending 2 years there. This record wasn't preserved in imperial history. However, when Callie left the empire, Philippus was being referred to as emperor. Callie then says that 2 years ago, the former emperor abdicated the throne after the conquest of the north when his strength weakened. Then the first prince, Philippus, ascended as emperor, and Philippus fearlessly removed any opposition, even if it was of the same lineage as him, and during his reign, 4 of the 7 princes died, and the second prince, Ortez, who incited rebellion within the royal family due to dissatisfaction with the empire, died at the hands of Callie by order of Philippus. But the rumor said he was killed by barbarians. However, the protagonist is now talking to Philippus, asking if he's going to use that as an excuse to keep him there, saying that at the beginning he clearly said it was only for a year, calling him stubborn, and Philippus says that sometimes he misses his innocent side from 2 years ago, but the protagonist says he's tired of being deceived now, and so Philippus says it's a shame, because he would like him to stay there longer, but Callie questions what he's talking about, telling him to find a girl and get married, but Philippus says he won't marry, because he wants someone to become the next emperor, not based on royal blood, but based on their strength and intellectual ability, whether someone from a noble family or a commoner, and the protagonist just says he understands, wishing him good luck with everything, but then Philippus asks him to accept something, saying that the emblem signifies that he is one of the emperor's representatives, and usually only the envoy who received his decree carries it, but the protagonist will even the doctor questions whether he's just a martial arts instructor, saying he couldn't believe he could perfectly execute Philippus's missions. It seems like only yesterday he treated the boy's leg, and the protagonist says it was a terrible experience, and he won't go through it again. He explains that due to the state of medical technology, anesthesia in that place is known to damage the brain, and because of that, he chose to perform the surgery without anesthesia. Callie mentions that Philippus was curious about his ability to discern his true identity, but John says he doesn't think it's the right time to tell him. Callie says that if he finds out, he'll be excited instead of scared. Outside, some cadets approach Callie, asking if he's leaving now or calling him instructor. The protagonist explains that his disciples are in humanity, directly under Philippus, the Shadow Guard. They are all loyal, they share life and death were intertwined, and he grew quite attached to them, which is unfortunate. One of them asks the protagonist to take good care of himself and accept the gift, but the protagonist says they know he doesn't use a sword, and besides, it seems expensive. He says it's 3 months' salary for the 3 of them, but the protagonist still takes the sword, saying that if he has a son later, he will pass this sword on as a family heirloom. Philippus wishes Callie well, along with John and everyone there, asking him to be careful on his way back home. Then he also thinks of his conduct, Gondar, saying he can't say goodbye to him because he's now conquering the West. But now he says he's going, returning home. Then, in the western border town of Arzan, he arrives there. He remembers that Arzan is famous for its jewels, saying he thinks it will be a good gift for Azalea. So he stops a man, and John can be asked which shop sells the best jewels in Arzan. He says that the jewels in Arzan are the best anywhere. The protagonist goes to the shop, but says he wants a very special one, and so the man says he can try the auction house, because in reality all the shops and street vendors there only sell second-class stones. The protagonist notices that he changes his words very easily, so he actually goes to an auction house, but then the guards stop him at the door, saying he can't enter, saying he must pay at least 2,000 guilds. So the protagonist simply pulls out the money, shows it to him, and asks if he can enter now, and that man completely changes his attitude, saying he can enter. Inside, the auctioneer greets everyone, saying that it's a rumbai that Serlinsum worked on, and says that as they can see, it's a precious stone, which received the highest classification for its vibrant red color. Everyone starts bidding, increasing from 5,000 to 25,000, and then he complains from 25,000 to the highest, but Callie raises her hand, saying she'll bid 30,000 guilds, and everyone is shocked. Then one of them says that this is absurd, since he doesn't even have that much money, but then someone nearby raises their hand, offering 33, and the protagonist doesn't like it. That person is Count Bormal, the richest nobleman in the kingdom. With 33, the protagonist already looks at him very angrily. Then the person offering asks if anyone else will bid, and the protagonist says 40, promising it will be his. But the Count immediately bids 45, and he says he's sorry, explaining that he'll give it to his wife, and perhaps he should find a different gift for his mistress instead. The protagonist gets increasingly angry, thinking it would have been a perfect gift for Azalea, and says he should look for other stones. But as he leaves, several people start following him, that he says he thought he was being followed by a petty thief, but looking at how elegantly dressed he is, they're probably nobles. However, he immediately thinks it's been a long time since he's moved his body. Then the nobles approach him, asking where he got so much money, and the protagonist questions if he means what he's talking about. One of them confirms that's exactly what he's talking about, saying he'll take it back and give it to the person who stole it. However, the protagonist realizes they've been following him ever since. The auction house, getting pissed off because they have a pretty lame excuse, and he notices that there are 4 big guys and one talking nonsense, and it seems they don't have weapons either, and the protagonist then starts asking how a nobleman can act like a bandit, saying that he can see why Philippus wants to reform the empire, saying that they can all see upwards, but then that little nobleman sends his henchmen, telling them to teach the protagonist a lesson, and when they all arrive, the protagonist knocks down the first one with a single punch, and when he goes flying, everyone is scared shitless, and the protagonist says that he forgot to mention because he can't control his strength since so far he's only fought with the guy Doros, so he hopes they understand. If 2 years ago, when he was limping, crippled, and couldn't even put his right foot down, the guy was breaking trees with his bare hands, I don't even want to imagine what he can do now. After he piled up all those stomachs, the nobleman starts to get scared, and the protagonist appears behind him. He questions whether the protagonist knows who he is, trying to reveal his title, but Callie just gives him a hard punch, completely disorienting him. The protagonist says he doesn't care who he is, only that he knows he's a gangster disguised as a nobleman, and then he hits the nobleman's leg as well. The nobleman falls to the ground, begging the protagonist to wait. Then he asks if he's from this kingdom, and the nobleman questions how he knew. Callie says it's because he acts like one of them, saying that's great, and tells him everything he knows about Count Bormal. He says the Count is just a rich man, and unlike his father, who is the treasure of that kingdom, he has neither ambition nor skill. His family is an example of the saying, a rich man can perish in 3 generations, and he says the Count likes to travel. However, the protagonist says he doesn't need that kind of information, asking if he doesn't have any important information. But he also knows he's rich, and the little nobleman is completely lost. However, he says he enjoys boxing like all the other nobles in the kingdom, and the protagonist thinks that's perfect. At a lodging in Arzan, he says he liked it more than he thought, and didn't intend to gamble so recklessly just to satisfy his pride. It's all because of that mercenary, but it doesn't matter since he bought it. However, someone is knocking on the door, and the Count becomes alert, opening it abruptly and asking why it's so noisy, questioning what's happening. He notices it's the protagonist and asks if he still remembers him, asking if they can talk for a second. The Count says he's not stealing, but he was just looking at the stone. However, the protagonist asks if he likes boxing, and he immediately immediately becomes interested. He says he thought he was a mercenary, but it seems he's a boxer, questioning if he came there because he holds a grudge against the protagonist. The auction takes place, but the protagonist denies it, saying he didn't come there for the auction. However, it's true he wants the precious stone because he knows a woman who would look good with it. The Count understands, but 4,000 guilds is all he has. He says he'd sell it now for 50,000, but the protagonist simply says he'll use his fists to get the 50,000, stating he'll fight in his name for 10,000 guilds per fight. The Count asks what the Count thinks if he loses. Even if only once, he will give all the money, and he will give up that precious stone, and he says it seems a little reckless, but he won't make a deal without basis, and he's confident in his boxing skills, and also because boxing is a strong stimulant for hungry historians, and they know how to satisfy their desires, and living peacefully under the strong shield of the empire. They gradually began to crave more decadent and stimulating amusements. They were free individuals who had tried everything, and had nothing else they wanted to do, and that's the best description of the Count, and so he thinks it will be fun, but only now does he remember to ask the protagonist's name, and he introduces himself as Callie. Then 2 days later, arriving at a tent with a bunch of nobles, gathering to watch the show, and one of them asks the Count if he has a boxer named after him, saying he's eager to see him, and the Count says it's something to alleviate boredom, and they immediately look at the protagonist's opponent, thinking he has a difficult opponent, and the Count says his opponent is the strongest boxer in Arzen, and he says that even if he loses, he can just go back to his field. The protagonist says it's been a long time since he's fought, mentioning that his opponent is as tall as Kitty, but has long arms and legs with well-balanced muscles, and judging by the scars, he must be experienced in that area. The referee starts the fight, and the protagonist immediately charges forward. The opponent notices his speed, and looking at Callie's gaze, feels like he's being watched. He finds it unpleasant and lunges at the boy, trying to hit him, but Callie steps aside, saying she's sure Kitty is taller than him. The protagonist then decides he needs to close the distance, giving it his all in that move, getting close and startling his opponent. When the opponent is startled, he throws a completely wrong punch, but the protagonist manages to defend himself. The opponent says he thought Kitty would keep his distance because of his long arms and legs, but he believes he's the strongest fighter in Arzen because of his punch. And the pressure mounts, and the bald man comes at him with everything, preparing another punch, and the protagonist realizes it will be easy, dodging and hitting him in the ribs, making him vomit and almost lose consciousness, and everyone is shocked by that, especially the opponent, noticing that he has closed the distance, but Callie says that he won't let him do anything, getting close again and hitting him in the chest, and he falls to his knees breathless, and thus Callie simply wins, giving the victory to Count Bormal, and everyone is surprised, especially the Count, finding it incredible, and he gets more and more excited, and the protagonist thinks he's sure this will satisfy. And later, the Count is already completely drunk, saying that he should have seen everyone's faces, shocked and surprised. Callie simply says he's glad he's satisfied, and the Count says he'd like to make him his personal boxer, but he's returning to his hometown, asking where he's been all this time and what he's done. The protagonist explains that he was a hand-to-hand combat instructor in the Empire and is returning, asking him to take good care of the jewels. The Count agrees, saying he has to leave early tomorrow and should rest. As the Count falls asleep, the protagonist thinks he's a nice person, just a little dim-witted, but then someone calls him, and he realizes that the head of the guard has called him. He asks the protagonist explains why, and then says that they will meet frequently for a while, so he can feel free to do so. However, the protagonist finds this strange, as the guy suddenly dislikes him. The protagonist then mentions that the next day, the Count left Arzen to prepare for the next battle. While they were leaving, the head of the guard said they would camp there that night. The protagonist is surprised that he wants to camp there, and the chief says they should come to a more open place, as it's a forest, surrounded by fences on all sides. He thinks the moonlight might reach there at night, even if only a little, and there's still some sun. But the chief tells him to mind his own business, saying that whether they go further or not, it's all forest, and that it's better to leave tomorrow. However, the protagonist realizes he's being very stupid, but says it's alright, mentioning that he's been strangely irritated since yesterday, asking if he did something to offend him. He simply decides to sleep during the night. He hears someone saying, "Be careful." Ines wonders why there's so much noise, and someone asks what they're doing. The protagonist realizes it's the Count, and then a man appears with a knife, saying he has nothing against the protagonist, telling him to just think he was unlucky. However, the protagonist quickly takes off his blanket, throws it in the aggressor's face, making him drop his sword and punch him, knocking him out. He wonders what just happened, and he sees that it's a man dressed in armor. The Count questions why he's trying to kill him, and asks the head of the guard if it's all because of the jewel, saying he'll give him as many as he wants. However, the head of the guard says the Count is stupid, saying he'll tell him why they're doing this as his gift for the afterlife, and that it's because his nephew is old enough to inherit his uncle's fortune. Then the Count questions what he said, asking how the boy he raised as his son could do this. Then the head of the guard says he'll first get that jewel, and Count is shocked that he will die at the hands of the people he trusted so much. But then a stone comes crashing down on them, hitting the head of the guard right in the face. The protagonist says he'll have trouble if he takes that jewel, as he reserved it first, and he drags the man who came to kill him along. He thinks there are 10 heavily armed guards, and there's no way they can face them unarmed. So all the guards prepare to fight, and he puts on a gauntlet, saying that this time he really needs to use it, drawing his sword, saying that in truth, he doesn't really have the confidence to use it. Then the head of the guard tells one of his men to kill the boxer, but as the man approaches, the protagonist manages to defend against his attack. But even defending with a sword, he prepares to throw a punch, hitting the man in the face, quickly breaking his jaw and some of his teeth, and the protagonist asks the Count if he wants to live, questioning him. The Count replies that of course, and the protagonist is surprised, saying that if it's that boy, everything will be alright. The protagonist then orders the boy to cross the street and run to him, but the boy says he can't. The protagonist says that if the boy can't come over there, he needs to finish them off, but with that distance, he thinks it will be difficult to manage. So he says that if the boy still wants to live, he must move, ordering Count Volmar to go past them. And the Count simply dies of fright, and the Count's life was like a well-paved road, without any obstacles, smooth and tranquil in itself, having lived comfortably in a world created by his ancestors, and he had never achieved anything through his own efforts. Callie's words pierced his heart, which had lived like this for so long, and he simply began to shout, brandishing his sword and pushing through everyone. The leader of the guard called them stupid idiots, asking what they were doing, ordering the Count to stop. He almost reached the Count to strike him, but then when he released that cut, the protagonist realized his right arm was severed. Even so, the Count managed to run away, running to the protagonist, even in pain, grabbing his hand, begging Callie to save him. Callie said that he had a good spirit carrying the Count around, thinking that if they delayed, he would bleed to death, so he had to run. However, the leader of the guard ordered the archer to shoot them and not lose him, and the archer did indeed shoot an arrow. The protagonist told him to wait a moment. At that moment, and just as the arrow gets close enough, he simply enters the zone, managing to turn and hit the arrow, breaking it. The other arrows also come, but the boy continues deflecting each one with his bare hands, and none of them believe it, least of all the protagonist himself, because he is using 100% of his brain to do this. Then the leader of the guard orders them not to stand still, and to pursue them, and they all run towards Callie, trying to catch him, but he throws the Count on his back and carries him away. 3 days later in the western desert, the protagonist is frustrated because he doesn't believe that the surrounding terrain has changed overnight. He says that they entered the desert to avoid being tracked, and his plan is to enter the kingdom through the desert, but the desert was more mysterious than he thought. At that moment, the Count begins to say that this is wrong, saying that he can keep the jewels now. However, Callie says that if he has energy to complain, he should use it to walk and stop talking. Then he hears someone trotting, and when he looks to the side and sees several men from the desert tribe. He notices they are coming from that direction, telling the Count to go the other way. However, he looks back and sees there are more around. The protagonist realizes they have been completely surrounded, but unlike what they were expecting, they are taken to a tent and offered plenty of food. One of the desert men tries to speak to the protagonist, but he asks if he wants them to eat. He keeps talking, but they don't understand. The Count says they will eat later, and that's why they are trying to fatten them up now, because they say the desert tribe are cannibals. Count, you have plenty of meat, don't you? Let's go. He doesn't need that much. Okay, you lost a little, but you can still make a good roast. However, the protagonist doesn't care about that, wanting to eat first. The Count questions what that thing in front of them is, and Column says it looks like a wooden sculpture, and they are skilled. One of them says it's can, and the protagonist asks what kind of can, and he says it's can of can. The protagonist says he doesn't know what it is, but thinks they love something called can, because that thing is all over the village. A few days later, the protagonist sees that they want him to eat again, thinking it's his stomach. It's going to explode, but the Count begins to question how he can continue living so, saying he's too tired. Column motivates him to endure, because many people have lived without both arms. However, he says that not everyone is as strong as the boy, but Column says that he wasn't born strong, and nobody becomes strong as if they were born that way. He asks if he knew that even the Emperor of the Empire almost died in his mother's womb, and whether emperor or slave, everyone is born with their fists closed, and besides, he still has his left arm. But then, while they are in this situation, situation, the desert men enter and throw them both out. The Count says he knew, and they are trying to eat them, but the protagonist tells him not to touch him. However, he ends up being knocked unconscious, and after being knocked unconscious, they are taken to an altar. The Count questions what they are doing, and after they are tied up, they see the desert men worshipping at the entrance of a cave. The Count questions what they are doing, because they are running away. Then he senses a presence inside, so he orders. Callie wakes up because there's a strange sound coming from the cave, but he notices that Callie doesn't wake up, and so he thinks that now it only depends on it. Hey, I'm telling you, Callie, get away from that Count, or that unlucky crazy guy, run, get far away from that guy. And so a little later, Callie finally wakes up, and he asks the Count where they are. The Count is happy that Callie has finally woken up, and then he sees the Count there questioning what just happened. The Count says that when he fainted, they dragged them there and tied them up, and that there are monsters living in that cave. The protagonist questions what he means by monsters, and then a loud sound comes from inside. The Count asks if he heard that, saying he's sure there was a creature watching them all night. The protagonist thinks it must be the Khan the desert tribes were talking about, and that they are the sacrifices. But then the Count questions why he hasn't eaten them yet, and the protagonist says he thinks he didn't want to eat cold food, thinking he wants to warm them with salt first. However, he sees that the Count is very ill, and he says he thinks he just did something rewarding for the first time in his life, and all of Callie's ropes are broken. The Count says that if he unties his rope now, they won't notice, so he tells Callie to run away, saying that he's not someone who should die in a place like that. However, the protagonist only thanks the Count, who removes all the ropes, breaking them and preparing for whatever is coming. From inside, he sees a gigantic monkey with gold on its feet and hands, completely arrogant, and it immediately starts breaking a human bone. The protagonist comes face to face with it, but the Count tells Callie to run. Callie questions what nonsense this is, saying it's just a monkey preparing himself, wrapping his paws and challenging the monkey to a fight. But the Count tells him to run, because the difference in power is great. However, the protagonist only thinks that the difference must be with him, the ogre this time, thinking it's just a monkey, except that it's bigger and has long fangs. And so the monkey roars in front of the protagonist, and he challenges the monkey to a fight. But the monkey actually comes, throwing the first punch and sending Callie flying. And he notices that his reach is greater than he thought, however. He takes some sand and throws it in the monkey's eyes, making it close, and it goes up, hits the protagonist, punches the monkey in the face with all his might, but the monkey barely moves. He thinks he put all his weight into the blow, and the monkey barely even gets a nosebleed. Then the monkey grabs him by the feet and throws him into the cave. He lands on top of all those bones and is surprised because he really doesn't have a chance of winning. Now there's a bone piercing his body, and he immediately thinks that if he pulls it out, he'll first die from hemorrhage. So he realizes that his best chance is to attack more than once. As the monkey comes at him, he notices that the monkey isn't attacking him because he's holding a bone with a clever trap. If this battle lasts longer, he'll be at a disadvantage. So he goes after the monkey, who counters with a punch, but then manages to throw one of those bones at the monkey. It doesn't penetrate the tough shell, but the protagonist thinks that this time he needs to do something, giving the bone another tap and piercing the monster's tough skin. But King Kong slaps him right in the face, the protagonist throwing him aside. But before he falls, Callie retaliates with another punch to the bone, digging even deeper into the monkey's flesh. Condi is surprised to see Callie fighting that thing, questioning how he gets stronger while fighting, and the two scream like wild animals. Callie then runs towards him and shoulder bumps the monkey, hitting his chest several times, but the monkey raises both hands, almost crushing Callie. However, Callie jumps under the monkey, passing between its legs. When he emerges on the other side, he grabs the ropes on his wrists and lunges forward, but he can barely see anymore. The monkey takes advantage of this to strike Callie's abdomen with full force, causing him to spit blood. Now that his hand is there, Callie grabs it, stopping the monkey's movement, wrapping its head with a rope. And as he does this, he jumps onto the monkey's other arm and moves behind, strangling the creature with all his might, causing the monkey to suffocate. But the monkey is intelligent and runs backward, hitting Callie on the back, and begins to thrash around the cave, trying to remove the rope from his neck and make the boy let go. Callie pulls with all his might, but he begins to feel pain because of the bone. Even so, he continues to hold on, tightening his grip, and takes the opportunity to do something else. He simply grabs the bone embedded in his rib and plunges it into the monkey's eyes, killing him brutally. After winning the battle, he emerges victorious, returning to Condi, who is overjoyed and asks if Callie is alright. Callie asks if he seems alright, saying he will release him, so he should be quiet, please. And when he releases Condi, Condi says he can't believe he's back after defeating that monster. But then Callie gets worse and worse and falls to his knees until Condi picks him up and starts carrying the boy. As he carries Callie through the desert, he sees another army, and he wonders if they are the assassins who came after them, or the desert tribe, but he thinks it's too large to be a group of assassins, and he notices the Empire's coat of arms. And when he thinks about escaping, they send Kandi Tor, saying they are from the Western Conquest Army of the Empire, orders Kandi to identify himself, and he says he is the Lord of County Boromel, Jensen Boromel, and so they question what his problem is, since he is even missing an arm, and they start laughing, but then someone tells them not to laugh, saying that it would be rude, talking to Kandi, saying that they heard there is a beast there worshipped by the barbarians, asking if he has seen it, saying that he is the leader of the Western Conquest Army of the Empire, Iskandar, and so Kandi tries to talk to him, but Iskandar notices that one there is Kali, asking what he was doing there, and then after taking the boy to be cared for, he gets angry because that brat defeated the monkey first, and he is angry because he should have been the one to defeat the god of the barbarians. But then Kandi asks if he knows Kali, and he says of course, looking very angry at the protagonist, and he gets angrier and angrier, even throwing the boy off the bed, shaking him to his feet. The doctor is shocked, telling Iskandar that he's still in critical condition. However, Iskandar says he won't die just because he has a hole in his stomach, because that brat is a monster himself. He continues calling for Kali, who wakes up without knowing what's happening, and when he sees that ugly thing in front of him, he simply punches Iskandar in the face. Iskandar gets furious, saying that he treats him with all his heart, and he still does this to him. The doctor goes crazy, saying he's not treating the boy. When Iskandar leaves the tent, the protagonist is surprised to see him there, and questions what he's doing. Iskandar says he said he's going to conquer the Western Desert, and they never told him he was leaving the Empire. He's furious that the boy even left without saying goodbye. The protagonist questions what he would gain by saying goodbye to someone with a brain of muscles like his, but the two continue. While Kandi is arguing, he questions how he can behave like that with such a large figure. After a while, the protagonist speaks to Kandi, saying that they will start walking again as soon as the wound heals. However, Kandi remains quiet, and the protagonist finds this strange. Kandi then says that honestly, he is afraid to return because the nephew he raised as his own son tried to kill him. He still wants to know what his nephew has to say, as he truly wants to hear it directly. The protagonist agrees, saying they will see the face of that ungrateful boy. Meanwhile, at Kandi's castle, his nephew is sleeping peacefully, snoring. However, the protagonist arrives and speaks to him, startling him. Kali asks what is happening, and Kali speaks to that ungrateful brat, who is sleeping soundly after trying to kill his uncle. And then he starts yelling for someone, but Kali grabs him, asking if he knew it took him about a month to get there, saying they'll finish this very quickly. And after the protagonist grabs him, he smashes the door open, and the guards outside ask who he is, and he says he's an assassin, asking what they're going to do, pointing a dagger at the boy's neck. Then they notice he's holding the Lord hostage, saying they need to save him, but the boy tells them to get out of the way, asking if they want to see him die, and Kali says that's exactly right, saying they're going straight to the main gate. And in that, he continues sending all the guards are told to leave, because if they don't, their master will die. However, the boy speaks to Kali, telling him to look around, and he is already surrounded. Kali says it's not too late for him to leave, asking if he wants money, but the protagonist says he doesn't. He orders all the guards to open the gate, but the nephew orders them not to open it. The protagonist then speaks to the mini-count, telling him to choose between his left or right arm. The mini-count is surprised, but the protagonist, seeing that he is surprised but doesn't respond, chooses for him, breaking his right arm. The mini-count says that if they don't open the gate, he will break the other arm. The boy then orders the gate to be opened immediately, and when it opens, it's his uncle outside, who is very angry. He orders them to lower their weapons, and anyone who touches his friend will be executed. The mini-count is surprised that this is really the count, as they never imagined he could say something like that, saying he always thought he was just a shy person. And so the boy tells them not to listen to him, for he is the count now, but then he tells Baigan to shut up, asking how he dares to try to assassinate him, and now he is still pretending to be the count, and then he makes an announcement before everyone, saying that Jensen Bormer will duel with Baigan Bormer, and the winner of that duel will become the count of the territory. However, Baigan already thinks that he cannot fight with his broken arm, saying that this duel is unfair, saying that now his right arm is in that condition. However, he realizes that his uncle doesn't have a right arm, and he says that he doesn't either, saying that it's fair now, and so the boy takes the sword, but the count begins to realize that he really wanted to kill him, and becomes very angry, preparing to really finish Baigan off, and he is surprised, questioning what happened, because he is feeling that his uncle is no longer afraid to die. And with that pressure, he drops the sword and falls to his knees, begging his uncle to spare him, saying that he was wrong, but the count, lacking ideas, orders the guards to take that sinner to prison, and they all agree. It is said that Baigan's rebellion ended in less than 2 months, and the count regained his original position and executed all the traitors. A few days later, seeing the protagonist leave, the count says that he has a familiar name, asking if if he is the ogre hunter. The protagonist continues to feel aversion to that shameful nickname, but then the Count says he almost forgot, saying he did it hastily, but not carelessly, hoping he likes it, giving him that ruby. The protagonist tells him not to regret it later, saying that he didn't pay enough for the fight, but the Count says that he already paid him enough, bidding farewell to Callie. Meanwhile, at the August mansion, Zelia is completely sad. Then they say that Lord Getaro has arrived there for her, and she tells him to come in, and when he enters, the girl greets him. Then Getaro says that it's been a long time since he's seen the Baroness of Aguas, saying that she's still beautiful, and that he's the leader of the merchant group. He says he took a look at the barony before coming to her mansion, and it's a difficult time for the farmer there, and public sentiment isn't good either, and the situation of her barony isn't good either. The girl thinks of Getaro, saying that he has a plebeian origin, but has become a powerful merchant, and he's famous for making other people falling into poverty, and she says she would like to, but because he's there now, and he says it's time to collect the 30,000 guild she borrowed last winter, saying she'd wait until autumn, but he says he doesn't think she'll have enough money by then, and so she thinks about the 30,000 guild, and he says that with the interest, it's become 35,000 guild, and in fact it would have become 40,000, but he says he gave her a discount, so she gets angry, asking if he's joking with her, because the interest reached 5,500 a year, and 2 years ago, after Azalea returned from her trip as a merchant, Godolph became bedridden and was ill and unable to get up due to his babyish habits, and also due to her incompetence in financial management. He died leaving a huge debt, and even after using the money earned on the trip as a merchant and other funds, the debt hasn't decreased, and besides, the money she borrowed from various merchants and other families still hasn't been paid, and she speaks to Lord Jeter saying she can't pay now. She asks him to wait until autumn, but then he asks what she can do, saying she can sell him the fighters from her training center. However, the girl says she can't do that, because even if they sell all the boxers, they still won't be able to pay off the debt, and if they sell the boxers, who are their only source of income, something will go bankrupt. However, he says that if she doesn't have money and doesn't want to sell her fighters, he questions exactly what he's doing, saying that for the good of her people, she should do everything she can to solve these problems. The girl starts to get frustrated, but then the door opens, and she looks at the person entering, saying that she's having an important conversation and wasn't supposed to let anyone in. However, the protagonist says he'll wait outside at first, but when he heard what happened, he couldn't ignore it, calling her Miss, but he thinks he should now call her Baroness. She's surprised to see Callie there, so Jetaro says he's talking to his boss about something important. Now he thinks Callie just looks like a useless boxer, and the protagonist asks how much she owes that man, and she tells Callie to stop, saying it's none of his business, but then he says it's 35,000 guild, asking if it's the first time he's heard of such a huge amount, but the protagonist tells him to grab it, throwing that bag of gold in Jetaro's face, saying there's 40,000 gold in there, saying he can use the extra 5,000 for medical expenses, simply arriving from afar after being gone for so long, and putting it on the table to solve everyone's problem. Simply absurd. And if you like this chapter, my friend, you have to read the next one, because things are only getting worse, improving, and now that man is free, renowned, and with his path open, I really want to see this romance unfold. So it only depends on you. Smash that like button, comment what you want the next part to be, and I'll bring the story to the end, and I'll see you there. Bye.